Imagine being so addicted to a game that you spent a full 10 years just to reach the final boss room, and now when you finally get there, you discover that it was all just a test to determine whether you are worthy of stepping into this world or not. What's more, you become the barbarian character you chose to complete the game. This is the story of our MC, a guy who was always weak, spent a lot of time in the hospital, and was addicted to gaming just like me. However, he grew frustrated because good games weren't being released like they used to be. Finally, he found a forum discussing a new game. The game was said to be very different from others, requiring 100% effort from the player. The game's name was Dungeons & Stone, an indie RPG with 2D graphics. At first, our boy didn't find the game exciting because it was available only in English, but since it was free, he decided to give it a try. When it was time to select a character, there were several options: human, dwarf, elf, barbarian, and furry. There was also a mysterious option with 3 question marks, which seemed to be a random or secret character. He randomly selected the barbarian, thinking he wouldn't play the game for long. Initially, the game didn't seem impressive to him, but within minutes, he was completely hooked, losing track of time. The game featured unique classes and mechanics. Some were highly useful, while others were completely useless. You had to form alliances with NPCs, and if you died, you had to start all over again. At first, this mechanic felt exciting, but as he kept dying repeatedly, he grew frustrated. Despite this, he refused to give up. He played the game in the hospital. Then, during his time as a civil servant, through college, and even while working a job, through it all, he never stopped playing Dungeons & Stone. But despite his persistence, he kept dying again and again. 9 long years passed like this, and now he had finally reached the final boss room. After reaching the Abyss Gate, he breathed a sigh of relief and even celebrated, thinking that no one else could have dedicated 9 years to this game like he did. Now, the biggest question was whether to enter the boss room or not. When he selected yes, the game warned him that he might not be able to return and asked if he was sure. The warning felt almost as if the game itself was cautioning him, but the protagonist didn't care and confirmed his decision. As soon as he selected yes, the game began loading, and he started imagining what the final boss might be like. Then the game revealed something shocking. It told him that reaching the Abyss Gate only marked the completion of the tutorial. The protagonist was stunned. How could the game consider this a tutorial? His frustration grew even more as the game text suddenly changed to Korean. Angry, he thought about all the time he had wasted. At that moment, the game confirmed his target, and strange light began emanating from his monitor. The light engulfed him completely, and he felt a sharp pain as his body was pulled in. His consciousness started fading, and in the distance he heard a voice. The voice grew louder and louder, congratulating young warriors for stepping into a sacred realm to become true warriors. When he opened his eyes, he realized that everything had changed. Wherever he looked, there were torches, and around him stood strong, muscular barbarians. His own body felt completely different, fit, covered in hard muscles and tattoos. Above all, an old-ass jacked geezer was shouting, asking everyone to pick their weapons. That's when he realized he had become the very barbarian character he had selected in the game. The old man continued calling warriors forward to pick their armaments. The first one was Karok, the third son of Vannon, who chose a double-headed axe. As soon as he selected his weapon, it was announced that he had become a warrior. Then another warrior was called forward. One by one, everyone started choosing their weapons. The old man blessed them, saying, "May the grace of Raphonia be with you, young warriors." At that moment, the protagonist finally understood that he was truly inside the world of Dungeons & Stone. Not only had he become a barbarian, but he was also now living as the character he had chosen. As he tried to process what had happened, someone nearby muttered, "This can't be real." A terrified barbarian standing next to him said aloud that they were all inside the Dungeons & Stone game. Hearing this, the protagonist realized he wasn't the only one trapped in this strange world. Suddenly, the old barbarian shouted, "Who spoke? Was it you?" The protagonist, shocked, screamed that it wasn't him, and angrily glared at the person who had actually spoken. The old man stared at the person and said, "It was you, wasn't it?" The barbarian quickly asked, "Are we really inside Dungeons & Stone?" Without hesitation, the old man walked straight up to him and decapitated him. The old man then shouted, "Kadua's son, Orm was possessed by an evil spirit." He ordered the rest of the barbarians to erase everything the evil spirit had said from their minds and continue with the ceremony. The protagonist suddenly understood 3 critical pieces of information. First, people like him who had entered this game world were seen as evil spirits. Second, if anyone found out about his true nature, he would be killed. Third, if he had spoken earlier, his own head would now be lying on the ground. The old man then called for the 4th son of Senek to step forward. Seeing this situation, the protagonist grew increasingly anxious as people were being called one by one. Worse, those like him were being summoned as well. He devised a plan. If no one stepped forward within 2 seconds of their name being called, he would go instead. Soon, a name was announced. Bjorn, son of Jandel. The protagonist counted 1, 2. When no one came forward, he decided to step out. It was then revealed that his name was Bjorn, the son of Jandel. As the protagonist stepped forward, he noticed the old man glaring at him. The old man instructed him to choose any weapon he liked. There were several options to pick from. The weapon chosen by the protagonist caught the old man's attention. It was a shield. The protagonist believed the shield was the best option. Meanwhile, outside the game, the computer automatically updated with a notification. Object's overall level increased by +24, and this information was sent to the administrator. We were also shown the protagonist status. When he had initially chosen the barbarian class, he had picked a sword because it looked powerful. However, there was a major problem. He kept dying repeatedly, just like a noob. Even monsters seemed confused by how often he died. He tried two-handed axes, maces, hammers, everything, but the results were always the same. He would enter berserk mode and die again. One day, while wandering through a town, he came across a shield. It was different. He then realized that the barbarian class had high vitality, which made it perfect for tanking. Initially, learning how to use the shield was challenging because it took time to master the skills associated with it. But later, when he began defeating stronger monsters, he became almost invincible. In fact, the barbarian class turned out to be completely overpowered, which is why he chose the shield. With the ceremony complete, the gates to the labyrinth opened. The town housing the labyrinth was called Rafdonia. On the leader's orders, everyone rushed inside. They were all moving together, but had no idea where they were going. Suddenly, the person leading them turned around and admitted, "I've forgotten the way." Angered, everyone forced him to resign from his temporary leader position. Next, Einar, the second daughter of Fenelon, took the lead. The protagonist observed the situation quietly. A moment later, Einar announced that she too had forgotten the way. She looked dejected, and the protagonist realized this couldn't continue. However, he also couldn't afford to stand out too much. He pulled her aside and pointed toward a group that seemed to be heading toward the labyrinth. He suggested they follow that group. Einar understood his point and quickly informed everyone that she now knew the way. Shortly after, they found the labyrinth entrance. The protagonist began to wonder whether entering was the right decision. He considered leaving the barbarian group entirely. His life in the other world had been spent sick in bed. He had never fought before. Could he really defeat monsters here? At the very least, he needed to pay the game's taxes. In Dungeons & Stone, taxes were mandatory after the age of 20. Those who didn't pay were literally killed. There were two ways to earn money: enter the labyrinth to fight monsters, or take humble jobs in bars or markets. But there was a problem. As a barbarian, his reputation was that of a wild and destructive individual. This was due to the game setting. On the upside, barbarians were given weapons from the start. The downside was that the labyrinth only opened once a month, and there were just 10 minutes left before it closed. The protagonist was still stuck in his dilemma. Suddenly, Einar grabbed his hand and pulled him forward, urging him to hurry. The portal was shrinking. He told her to go ahead, assuring her that he would follow. Before leaving, she thanked him. He said there was no need, but she insisted she wanted to learn how to be as smart as him. She had never seen such an intelligent barbarian and aspired to be like him. He thought to himself that she would have to be reborn in another class to achieve that, as barbarians were inherently foolish. Not wanting to hurt her feelings, he simply said, "Just think and act like a normal person." She happily thanked him again and promised to reward him if he returned alive from the labyrinth. He wondered what kind of reward she would give and wondered whether something might develop between them. However, what stuck with him was the phrase, "if you return alive." Barbarians in this game were not afraid of death. They didn't care about it. The protagonist asked her, "Are you afraid of dying?" Einar ponders for a while and asks, "Isn't it obvious?" Yes, she is afraid, but she is a born warrior. If you don't know how to fight, you're not a barbarian. This realization makes it clear to her that she has to enter the labyrinth. So be it. Being a barbarian, she has learned to conquer her fears. Now she moves deeper inside. In the dungeon, visibility is almost zero. When we talk about dungeons and stones, our boy is a veteran. He knows there should be crystals on the walls to at least light some of the way. But here he realizes he's been thrown into sheer darkness. This has never happened before in his 9 years of gaming experience. He proceeds cautiously, feeling the walls as he moves. As he senses that his pace is too slow, he steps into a bear trap. Nearly screaming in pain, he stifles his voice, knowing that an enemy might be nearby. And guess what? Our boy is right. Hidden in the darkness is a small but sinister creature. The worst part, these creatures are cunning and only attack when you're severely weakened. Despite the pain and frustration, he chastises himself for whining. Instead, he shouts, challenging the goblin for a fight. Standing tall, despite his numb leg, which has been trapped, protagonist anger intensifies. He curses the goblin. Just then, he hears the creature's footsteps, confirming that his shouting is working. Our boy pretends to run, baiting the creature. As he walks, it walks, and he stops, it stops. Seeing this, our boy devises a new plan. He collapses entirely, playing dead to fool the goblin. The creature stands at a distance, watching to confirm if his target is truly lifeless. Then it starts throwing stones at him, testing if he's alive. This enrages our boy. He realizes that this goblin might be even smarter than the barbarian who failed to find the labyrinth secrets. As the goblin approaches, our boy makes a critical error. He misses an attack. To make matters worse, the goblin laughs at him, mocking his failure. Protagonist's blood boils. Driven by sheer rage, his body reacts instinctively, attacking the goblin repeatedly. He might have destroyed it completely. That's the true strength of a barbarian. Raw, untamed madness. After defeating the goblin, our boy gains experience points, and the creature's body vanishes, leaving behind a small crystal, the game's currency. This 9th grade magical gem is worth only as much as a piece of bread. It's now crystal clear. This is a world of dungeons and monsters, a land of familiar landscapes, and various game races. Our boy realizes this is the same game he played for 9 years. But if this is his new reality, he will only find out by dying, dragging himself, leaving trails of blood. Our boy crawls for what seems like 10 miles. At one point, he sees a light at the end of the cave. Just as he's about to give up, he notices a group of people passing. By now, our boy is on the verge of death with only 2% life remaining. Bjorn tries to speak, but his low health prevents him. The group questions how a beginner could have made it this far, as it seems impossible. Bjorn, irritated, feels an urge to punch the helpers. The group leader remains calm and asks someone named Racina to heal the barbarian, but Racina refuses without reason. The leader, expecting this, asks another member to offer a potion. The healer reluctantly agrees, explaining that divine powers might be needed later, but potions could suffice for now. The potion is poured on Bjorn's foot, which regenerates rapidly, but comes with excruciating pain. Bjorn screams in agony, but soon his foot is as good as new. He stands up, though this healing wasn't free. The group now wants information. They questioned, how did a beginner like him end up here? Bjorn honestly admits he doesn't know. He just stumbled into the dungeon. Palladino says this phenomenon only occurs once in 100 years. Bjorn laments his terrible luck. After gathering all the information, the group said that he won't need to pay for the potions because in this labyrinth, time is money. Bjorn finds it odd that these people are investing so much time in him. Still, he feels good about surviving. The group moves in the direction Bjorn came from, following a blood trail. After a while, the potion vendor remarks that Barbarian is lucky. The blonde guy agrees, mentioning he endured such trials at the beginning of the game, saying it's not something ordinary. The woman adds that the red-haired guy avoided using potions, and the leader ended up saving Protagonist instead. The potion vendor doesn't deny this, but points out that the priest also did the same. The environment becomes tense. While exchanging harsh words, they begin to speculate about how far that barbarian's blood has spread. Archer wonders whether this was truly luck for Barbarian. The group continues walking until they finally stop, facing the portal to the labyrinth's second floor. Seeing this, the group feels elated. However, as they are about to enter the portal, the woman says stop, and asks if what they see lying there is Barbarian's saddle. The old man uses light magic to illuminate the path they had traveled. The blood trail is still visible, shocking everyone. The old man asks the leader how far that barbarian managed to travel. The blonde guy estimates about 10 miles. This realization dawns on the group. If this individual managed to crawl so far alone, he must possess monstrous strength. The red-haired man shivers at the thought, wondering if he could have endured such a pain himself. He recalls seeing Barbarian extending his right hand and showing a magic gam. This means that Barbarian crawled this far, unsure if he'd survive, yet never let go of his bargaining tool as he desperately clung to life. The red-haired immediately retracts his earlier statements and even asks his teammates if they remember Barbarian's name. Until now, everyone had assumed barbarians are a mindless race bent on slaughter. But this individual seems different. Switching back to our boy, he fights goblins, defeating them using only his shield and fists. He learns their patterns and tackles traps scattered along the way. When goblins attack from behind, he turns and beats them with a shield. However, he faces one problem: hunger. The tribe leader had given him a bag of food, but it tore apart, leaving him with only 2 out of 7 pieces of bread. Realizing he must ration carefully, he eats a bit of bread, remarking how delicious it is. But now he is thirsty, wondering where he might find water in this dungeon. He reflects on how the game didn't require drinking water. Now in this real-life scenario, the challenge feels much harder. Bjorn, frustrated, gets up to search for water. Eventually, he hears the sound of running water and spots someone drinking in a corner. As Bjorn approaches, the person leaves immediately. He then took a seat and started counting his crystals, finding he had about 40. But now a new problem arises: fatigue. He knows he needs sleep. In the dungeon, there are 2 ways to sleep. The first is simply to lie down and leave your fate to God. The second method is a bit more effective. Choose a sleeping partner. But the protagonist didn't expect that everyone would turn him down, which made him pissed off. Though he gets angry at almost anything, suddenly someone calls out to him. It's a guy who is smiling, and his name is Han. He asks if the protagonist is really looking for a sleeping partner, and explains that it's just for taking care of each other while sleeping. Bjorn quickly agrees and introduces himself, but the guy shakes his hand in a romantic manner and says, "It would have been better if there were 3 of us." Then blushing, he asks, "Are we really just the 2 of us, bro? I don't like this guy's intentions." The protagonist feels like smashing his head in, but he holds himself back because he needs some nighttime company. The 2 play rock, paper, scissors, and Han wins, so he'll sleep first. As usual, our boy gets pissed off. This time, due to his bad luck, Han says, "Here, take this watch. When the pointer reaches here, wake me up." Then Han falls asleep. Bjorn sat there thinking whether he should ask to borrow Han's sleeping bag. He also hopes no goblin will come. Time passes and finally he wakes Han up. Han thanks him for doing a good job and says it's now his turn to sleep for 2 hours. But obviously the Bjorn won't be able to sleep. How can he trust an unknown guy? So our boy pretends to snore as if he's asleep. He wonders if Han is going to betray him to appear clueless. He turns his back to him and just waits to see when Han will attack. But Han does nothing. 2 hours pass, and now it's Bjorn's turn to stand guard. Not a single moment of sleep sleep for him. He starts losing his sanity, wondering why Han hasn't done anything. Then he thinks he should have trusted him a little, and slowly, he begins to fall asleep. Suddenly, he wakes up with a loud scream, and both of them just stare at each other. Bjorn explained, "I didn't even realize when I fell asleep." Han replies, "First, clean your mouth. Lucky for us, no one attacked while we were sleeping." Bjorn apologizes and tells him that if he wants to sleep more, he can and he'll watch. But Han happily says, "No need. You can sleep now. I'll keep watch." Bjorn thanked him. Han stays with his trademark smile the whole time. Bjorn offers him a real-life deal and doesn't blame him for falling asleep. He refuses to switch shifts when the mistake was his. Our boy knows that people like Han don't exist in the Dungeons and Stone game. As soon Bjorn opens his eyes, Han asks if he is awake, and holding a giant hammer over our boy's face asks him wants to sleep a little more. But at that moment, if Bjorn hadn't dodged, he would have been crushed right there. He quickly jumps to the side, and the guy can't believe that he dodged. It seems like he triggered the anger of someone whose mind wasn't all there. Bjorn attacks him with full hatred, and the guy shouted at him to stop. Our boy strikes him with a shield, cracking his head open. Han repeatedly says to stop, claiming he can explain, but in Bjorn's mind, this guy is like a goblin who wouldn't fall with just one hit, so he strikes him again. The guy falls 2 meters away and begins to crawl. Han keeps apologizing, but Bjorn just wants to know why he did it. Han reveals that he was planning to knock him out and steal his magic stone. He then talks about taking the shield and other equipment because he could sell it for a good sum. Our boy asks, "Is that all?" The guy replies, "Yes. Now let me go." Bjorn doesn't think this will happen. This is the last chance he's given the guy to tell the truth. Fearfully, the guy admits that he wanted a heart. Our boy is confused and doesn't understand. But the guy explains that the barbarian's heart sells for a lot of money and seems to be used as raw material for magical items. In simple words, our boy was nothing more than a goblin to him. If the guy had killed him, it would have benefited him. But now the Bjorn wants to know why he acted now and not when he was asleep. The reason is that the guy also needed to sleep. He says, "Now that I've told you everything, will you let me go?" Bjorn knows that more people like him will come. So, will he keep letting them go? Han says that he's not like the others, but our boy just picks up his shield. This is the first person he has killed with his own hands. He hasn't even been in this new world for a day, and already he's taken a life. With that, our boy equips shoulder pads, increasing his item level to 13. He then equips a backpack, increasing his inventory space, and a hammer, which raises his item level to 30. He also puts on boots. This means he's equipped with all of Han's gear. I've already mentioned that Han was a true friend. He gave our boy some cool items. Let's thank him. Thank you, Han. You're a true friend. Because of him, our boy has stepped out of his primitive life. Now he has water, medicine, and even a watch to check the time. Here's the current state of our boy. He's now wreaking havoc on goblins, and the big hammer is really coming in handy. The next day, goblins start appearing in groups that he can handle, but there's a problem. They aren't the goblins. He easily takes care of them. The problem now is sleep. He leans against a wall to relax, but at that moment, the goblins arrive, thinking he's asleep. This makes him furious. He says he doesn't even get 10 minutes of rest and crushes them all. After clearing everyone out, he says, "Now I'll take a nap." But suddenly, a large goblin is stabbing a knife into his chest. He wakes up with a jolt, slaps the goblin away, and sends him flying. Another goblin, seeing his friend flying about 69 kilometers per hour, notices that the barbarian is angry and quickly runs away. Our boy thought he would wake up gradually, but now he has to heal his wounds. While healing, our boy muttered that potion stabs hurt more than the wounds themselves. It's been 14 hours since Bjorn killed Han, and now he's thinking of finding a new nighttime companion. However, unlike the previous day, everyone now wants him on their team, probably because he looks a little cleaner, who knows. But anyone who passes by invites him. However, today he himself declines and says that he will stay with his own race, meaning with the barbarians. As he walks through the dungeon, he notices an elf girl sitting in a corner. Obviously, she notices him and gets scared. He immediately asks her if she is hurt, which makes her more alert. When he looks at her closely, he realizes he didn't notice it earlier. He asks her if humans injured her. As he gets closer, the elf kneels and starts apologizing. Bjorn is completely confused, and she keeps saying that she just wants to be forgiven just this once because she needs to take care of her little brother. This makes our boy even more confused, because it's not normal for an elf to behave like this. Elves in the game are usually very cold, but still, he smiles and says, "Don't be afraid, my dear elf. I have no intention of killing you." The elf is shocked, and keeps saying that she knows he is a barbarian, but is he really going to do it? Can he really let her go this time? Now, our boy starts getting angry and asks why she is so scared. Then he gives her some items for healing and says that they will talk later. These items are healing leaves that barbarians give to their old companions. She asks her if he needs a reason for help. He says, "Do I need a reason to protect you? Take care of your wounds." Obviously, he has a reason to help her because he also needs a nighttime companion. And honestly, the wound looks pretty huge. It seems like he has never seen such a huge, if you know what I mean. But despite being so badly injured and without sleep, her appearance is still decent. This makes it even harder for her to find a nighttime companion compared to him. They introduce each other, and we learn that the elf's name is Erwin. Now, our boy wants to know why she is so scared of him. She says it's because she is an elf and he is a barbarian. She explains that barbarians are their mortal enemies, But this is different from the game where it wasn't mentioned. Soon, she regrets and says that actually the war ended 10 years ago and she doesn't have any issues with barbarians. In short, she just doesn't want to fight. Up until now, our boy thought he knew everything about this world, but now he realizes that this world is different from the game and there is a lot he doesn't know about it. Hearing this, he becomes a little worried. But the elf girl is happy when our hero says that it doesn't matter to him either. But actually, he wants her to be his nighttime companion. He is very tired, and maybe she is too. So why not cooperate? She thinks about it and remembers that barbarians value their honor above all else. So, she asks him to swear on his warrior's honor that he won't do anything to her. As usual, this makes him a little angry, but he agrees when she says she will swear as well. He swears, "I swear on the honor of my father, whose name he already forgot." Then the elf swears too, and this non-aggression vow is fulfilled between them, at least for the night. He says that he will sleep first as maybe this will make him feel safer. She says she has no problem with it, and this time Bjorn gives him a watch saying that she should take care of it because it's expensive. He lies down and thinks he will pretend to snore and sleep for about 10 minutes to confirm. But suddenly, he wakes up in shock because he had actually fallen asleep. He asks how long he has been asleep, and she says 2 hours. He thinks it's because of the sleeping bag and blankets. Now he feels obliged to give them to her, and she is very happy. Finally, she falls asleep, and maybe she was as tired our barbarian. Bjorn feels like weeks have passed in this game, but in reality, only 3 days have passed since he arrived here. This makes him wonder what might have happened to his body in the real world. Well, as far as he remembers, his body was pulled into a monitor, but he has no idea. When he checks the watch, he realizes there are only 10 minutes left to wake the sleeping beauty. This makes him worry as he doesn't know what to do with her now. Should he join her and share all the loot from the third day because the game is now sending goblins in groups instead of singles? He says he can handle up to 4 goblins, but the problem is still sleep. Because if he joins her, he will have to divide the loot. But if he doesn't join her, he will have to find another nighttime companion the next day. Suddenly, he sees 2 humans coming toward him. They are already whispering. "Isn't this the elf we've been looking for?" One says, "Yes, this is her." Blondie comes up Bjorn and asks what his relationship with the elf is. He answers that she is his nighttime companion. But when Fat-ass Blondie asks how long they will be together, Bjorn gets furious and says him to fuck off. This scares the 2 chickens and they run away. Our boy understands they are looking for the elf and realizes it's time to wake her up. When he does, she slightly says, "Just 5 more minutes," and pulls the blanket over herself. But this makes Bjorn realize she was pretending to be asleep because the blanket was loose before, and now she is holding it. Suddenly, our boy pulls her up and sits her like a child. He directly asks her why she was pretending to sleep, and she sadly replies that if she woke up, he would probably leave her, since they only made a deal for the night. Bjorn understands now why she was pretending, because as soon as she opened her eyes, their agreement would end, and she would have to survive alone again. But before that, he asks her what connection she has with the 2 men, and she firmly says that there is no connection. However, Bjorn doesn't understand how they recognized her, and she admits that she might be from the clan that tried to hurt her. At least their clothes had the symbol of the Crystal Union clan. He immediately understands that joining her might be dangerous, because the whole clan is after her. But seeing that she is only 20, he asks her to come with him so they can talk while walking. She asks if he'll help her, and he says he wants to hear the whole story first. Erwin gets excited, and she begins telling her story. She explains that she met the man on the first day of her journey, and he became her nighttime companion. But something felt off, so she opened her eyes and saw that the man had his hand in an odd position near her. He was telling her to sleep a little longer. Later, she found out that he was a manager of a clan that did business on the first floor. She continues that she somehow escaped that day, but his clan members are still chasing her and she got an arrow in her abdomen. Now, our boy wants to know how they are able to track her. She tells him that she thinks they use a message stone to keep tracking her. A message stone is a mystical device that allows communication within a range of about 300 meters once synchronized. It's like a walkie-talkie. Bjorn understands that if he leaves her, she will be captured, but it doesn't seem like she has done anything wrong. He asked her why was there such insistence on chasing her. Was it just to silence her? Hesitantly, she denied it, and with a slight blush, admitted that when she was running away for the first time, she had thrown her knife, and by mistake, it had landed there. She assumed he understood the implication. Rumors said the situation had turned so bad that even potions couldn't fix it. Well, that was more than enough reason for them to come after her. Feeling embarrassed, Erwin softly apologized. Just then, a strange sensation washed over her, and she quickly warned Bjorn not to look back. A group was following them from about 150 meters away. Our boy was impressed by her precision. This was likely an innate passive ability of the elves. Deciding they needed to move faster, he asked if her injury was fine. She assured him it was, though she knew her wounds had reopened. Despite that, she didn't complain. Even as they picked up speed, the distance between them and their pursuers wasn't increasing. Bjorn started formulating a plan. Erwin noticed his thoughtful expression and asked if something was wrong. Instead of answering directly, he asked her what she was good at. Proudly, she declared that she was skilled at washing clothes and cleaning the house. instantly ruining any hope he had for a battle strategy. Frustrated, he clarified that he was asking about combat. She then explained that she was proficient in archery and spiritual fire magic. Bjorn immediately recognized it as one of the rarest elemental abilities. However, what he truly wanted to know was whether she had ever killed someone. She shook her head but confidently stated that she could, if necessary. Acknowledging her response, he then asked if she would be willing to accompany him until they escaped the labyrinth. Bjorn stated that the rewards would be divided. He would take 90% and she would 10%. Surprisingly, she accepted the deal. As the enemies closed in, now only 100 meters away, Bjorn realized he needed to change his plan. He decided to take a detour and instructed Erwin to summon her fire spirit. Without hesitation, she did as he asked. Of course, our boy hadn't expected to end up back in this place. This was the very spot where he had first spawned inside the labyrinth. Before he could dwell on it, Erwin warned him that the enemies were getting even closer. At the same time, Bjorn told her to unsummon her fire spirit. Suddenly, darkness engulfed the area. Our boy quickly understood that these people had advanced tracking techniques, even in complete darkness, as one of them had stopped right where they were. Without wasting time, Bjorn called out to the elf and told her to fire an arrow at the enemies. She drew her bow, assuming a graceful archer's stance, her expression cold and focused. With precise aim, she released an arrow that struck her target directly in the head. A thought crossed her mind. This was probably her first kill. Bjorn praised her, saying that if she had hesitated, they might have been in danger. As they approached the fallen body, a voice crackled from a message stone. The transmission was being heard by multiple people, and an immediate order followed. Everyone gather at the Goblin District. It was now clear the person tracking Bjorn and the elf was Siren. Checking through Siren's belongings, our boy found 2 daggers, a bag filled with magic crystals, and a potion attached to his belt. Meanwhile, Erwin had already put on Siren's clothes. Bjorn remarked that she looked much better now. She then taught him how to use the communication stone. It was as simple as pressing the button on its side. Just then, another message came through. Repeat, repeat. Siren is no longer responding. He was tracking the elf, but he has been defeated. She's in the Goblin District, along with the barbarian, wielding a massive hammer. Their bounty is set at 10,000 gold coins. Erwin was already in shock, but Bjorn reassured her, telling her not to worry and to summon her spirit once again. Their next move was clear. They were about to travel through the darkness and head straight for the second floor of the dungeon. After some time, Erwin addressed him as Sir and asked if they were really heading to the second floor. He confirmed it, and she hesitantly inquired if he was aware that it was far more difficult than the first floor. He reassured her, saying he knew and that there wouldn't be any problems because they made a great combination. Hearing this, she felt a little embarrassed. After all, a tank and a long-range damage dealer always formed a strong team. However, she still hesitated to proceed. Just then, an announcement rang out. A voice stated that if they managed to capture the elf, they would be allowed to keep her in exchange for 10,000 gold. Upon hearing this, she quickly agreed and declared that she would go to the second floor with Bjorn. Our boy, of course, hadn't wanted her to hear such things and follow him merely out of fear, but at least this meant he didn't have to convince her. As far as he was concerned, he always liked helping those in need, especially if it meant he could take down some villains along the way. As they continued walking, she suddenly asked if he knew the way. He admitted that he wasn't exactly sure, but if they headed north, they would eventually reach it. He knew this because he had played the game extensively. Just then, Erwin abruptly told him to wait. There was a goblin trap ahead. She assured him she would handle it. Naturally, the goblins took this moment to launch a surprise attack from behind. However, she swiftly dodged the first goblin and shot an arrow straight into its head. The second goblin charged at her, but she was already moving at full speed, swiftly maneuvering behind it and taking it down as well. This girl was incredible. With a cheerful grin, she excitedly asked how she had done. Bjorn praised her, admitting that she was even better than he had expected. Delighted, Erwin handed him some magic crystals, reminding him of their agreement. He would get 9, and she would take 1. Happily, she remarked that if they kept progressing like this, she might actually earn enough to buy a gift for her younger brother. Bjorn, slightly puzzled, simply encouraged her to keep working hard. Suddenly, the message stone rang again, announcing that the reward had now been increased to 20,000 gold coins, dead or alive. As always, Bjorn assured her that no one would be able to pursue them in the darkness. However, before they could relax, a new problem emerged. Standing before them were several ghouls. She turned to him and asked if she should fight them. This time, he firmly stated that they would fight together. In Dungeon and Stone, when someone defeats a monster species for the first time, they receive extra rewards. This means the more species of monsters they slay, the faster they level up. For them, this was a real opportunity. Bjorn stepped forward and smashed through the enemies, while those approaching from behind were easily taken down with arrows. With a reliable companion by his side, this all felt like child's play. As they continued defeating ghouls, they kept moving north, pushing forward until they reached the 3rd day of their journey. Along the way, they spotted blood on the ground. Judging by its appearance, it definitely wasn't goblin blood. But then, whose blood could it be? Nearby, Someone's foot had been almost severed, and a sandal had been left behind. This was the very spot where our boy had first set foot in the labyrinth. Right behind this location was the portal to the second floor. Recalling how close he had come to dying because of it, anger surged through him. In frustration, he slammed his hammer against the ground, cursing loudly. Erwin flinched in fear and instinctively began apologizing, assuming she had done something to upset him. But in reality, Bjorn was just frustrated with his own bad luck. If only he had arrived from a different direction, he would have already been on the second floor long ago. Meanwhile, Elf had tears in her eyes, convinced that everything was her fault. He reassured her not to worry, insisting that it wasn't her doing. That's when she finally understood the situation, and for the first time, sympathized with everything he had endured. Bjorn was surprised that she figured out on her own, but then she said something that left him baffled. She was sure his friends had gone to heaven. He had no idea what she meant by that. Finally, the moment had arrived to enter the portal to the second floor. A notification appeared, confirming that they had reached the goblin forest on the second floor. The very next moment, they suddenly plummeted down, crashing onto the ground. They had landed in the northern region of the goblin forest. Looking around, it seemed that there were no living beings within a 50 m radius. Erwin asked why she had never heard of a forest on the second floor before. In response, Bjorn explained that the first floor had 4 portals, one in the north leading to the goblin forest, another in the east leading to the beast slay zone, a third in the west opening to the land of the dead, and the last in the south leading to the Black Rocky Mountains. Among all these locations, the place they had landed in was the least dangerous. Bjorn then asked if she knew how to reach the city later, essentially how to get out of the dungeon. She explained that after a certain period, everyone would be automatically pulled out of the dungeon and transported to the city. Specifically, on the first floor, this happened after 168 hours, while on the second floor, it occurred after 240 hours. After that, they would be teleported straight to the city. Realizing this, our boy decided that when the 168-hour mark on the first floor approached, they would return and teleport out to avoid being spotted by the gang chasing them. For now, they planned to explore the area near the portal. As they moved forward, Erwin led the way, pointing out traps along the path. Our boy, however, saw nothing but leaves and stones until he threw a rock, revealing a hidden trap. She then asked how she had done, to which Bjorn simply replied that she had done her job well. After scouting for a while, they realized that no goblins were in the immediate area, so they continued exploring. The issue with the second floor was that goblins often moved in groups of 12. Worse, there were also mutant goblins, warriors, and archers, who were far more dangerous. Bjorn decided that they would clear the traps, expand their exploration area, and stay close to the portal in case they needed to make a quick escape. They followed this plan carefully, but soon Erwin felt another presence. This time, it was a group of goblins, more than 10 of them, at a distance of about 50 m. Bjorn then asked how close she could get without being detected. She estimated that without him, she could manage about 30 meters on her own. That made sense. After all, imagining Bjorn trying to hide in the bushes was almost laughable. He looked like a walking truck, whereas the elf girl could move silently without making a sound. Eventually, she spotted the goblins and signaled Bjorn. Loading an arrow, she took a powerful shot. This time, he couldn't even see if she had hit the target, but without hesitation, he stepped forward, telling her to stay behind. Walking straight toward the green creatures, he realized something surprising. Despite the overwhelming number of enemies, he wasn't afraid. Instead, his body seemed to react instinctively to the battle, as if craving it. His warrior's heart was twitching for a fight. With a mighty swing, he delivered a hammer strike so powerful that one goblin was nearly sent flying. He barely even noticed how quickly his adrenaline had surged. Raising his shield, he struck again, only to suddenly sense danger. A goblin had nearly sliced his face. If he had hesitated even a second longer, his head would have been gone. And of course, the goblins weren't giving him a moment to breathe. If he had been alone, he might have barely escaped, but he wasn't alone. Our favorite elf provided long-range support, allowing him to fight freely on the battlefield. After defeating the first group, Bjorn had earned 11 magic crystals. On the first floor, he had collected only 40 crystals throughout an entire day, so this was a significant improvement. Instead of giving her just 1 crystal, he handed her 2, because he decided to keep the goblin warrior's crystal for himself as it held more value. They continued their exploration, and as soon as they expanded their search radius to 3 kilometers, groups of goblins started appearing every 5 minutes. Among them were now stealth archers. Things were about to get even crazier. The goblins launched a full-force attack, and naturally, chaos ensued. Bjorn was holding his ground, but now he was in the goblin archer's line of sight. An arrow was about to strike him, but at the last moment he dodged. Now he had also pinpointed the archer's location. After nearly 15 hours of roaming and fighting, they finally decided to take a break. Bjorn told Erwin that she could sleep first. Of course, she had already borrowed a sleeping bag and blanket. Placing her weapons aside, she laid down to rest, perhaps feeling safer now that he was around. After hunting for over 15 hours, they had gathered plenty of rewards. As they expanded their exploration area, they encountered other groups, each consisting of more than 3 members, some even belonging to different species from another world. Though they merely passed by each other, Our boy wasn't fond of seeing other people. To him, explorers were scarier than dungeon monsters, especially now that he had a reason to be cautious. On the 4th day, inside the dungeon, they continued fighting. They rested on the 5th day, and on the 6th, they encountered more people. Finally, the 7th day arrived. The day they were supposed to escape the labyrinth. The first floor would close in 2 hours and 47 minutes. Bjorn ordered that they head toward the portal to avoid being late. The elf warned him about newly placed traps. Perhaps the goblins were respawning. She also mentioned another goblin group about 70 m away. Without hesitation, Bjorn decided they would fight again. However, this time their enemies consisted of 8 normal goblins, 2 archers, and 2 warriors, a total of 12 goblins. Like a bulldozer, my guy tore through the goblins, swiftly eliminating the warriors, while Erwin focused on the archers. His strikes seemed even stronger than before, perhaps due to all the battles he had fought up to this point. Erwin was also showing progress. She now instinctively knew where and when to shoot, as if she had become completely sync with our boy. She had initially mentioned 2 archers, yet no arrows had come her way. Of course, Bjorn praised her, but also wanted confirmation. Had she taken both archers down, he needed to know so he wouldn't have to worry about incoming arrows. She remained silent, unsure if the second archer was truly dead. That in itself was a good thing. Uncertain information could sometimes be more dangerous than the enemy itself. Her cautiousness made him feel a sense of pride in her. Suddenly, she noticed something unusual dropping from the goblin archer. What they saw was none other than a goblin archer essence. Bjorn immediately recognized it as something extremely rare. He had researched it before. According to forum discussions, essences were part of the game skill system. Each essence provided 1 passive and 1 active skill, though their attributes weren't fixed. However, there was a limit to how many essences one could absorb, making it crucial to choose wisely for the future. Its drop rate was close to 0. Bjorn felt a pang of disappointment. There was no way his luck was good enough to get something like this. Curious, the elf asked whether absorbing an essence would turn a person into a goblin. Bjorn explained that it wouldn't. It would only grant them some of the goblin's abilities. He even gave an example of a man who had consumed a wolf monster essence on the 1st floor, allowing him to track others by scent. Since he already had a specific essence in mind for himself, he let Erwin keep this one. He couldn't just pick any random essence, as that could lead to problems later. However, he made her promise something before taking it, a conversation he had intended to have back on the 1st floor. Before he could finish speaking, a group of people arrived and ordered them not to move. One of them stepped forward and asked, "What are you doing here?" The elf began explaining that they were out hunting, but Bjorn quickly warned her that she didn't need to answer them. Without hesitation, he grabbed her by the shoulders and literally threw her into the essence. As soon as she made contact, she merged with it. The man who had been watching all this unfold became desperate and furious. He shouted that the essence belonged to them. When the elf returned, Bjorn immediately challenged them, daring them to come forward if they wanted to fight, and readied his hammer to crush them. Instead of engaging, the group turned and ran at full speed toward the portal. He forced them to retreat. The problem, however, was that based on Bjorn's analysis, they were likely heading to the portal to return to the city. That meant they could cross paths again, which was best avoided. Just then, the elf warned that a group of goblins was about 50 meters away. Bjorn suggested trying to avoid them, but that plan quickly fell apart. The goblins had already detected them. At the last moment, he made a split-second decision. They needed to head in the opposite direction. The elf confirmed the plan, but just as she did, an arrow came flying straight toward her face. Luckily, Bjorn reacted instantly, pulling her back with full force. But something was off. This arrow didn't seem to belong to the goblin archers. It was likely from the same group that had just run toward the portal. Bjorn suspected that those people had deliberately attracted the goblins toward them while positioning themselves on the other side, waiting in ambush. Realizing there was no way out, he told the Erwin to use her powers. They would have to fight. She hesitated for a moment, confused, but Bjorn quickly explained that these essences had unique abilities. The one she had absorbed earlier was from a goblin archer, meaning her power had significantly increased. She had gained both a passive and an active ability. Her passive ability was Poison Arrow, which inflicted poison damage whenever she used her bow. Her active ability was Thief Steps, which allowed her to enter stealth mode. Bjorn was impressed that she could activate it just by willing it without wasting time. He handed her the bag, deciding to take on the goblins alone while she focused on the human archer behind him. She clearly didn't like the plan, but Bjorn insisted they had no time to argue. He ordered her to hide and wait for his signal before shooting at the human archer. Bjorn charged toward the goblins, launching a fierce assault. With incredible speed, he defended and attacked simultaneously, taking on multiple goblins at once. As the archers resumed their attack, a brief moment of carelessness allowed a goblin to strike him from behind. Reacting instantly, he turned and eliminated the goblin in a single blow. However, without Erwin's support, dealing with the enemies ahead became more difficult. His injuries worsened, and fatigue started setting in. Just then, he sensed 2 incoming arrows, one from a goblin archer and another from a man holding a crossbow. Realizing it was impossible to block both, he made a last-moment decision to stylishly block the crossbow bolt. As a result, the goblin's poisoned arrow struck his elbow, causing his arm's movement to weaken. Now, he had to choose between a shield and hammer. Opting to keep the shield, he reasoned that it would allow him both to defend and attack, while also protecting himself from the humans. As always, he became completely furious, and the goblins, terrified, began to flee. He knew there was no need to chase them, especially when he had other opponents to deal with. At that moment, the humans stepped forward, acknowledging that he had handled the goblins alone, which was quite impressive. Bjorn, however, already knew these were the same people he had anticipated. When they insulted the elf, his rage exploded. Without hesitation, he challenged them to attack, pressuring them into a fight. But instead of engaging immediately, they attempted to blackmail him. Despite his strength, they pointed out that he was now injured. Offering him a deal, they said they would let him go if he revealed the elf's location. Hearing this, Bjorn simply smiled, prompting them to call him crazy for laughing in such a situation. Their leader, staying cautious, ordered his men not to lower their defenses, telling them to imagine they were hunting a giant monster. But now, with one of his arms rendered useless, it was time to send a signal, one that even people in this world would understand. Without hesitation, Bjorn lunged toward the leader and struck his sword with a shield in a violent thrust. The man immediately called for reinforcements. An old samurai launched a powerful slicing attack, but Bjorn retaliated with full force. The problem, however, was that he was now surrounded. As he considered whether Erwin had managed to defeat the crossbow wielder, an arrow suddenly came flying at full force. No one knew who had fired it. All that was clear was that it was heading straight toward Bjorn and the leader. The human's tank quickly shouted for his allies to focus on attacking the barbarian while he handled the arrows. While he defended, the other two attacked Bjorn from both sides. The leader struck his shield from the front, while the samurai moved in from behind. Making a quick decision, Bjorn sacrificed his useless arm, using it as a distraction to land a devastating blow on the leader's head. The man recoiled, calling him a monster. Meanwhile, Bjorn swiftly turned to dodge the samurai's next attack, creating some distance between them. Then, something unexpected happened. Another arrow came flying in. This time, the tank managed to block it. But unlike before, this arrow was engulfed in flames. The intense heat forced the tank to discard his shield, leaving him vulnerable. In the next scene, the leader takes another arrow to the shoulder. Realizing that staying any longer would only worsen the situation, he starts running, and mutters that he'll deal with the elf later. Meanwhile, the samurai intensifies his attacks, striking faster and urging our boy to surrender. Bjorn regains some momentum, using his shield to block the view and extend his reach. He swings his shield at the samurai, who narrowly dodges, but the attack lands on the tank behind him, sending the man flying. He crashes to the ground, coughing up blood. The old samurai, now furious, wonders why such a strong warrior is even part of this group. The two engage in a fierce exchange of blows, but this time it's a fair one-on-one fight. Bjorn lifts his shield and hurls it straight at the old man's head, then grabs him by the collar and in a fit of rage, bites his neck. Bjorn remains standing firm while the other two opponents have already met their end. Suddenly, Erwin rushes toward our boy, calling him sir. She anxiously asks if he's okay and urges him to take a potion, showing genuine concern for him. After drinking it, Bjorn feels a strange sensation. His body feels like it's boiling, every vein pulsing, his skin burning and itching. After a moment, Erwin encourages him, assuring him that he can handle it. However, he is only concerned about the time. She informs him that it has been 10 minutes since he took the potion, reminding him that they have 40 minutes left before the first portal closes. Without hesitation, he tells her to take off clothes. Completely flustered, Erwin freezes, but then convinces herself that he must have a good reason for saying this. She hesitantly starts undressing, only for Bjorn to clarify. He wasn't telling her to take off her clothes, but to strip the bodies of the fallen enemies. Embarrassed, she quickly recovers and starts gathering only the useful items, leaving the unnecessary clothing behind. Without wasting time, she picks up a crossbow from one of the fallen men. With only 26 minutes left, they sprint as fast as they can. Finally, when just 8 minutes remain, the portal comes into view. As the countdown reaches 50 seconds, they dive through it as fast as possible. Bjorn crashes headfirst onto the ground on the other side, while Erwin lands gracefully. Frustrated by his rough landing, he groans. But Erwin, full of excitement, exclaims that the whole experience was so much fun. She thanks him for a job well done. He acknowledges her words, and she reminds him that he can now talk about the essence condition he had mentioned earlier. However, there isn't enough time to discuss it here, so they decide to talk about it after leaving. With only 8 seconds left, Bjorn struggles to remember the name of the tavern where they can meet later. His mind races, his head feeling like it's about to explode. Just as 4 seconds remain, the name finally comes to him. Blackwell. As soon as he utters the name, the labyrinth seals shut. The notification appeared confirming that he had been transported to Rafdonia, meaning he had finally returned to the city. Our boy was back, and it seemed like the others had also made it out. He hadn't expected so many people to return. No matter how much time one spent in the labyrinth once outside, it was always the next day at exactly noon, forcing them to readjust their clocks. Suddenly, a barbarian called out to him. Bjorn recognized him as Carrick. They exchanged greetings, and soon after, Senec arrived. Within moments, More barbarians gathered around, leaving Bjorn with the same reaction anyone would have. Where did all these barbarians suddenly come from? When he needed them inside the labyrinth, there was not a single one in sight. Before long, the group moved toward the store to count their collected crystals, betting on who had the most. Naturally, they invited Bjorn to join in on the wager. The woman in charge of counting announced that they had a total of 41,498 crystals, which left everyone impressed. Then it was Bjorn's turn. As the woman began counting rapidly, Bjorn found himself impressed. When she finally revealed the total, it was an astonishing 182,413 crystals. The crowd erupted in cheers, chanting his name as they lifted him onto their shoulders. He had set a new record. Time passed, and Bjorn wandered around with the other barbarians. That's when he spotted a familiar figure in the distance, his favorite elf. She was there, happily chatting with a group of elves, her cheerful demeanor standing out. A twinge of jealousy hit him. Why was she surrounded by all those guys? Meanwhile, he himself was stuck with a group of overly muscular men. When she noticed him, she waved slightly. He quietly indicated her to meet him at night. She confirmed with a nod, but before the moment could pass, another elf girl from her group turned to her and asked if she knew that barbarian. Caught off guard, Erwin quickly denied any acquaintance with him. At that moment, a large barbarian who had been eyeing the scene turned to Bjorn and asked if he had been looking at that elf. Bjorn casually denied it, but the man's expression darkened. With clear hostility, he declared that under no circumstances could the greatest warrior ever be on good terms with those cowardly, point-eared people. Hearing this, one of the elves visibly looked offended. Bjorn immediately sensed that things were taking a turn for the worse. A clash between the muscular warriors and the elegant, beautiful elves was just on the verge of breaking out. However, the tension eventually subsided. As he continued walking through the city, he saw families reuniting, brothers embracing, parents overjoyed, but not everyone had made it back. Some were still missing. It was a stark reminder of reality. Seeing it happen in real life was far different from watching it in a 2D game. But for now, it was time for celebration. The muscular warriors drank mug after mug of beer. Even the women were joining in. Some were even downing two at once. Bjorn couldn't help but wonder why he was here with them. Originally, he had only wanted to see if there was anything he could learn from the barbarians. But here, they were just drinking endlessly, drowning themselves in alcohol without a care in the world. Frustrated, he suddenly stood up and declared that he was leaving immediately. The moment he announced his departure, every barbarian in the bar turned to look at him. Some asked why he was leaving, but in the end, they simply wished him good luck, calling him the best barbarian warrior. After walking for some distance, he realized how peaceful the outside world was. Different races were even seen wandering together. He then headed to an inn, took a bath, and thought to himself, if things were this calm here, maybe living in this city wouldn't be so bad. After bathing, the massive barbarian lay on the bed wearing nothing but his underwear. He was so big that his legs dangled off the bed. The moment his head touched the pillow, memories of his old home resurfaced. When he woke up, it was already 9:18 at night. He had left the dungeon at noon, meaning he must have slept for around 4 to 5 hours. He inquired about a tavern only to be told that it had closed down. Apparently, the owner got caught up in a betting scheme 10 years ago, forcing them to change both the owner and the tavern's name. Curious about the new name, he was told it was now called Python, the very place he was standing in. It felt different from when he had last played. As he stepped into the bar, the lively atmosphere greeted him. Everything seemed normal until he spotted Erwin calling out to him. She was sitting with another grumpy elf. The woman immediately remarked, "So, you're the barbarian." However, he politely corrected her. "My name is Bjorn, and who are you?" She introduced herself as Erwin's older sister, Teresia. Then, suddenly standing up, she demanded to know why he called a young girl to a tavern so late at night. More importantly, why had he failed to show up after calling Erwin there himself? Without hesitation, she called him shameless. Completely confused, Bjorn asked what she meant. Teresia snapped, telling him to stop acting innocent. Panicking slightly, he turned to Erwin and asked how long it had been since they left the dungeon. Erwin casually replied, "Around 30 hours. Only then did it hit him. He wasn't feeling refreshed because he had slept for 4 to 5 hours. He had been asleep for 30 hours straight. Erwin, however, remained silent, simply observing the situation. He quickly apologized, explaining that he had been sleeping the whole time. This left Teresia completely stunned. She had never seen a barbarian apologize before, and she admitted that she hadn't expected much from him, considering she herself hadn't apologized to anyone in over 7 years. Still, she wanted to know what exactly was his business with Erwin in this place. Bjorn simply replied that he wasn't obligated to tell her anything. That response instantly made her furious, and the two began arguing in front of everyone. Suddenly, Teresia placed a bag on the table, stating that it contained 350,000 crystals, enough to compensate for the essence Erwin had consumed. She then glanced at him, wondering why he wasn't taking the money. Suspecting an ulterior motive, she even remarked that he was hiding something. Bjorn, ignoring her accusations, simply asked, "Does Erwin agree with her sister?" He then revealed the deal he had planned. He wanted Erwin to help him until he found his own essence. This revelation took Erwin by surprise. "Oh, so that's how it is?" she asked to further convince her. He even promised that this time they would split the loot 50 to 50. Hearing this, She was completely overjoyed, only to suddenly lose her excitement. With an apologetic expression, she admitted that she had already joined her sister's group. Teresia then firmly declared that she would never let Erwin again. The only reason it had happened before was because it was part of a ritual. Bjorn, as usual, was infuriated upon hearing this, but instead of arguing, she simply shoved the bag toward him and told him to take the crystals if he understood. However, Bjorn pointed out that 350,000 crystals would be about half the current price, right? She confirmed it, but he wasn't convinced. If that was the case, then 280,000 crystals were missing, as their promise split was 90-10. Laughing, Teresia admitted that she had almost forgotten and then literally picked up 280,000 crystals and placed them on the table. She had actually tried to deceive him. Now, he fully understood why barbarians and elves hated each other so much. Satisfied, he told her she could leave since he needed to speak with Erwin privately. Her sister seemed a bit confused by this, but before she could respond, Erwin suddenly grabbed her hand, thanked her for coming, and told her she could go now. She needed to thank and say goodbye to the barbarian. Her sister, impressed, felt that Erwin was finally growing up. However, before leaving, she turned toward the hour boy and made a demand. He had to swear an oath that he would not sleep with Erwin. If he swore, she would leave. Hearing this, Erwin turned completely red while Bjorn found himself wondering, was she only forbidding sleeping with her? Were the other options allowed? But Teresia kept pointing at him, insisting that he swear. Since he didn't care either way, he made the oath. And just like that, she finally left. As she was leaving, she thanked him for saving Erwin. The young elf turned crimson with embarrassment, but Bjorn remained unfazed. Once her sister was gone, Erwin hesitantly asked if she had been too rude to her. She had never said no to her sister before. Bjorn reassured her that it was fine. She then, for his previous offer, but admitted that she had already decided to work with her sister. Apologizing, she said she hoped he wouldn't mind. He simply replied, "It's fine." Without hesitation, she then pulled out a bag containing 63,000 crystals, explaining that it was part of the loot from the crossbow guy and the redhead. She had already taken her share. She also mentioned that she had left 2 backpacks at her home and suggested that he visit tomorrow to check what was inside. That was when he realized, without even being asked, she always understood his needs. Losing such a helpful companion would truly be unfortunate. Suddenly, she asked how she should repay him. She was serious about paying him back for saving her in the dungeon. Now, her sister's concerns made a lot more sense. Bjorn thought for a moment, but couldn't come up with anything. So, instead, he simply asked if she wanted to eat something. She shook her head, saying she wasn't hungry. In response, he casually said, "Then I'll just order for myself." For some reason, she blushed and suddenly had a brilliant idea. She decided she did want something to have her first post-dungeon drink, and she wanted to share it with him. The thought sparked a memory. This was a significant tradition in elven culture. She then assumed that of course this wouldn't be his first post-dungeon drink. However, before she could finish her sentence, Bjorn interrupted, asking what she meant. This was actually his first time too. She was shocked. Wait, you weren't joking. Not only that, this was also his first time even going into a dungeon. Finally, their food arrived. Erwin complimented him on how well he had performed in the dungeon, and he returned the compliment. They raised their drinks in a toast, and after a while, their conversation drifted into silly topics, like how she was wearing a skirt today while he was in a t-shirt. He kept drinking one mug after another, impressing her. Then, out of nowhere, he declared that he had figured out a way for her to repay him. She was curious. "And what is that?" she asked with a bit of pompousness. But instead of answering directly, he said they needed to go somewhere else. Otherwise, the security guard would come after them. She blushed and mischievously asked, "Could we do it in my room?" A little while later, he was completely out of breath, drenched in sweat. She too was gasping for air, tears welling up as she exclaimed, "I can't take it anymore." She had known this barbarian was a scoundrel, but in reality, our boy was just giving her a chiropractic session, since he didn't fully control his strength. He had nearly pulled her arm out of its socket. Tearing up, she cried, "I really can't take it anymore." When it was finally over, she thought about how close he had come to breaking her arm, but all he had really been doing was testing her flexibility. Furious, she demanded, "Wait, did you bring me here just to test my flexibility?" Unapologetically, Bjorn confirmed that yes, that was exactly what he had done. He simply wanted to check, since ability usage was prohibited within the city. Disappointed, she sighed as he started rambling on about game statistics and theories. After a while, she finally pulled him back to reality, complaining that she was getting sleepy, and just as expected, they ended up sleeping together, but only sleeping. Well, so much for that barbarian's so-called honor. The next day, Bjorn showed Erwin the loot he had brought back from the dungeon. She asked if he planned to sell everything since she needed leather armor and a belt. Bjorn allowed her to keep those items, stating that their cost would be deducted from her share. After that, they went around the city selling various items in different shops. Bjorn managed to earn a total of 1.4 million crystals, while Erwin was shocked to find that even she made 50,000 crystals. Bjorn mentioned that when he had first started the game, he had never earned this much. Then he brought up the idea of parting ways, which upset Erwin. She requested that he at least accompany her to the central square. Upon reaching the square, they found a crowd gathered. Curious, Erwin asked what was happening. Looking at a soldier, Bjorn explained that it was an execution. A man had been gagged and placed on the guillotine. He further clarified that these people hadn't committed any serious crimes. They had simply failed to pay their taxes. Witch's curse loomed over the city, and resources were only available through the labyrinth. Those who refused to participate in the labyrinth were executed to reduce the number of mouths to feed. As the execution took place, people rushed toward the guillotine, dipping their bread in the executed man's blood and eating it. Erwin was disgusted by the sight. Bjorn explained that according to legend, drinking the blood of an executed person brought wealth. Bjorn noted that with each passing year, the fees kept rising, which meant he had to grow stronger over time. He realized that if he couldn't return to his world or become strong enough, he might end up on the guillotine himself. If he wanted to avoid that fate, he had to reach at least the 6th floor of the labyrinth. With that in mind, Bjorn headed to a library. In the game, this place had still been under construction, but now it was complete. As he stepped inside, he noticed people staring at him. His gaze then landed on a table where Einar was sleeping with her face buried in a book, even drooling slightly. Bjorn tried to wake her up. In her drowsiness, she smiled faintly at him, but the moment she fully woke up, she loudly greeted him, causing annoyance among the other visitors. Bjorn asked her to lower her voice and question what she was doing in the library. Einar explained that she was following his advice to think before acting, so she had decided to gather knowledge, hoping to set herself apart from other barbarians. She had also realized that there were enemies beyond just monsters, but studying was still difficult for her. Standing up, Einar mentioned that she was heading to the sanctuary to learn to read and write from the elders. Before leaving, she reminded Bjorn that she had promised to repay the favor of his advice. She assured him that if he ever needed help, he could find her at the Brave Bull Inn and she would assist him. Bjorn thanked her, hoping she wouldn't forget her promise because he had a feeling he would need her help soon. Bjorn sat in the library wondering how to find the book he needed. As he scanned a room, he noticed someone slumped over a large table, fast asleep. Approaching quietly, he let out a small cough, stirring the librarian from her sleep. She blinked at him and asked what he needed. Just as Bjorn was about to say the book's name, she stopped him. With a wave of her hand, she cast a spell. Bjorn tensed for a moment, wondering if she had just cast magic on him, but nothing seemed to have changed. The librarian simply told him to take a walk. He would find what he was looking for. Before he could say anything, she had already dozed off again. As he wandered through the library, he gradually understood how her spell worked. The books related to his thoughts began glowing on the shelves. Curious, he picked one up and started reading. According to the book, no one could live in these lands due to a witch's curse. The last remaining fortress, Rafdonia, had prevented a great disaster, leading the royal family to create a pathway to an alternate dimension to ensure people wouldn't starve. This pathway was known as the Labyrinth. Bjorn found the story eerily similar to the beginning of the game. Another book he picked up mentioned magical crystals that could be transformed into bread and water. The third book detailed the war between elves and barbarians, but it was the fourth book that caught his attention. It spoke of evil spirits that came from another dimension and possessed human bodies. While there was no clear explanation for why this happened, the royal family had been trying to stop it for a long time. Bjorn realized that as long as he didn't say anything suspicious, no one could accuse him of anything. The fifth book he read described the death of a mortal king, stating that he had died 150 years ago. However, in the game, the king had only recently passed away. Another book discussed the instability of dimensions, and Bjorn immediately thought about the blonde guy he had met earlier. He must have read this book. The book also included a theory suggesting that if a portal was about to close, entering it at that moment could affect its stability. As he processed all this information, he felt a wave of unease. Deciding he had learned enough for now, he left the library and returned to the inn. Lying on his bed, he thought about when the labyrinth would open again, and concluded that he would need a partner. The next morning, a knock on his door woke him up. Thinking it might be Erwin, he opened the door only to be struck by a magic spell the moment he did. Erwin cheered, celebrating that after 10 tries, she had finally succeeded in forming a contract with spirit stones. In her hands, she held a swirling entity, most likely a wind spirit. According to her, it worked well alongside fire magic. Bjorn acknowledged her luck, knowing that the chances of forming a contract with spirit stones were only 10%, and the process was quite expensive. He asked her to undo the spell, which made her upset since she had wanted to show him something else. However, from Bjorn's perspective, she had already destroyed enough of his room. Realizing the mess she had made, Erwin quickly apologized and promised to clean everything up. After a while, Bjorn complimented her on successfully forming the contract, but also advised her to use her time wisely instead of wasting it. Though Erwin agreed, she was still a bit disappointed that he hadn't shown more excitement about her spirit. Bjorn couldn't shake the feeling that Erwin had become more attached to him, perhaps because he was her first companion. However, he believed she only saw him as a friend. He told her that he intended to stay in town and that if she ever needed anything, she could come find him. Hearing this, Erwin blushed and smiled at him, though it seemed she had misunderstood his words in some way. Later, Bjorn made his way to an inn where the barbarians usually stayed. The moment he arrived, one of them recognized him. barely having set foot inside. He was already overwhelmed by the noise. One of the barbarians approached him and asked if he planned to stay there for the night, boasting that it only cost 300 crystals per night, perhaps because the barbarians literally piled on top of each other to sleep. Bjorn dismissed the offer, stating that he had only come to speak with Einar. Before he could even finish a sentence, Einar appeared in the hallway. Upon seeing him, Einar immediately asked why he was there. Bjorn requested a favor. He wanted her to spar with her. Logically, he could have just gone to the training field where many barbarians are already fighting and practicing, but he specifically wanted to train with her. Since Einar still owed him a debt, she agreed, saying she would fight him anytime. Without hesitation, Bjorn declared that he wanted to fight now. Both prepared themselves for battle, and as soon as the match began, Bjorn charged toward her, determined not to lose. However, Einar swiftly lifted her sword and defeated him in a single strike. Looking down at him, she asked if he was okay, but Bjorn, unfazed, requested another match. He knew she was truly strong. The two fought multiple times, and by the end, Bjorn was on his knees, exhausted. Einar too had grown tired, and they both decided to take a break. Bjorn then asked if she planned to return to the labyrinth alone. Einar confirmed that she would, as she didn't have enough money to form a party. Hearing this, Bjorn invited her to join him as his companion. Einar seemed slightly surprised at the offer. When he explained that he would take 80% of the profit, but would also cover all the expenses, she didn't ask for further details. Bjorn worried that she might reject the deal, but instead, she took his hand and agreed. From her perspective, there was no point in overthinking things. She wouldn't understand the details anyway, so she decided to trust him. The next day, Bjorn and his new companion arrived at the barbarian sanctuary, where the elder asked if he had come to learn reading and writing. However, Bjorn clarified that he was searching for a spiritual seal, specifically the immortal seal, as he would need it to pass through the labyrinth. According to the elder, elves could form contracts with spirits and use their powers. Dwarves possessed the blessing of steel, which enhanced the power of their items, and demi-humans could bond with ancestral beasts. Meanwhile, barbarians had access to spiritual seals. Curious, the elder asked how Bjorn knew about the seals, since someone his age wouldn't typically have such knowledge. Bjorn explained that he had learned about them from a book, and also mentioned that the seals had been used during the war against the elves. The elder laughed, patted Bjorn's shoulder, and said he had no reason to refuse his request. Just as Bjorn was about to say something, the elder demanded 800,000 crystals for the seal. Bjorn had anticipated this, and confidently agreed to pay. He had already learned during the game that seals were expensive. He offered 500,000 crystals and 3 special coins worth 100,000 each. Suspicious, the elder questioned how Bjorn had managed to gather such a large amount. Expecting this, Bjorn explained that he had found a wounded elf on the first floor, whom he had enslaved in exchange for an essence. He had even taken money from the elf's sister, which, while not entirely true, wasn't a complete lie either. The elder burst into laughter, and soon the other barbarians joined in celebrating Bjorn's achievement. As a reward, the elder gifted him 2 additional coins worth 100,000 each. Bjorn was so excited about this easy profit that he even declared he would continue mistreating elves in the future. Bjorn understood that the seal was a type of enhancement technique that allowed the body to absorb the essence of magical ingredients and develop special abilities. Barbarians tattooed their children because their souls were pure, and this practice kept their soul's path visible even as they grew. Before granting the seal, the wizard warned Bjorn that it could not be reversed. According to Bjorn, the essence of the seal belonged to a tank. The wizard then approached with a needle ready to begin. Repeatedly, the needle pierced Bjorn's back, and judging by his expressions, the process was incredibly painful. Eventually, he managed to activate the first level of the seal, which significantly boosted his natural regeneration, and granted him an additional 13 physical points. Bjorn thanked the wizard and with a sore back stepped out of the hut. The wizard chuckled. This was the first time a barbarian had ever thanked him. Bjorn hurried away, wondering if he had said something odd. As the sun rose, he headed into town to purchase equipment. He had already realized that he was much better at using shields than swords. At a shop, the vendor showed him weapons typically favored by barbarians, but none of them matched what he was looking for, until he found a mace that seemed perfect. With this new weapon, his item level increased by 85. He also bought a customized helmet and half-plate armor, which added 47 and 57 item levels, respectively. Outside the labyrinth, Bjorn had established a daily routine. He had breakfast with Erwin, spent his afternoons in the library, and dined at different places each evening to gather information, even if the food wasn't always great. In the late afternoon, he trained with the other barbarians, relying solely on his instincts. This training significantly improved his skills, allowing him to defeat Einar multiple times, even giving her combat tips. After training, Bjorn returned home, where Erwin requested to join him for dinner. After their meal, she bid him goodbye and wished him luck for the labyrinth, which was set to open the next day. Now, Bjorn's attributes are better. As soon as morning arrived, Bjorn and Einar requested unity magic. The attendant explained that all they needed to do was place their hands on a crystal. However, Since nothing in this world came for free, the cost was 15,000 crystals, but in return, it granted them the ability to enter the labyrinth together. She further informed them that the higher the rank, the more expensive the magic would be, and it would only remain valid for 24 hours. A while earlier, inside a tavern, Einar had been left speechless in front of a lavishly set table. Before entering the labyrinth, Bjorn had ordered the best dishes available. The moment she tasted the food, she was overwhelmed, on the verge of tears because it was so delicious. The meal filled her with excitement and determination to work hard. Minutes before the portal was set to open, both of them were already waiting. Bjorn listened to the loud chatter around him and turned to see a few young barbarians fresh out of their coming-of-age ceremony, preparing to enter the portal. Einar watched them with a nostalgic expression, as if it had been ages since she had stepped into a portal herself. Finally, the portal opened, but before stepping in, Bjorn asked Einar to wait a little. He wanted to test a theory. She agreed without question and followed him. However, as soon as there was only a minute left before the portal would close, panic set in. Bjorn kept observing the portal's size until the nearby people started yelling that it was about to shut. Without wasting another second, both of them sprinted toward it. As soon as they entered the dark region, Bjorn followed through with his plan and lit a torch. Einar immediately pointed out something that caught her attention: a monument. Just as Bjorn had expected, this monument had the ability to take them directly to the second floor. The moment he touched it, light began to emanate from it, and a portal to the next floor appeared before them. Einar, still struggling to grasp what was happening, watched as Bjorn readied himself to step through the portal. The act of opening the first portal rewarded him with 2 experience points, causing his level to increase and his essence capacity to expand. Curious, Einar questioned how he had managed to take them straight to the next level. According to him, he had simply read about it in a book. If that was the case, then it seemed like they had entered the land of the dead. Bjorn turned to Einar and asked if she felt anything strange. She admitted that she sensed something filling her body. Trying to make sense of it, she explained that it was probably her spirit status adjusting. Bjorn connected the dots. It was similar to how leveling up worked in games. Just as characters gained higher stats upon leveling up, his soul power, or MP, had also increased. This was essential for using special abilities, and at the same time it determined how much essence he could absorb. Einar, however, found it odd that his level had increased without having defeated a single monster. What had happened was that normally only a small amount of experience could be obtained from undead monsters, but if someone was the first to open a portal, they could gain experience points, an easy way to level up. Bjorn had no intention of revealing this trick to anyone. In fact, he even warned Einar not to tell anyone that they had reached the second level so quickly. Experienced explorers would soon arrive, and if they were spotted, they would surely be questioned about how they had gotten there. Staying away from the portal seemed like the safest option. Securing the torch to his helmet for better visibility, Bjorn noted that the flame was magical. It neither extinguished nor emitted heat. Compared to the goblin-infested forests, the land of the dead had stronger monsters, but at least it wasn't riddled with traps, making it a more favorable place for barbarians. Just then, Einar sensed something approaching. It was a small group of ghouls. Despite this, she felt an exhilarating excitement at the thought of battle. Without hesitation, she charged toward them and swiftly took them down. It almost seemed too easy until a chilling scream echoed through the air. In that instant, fear crept into her. Bjorn calmly explained that it was likely a banshee and that it was best to leave it alone. The creature wouldn't attack unless provoked. However, Einar, still nervous, asked if it wasn't a dangerous monster. According to Bjorn, if they attacked first, they would be cursed. Moreover, the banshee would follow them until the very end of the labyrinth. That thought alone sent a shiver down Einar's spine. Another eerie scream rang out, and this time Einar instinctively clung to Bjorn's neck. Moments later, skeletons began emerging, confirming her fears. Bjorn tried to explain their weak points, but before he could finish, Einar, without even listening, eliminated all of them in an instant. The two continued heading north, walking for almost 8 hours. Along the way, they encountered ghouls and mutant skeletons wielding weapons, but defeating them wasn't too difficult. These battles helped Bjorn improve his skills as he crushed the monsters with his mace. His new armor significantly boosted his defense, and his helmet was no longer just for carrying candles. It could now withstand arrows as well. Glancing at Einar, he noticed that she was quite skilled in combat. One thing stood out though. She constantly shouted, "Vahela," the name of the ancestral goddess of the barbarians. Even she didn't seem to know why, but somehow Bjorn found himself doing the same, shouting along with her as they fought, enjoying the thrill of battle together. The continuous fights also granted him a significant amount of EXP points. Einar soon noticed that Bjorn's arm was injured, but he didn't seem concerned. To her surprise, his wound began healing on its own. Excited, she asked if it was due to the seal. Bjorn revealed that the first level of the seal enhanced regeneration and increased vigor. As they continued forward, they realized the terrain had changed, and the wails of the banshee had grown even louder. This signaled the arrival of rank 8 monsters. Suddenly, a guttural scream echoed through the area as a death demon appeared. It was said that this creature consumed the very light of the labyrinth. Bjorn reminded that the best strategy was to attack its head, and without hesitation, they launched their assault. However, The creature was no easy opponent. It blocked their attacks effortlessly, its skin as hard as stone. Bjorn took the lead, drawing the monster's attention while Einar attempted a sneak attack from behind. Yet, despite her precise strike, her blade barely penetrated. The demon turned and threw Einar aside. She got back on her feet, leaning on her sword, and shouted that the monster was far too strong. Bjorn recalled that even in the game, this monster had incredibly high defense and exceptional healing abilities. The death demon let out another roar, and this time, even Bjorn felt a chill. He knew exactly what that meant. The creature had activated its ability to summon ghouls. Within moments, 15 to 20 ghouls appeared, rushing toward the barbarians. Bjorn shouted for Einar to handle the ghouls while he focused on the demon. Gripping his shield tightly, he advanced, but the demon's attack forced him to retreat. Regaining his footing, he charged again, using his shield to block, while Einar swiftly eliminated the ghouls. Once she was done, he warned her not to get distracted before striking the monster with his mace once more. Now, both barbarians attacked in unison, finally managing to land a solid hit on the demon's head. For a moment, Bjorn thought their attack had worked, but the demon refused to go down. With a powerful strike, it sent Bjorn flying. He hit the ground hard, injured, and looked up just in time to see the wound on the monster's head almost fully healed. Bjorn analyzed the situation, trying to think of a strategy. Meanwhile, Einar grabbed the demon's leg with all her strength, attempting to unbalance it. She succeeded. The creature toppled backward. Seizing the opportunity, the barbarian struck, finishing it off before it could recover. The demon left behind a large magical crystal, but by barbarian standards, it was only worth about 100 crystals. If combined with the ghoul's remains, it would total around 300. Even though the risk was high, the reward felt small. Despite that, Einar was thrilled about hunting monsters. Bjorn, on the other hand, started thinking that hunting with her wasn't so bad. After all, Erwin had been a bit too passive. They continued battling death demons using the same tactic, knocking them off balance and delivering a decisive blow to the head. Eventually, they managed to defeat around 70 of them. Bjorn, who was searching for demon essence to synchronize with his seal, found nothing on the first day. By the second day, demons began appearing in pairs, but they still weren't too difficult to handle. The real trouble came when they took too long in one place. Soon, they found themselves at risk of being surrounded by ghouls. By noon, demons started appearing in groups of 3. That's when the barbarians realized the situation was becoming overwhelming. Just then, another group of explorers arrived. Before Bjorn could say anything, Einar interrupted and threatened them. Terrified, the explorers fled from the barbarians without a second thought. She then turned to Bjorn and said it would be better to set up camp elsewhere since humans had discovered their location, and they couldn't be trusted. As they continued on their way, Bjorn wondered if she had bad experiences with humans in the past. As they were discussing how they hadn't found a good camping spot, a desperate voice calling for help reached their ears. Moving forward cautiously, they came across several adventurers' bodies, all showing traces of poison. Both of them froze. Before they could react further, a plunderer appeared in front of them, someone who looked incredibly powerful. Unlike regular explorers, plunderers didn't hunt monsters, but instead targeted fellow adventurers to make money. This activity was punishable by death, but just as Bjorn had silenced the explorers who had abused him, if everyone here was eliminated, no one outside would ever know. The plunderer smirked and asked if this was their first time encountering someone like her. Bjorn remained silent, carefully analyzing his opponent. Judging by her stance and characteristics, she was highly skilled at her craft, so much so that he had never even heard of her before. Meanwhile, Einar was already on edge, her hand inching toward her sword. She whispered to Bjorn, saying she had a feeling this one was extremely strong. Looking at the fallen explorers, it was clear that none of them had external injuries. It seemed they had all been poisoned. Bjorn turned to the plunderer and asked if those people had been her companions. Turning her back to them, she casually admitted that they had been. Without a hint of remorse, she began gathering their belongings into a magic pouch. Uncertain about their next move, Einar hesitated and asked Bjorn if they should fight. However, after assessing her strength, Bjorn made the quick decision that running away was their best option. Before the plunderer could react, both of them bolted at full speed. As they ran, Bjorn began spotting the signs he had left behind earlier, markers to guide him back to the first floor. But before they could make much progress, they suddenly ran into a group of 4 human explorers, forcing them to stop abruptly. Einar, already prepared for battle, tensed up, but Bjorn quickly explained that they were running away and needed help. The group seemed to believe them, and their leader made an offer. If they could defeat the plunderer, they would receive the full reward. Calling them closer, the leader prepared to use his gnome ability, which could cloak them and their companions within a 3 meters radius, provided they remained still. Trusting him, Bjorn and Einar stepped forward. Lucky us, their leader mused. 2 barbarians just walked straight into our trap. A sudden wave of paralysis spread through Bjorn's body, and he finally understood. The plunderers had set them up. He had no idea how to break free from their magic. His mind raced, analyzing the effect. If they were truly immobilized, what kind of magic could this be? Then it hit him. It had to be the immobilization spell of a stone golem. That meant one thing. The person who cast this must have consumed the essence of such a creature, and the only way to break free was to take damage. As the plunderers casually discussed how much they could make from the barbarians, one of them grabbed Einar's face. Examining her closely with a wicked grin, he remarked how fortunate they were. After all, a barbarian's heart was incredibly valuable. Another plunderer turned to Bjorn, chuckling as he pulled out a knife. Too bad for you, he sneered. My eyes won't let you escape. With that, he drove a knife toward Bjorn's neck. However, Bjorn was ready. Just as the blade pierced his skin, he twisted his body, ensuring the wound was as shallow as possible. The pain was enough to break the paralysis. In an instant, he moved. Before anyone could react, he struck the plunderer directly in the face. The group gasped in shock. Bjorn, breathing heavily, yanked the knife from his neck and flung it aside. It landed dangerously close to Einar's chest. Though still in a combat stance, he was severely injured and his body could barely hold up. His legs buckled, and he collapsed onto his knees. But Einar wasted no time. Gripping her sword tightly, she lunged forward, slicing through the plunderers with swift, merciless strikes. One by one, they fell until only the leader remained. Seeing his entire group wiped out, he turned and fled. Einar barely spared him a glance. Instead, she rushed to Bjorn, who was in critical condition. Desperation filled her voice as she shouted at him to stay alive. Clutching her sword, she swore vengeance while Bjorn, barely conscious, weakly reached out, struggling to ask for a potion. Bjorn's near-death experience resulted in an increase of 3 points in his mentality. After taking a potion and with the help of the seal, his neck wound healed quickly. Einar congratulated him, joking that he was now the only barbarian with a scar on his neck. Now fully recovered, Bjorn wanted to track down the leader of the plunderers, and soon they managed to capture him. However, instead of killing him, Bjorn intended to use his ability to hide from the plunderer woman. Just then, a dart shot through the air and struck the captured plunderer directly in the neck. Both of them turned to see his lifeless body while the redhead plunderer approached. She revealed that she had been watching their fight with his group. Bjorn immediately shouted to Einar that it was time to attack, and both of them rushed toward the woman. However, despite being attacked by 2 barbarians at once, she remained eerily calm. She easily dodged Einar's strike, and even managed to block Bjorn's attack. Bjorn couldn't help but wonder how many essences she possessed. She was incredibly strong. Deciding to change tactics, he dropped his weapon and attempted to push her while shouting at Einar to attack. But suddenly, he collapsed to his knees, realizing too late that the plunderer had stabbed him with a dagger. A chilling thought crossed his mind. If she was an aura user, they had no chance. Meanwhile, Einar attempted a surprise attack from behind, but the plunderer retaliated with such speed that Einar couldn't even defend herself. She was using a paralyzing poison, leaving the barbarians immobilized. Bjorn recognized how powerful she was, far beyond what they could handle. As she pointed her dagger at his face, she unexpectedly offered him a deal. If he swore that he had never seen her, she would spare his life. She explained that she had never intended to kill the barbarians in the first place because she owed a debt to their race. Bjorn realized she was telling the truth. However, Einar warned him not to trust her, believing she was merely toying with them. Curious, Bjorn asked what would happen if he refused the offer. Without hesitation, the plunderer stated that she would kill him. Left with no choice, Bjorn swore on his honor. The plunderer, intrigued by his response, remarked that he was different from other barbarians and placed some kind of enhancement on him. It was now Einar's turn to respond. To Bjorn's surprise, she refused. The plunderer raised her dagger, ready to finish Einar off. Desperately, Bjorn urged Einar to swear the oath. Einar tried to argue about the honor of barbarians, but Bjorn reminded her that she had promised to trust him. Still hesitant, she eventually gave in. Before leaving, Bjorn asked the plunderer which floor she had come from. She answered the 8th floor. That meant the barbarians had survived purely because of her promise. As she disappeared, Bjorn made a silent vow. Next time, their encounter wouldn't end like this. Returning to the 1st floor, they stepped out of the portal. The moment they did, Einar collapsed onto the ground. Bjorn asked if she was okay, to which she weakly replied that she was no longer a warrior. Bjorn simply stated that only the strong survived. There would be another chance in the future. Einar tried to come to terms with this, knowing that one day they would get their revenge. They took a break to rest, but despite his exhaustion, Bjorn couldn't sleep. He wasn't feeling as terrible as but humiliation weighed heavily on him, just like when that blonde guy had saved him. The priestess had refused to heal him, and the swordsman had handed him a potion which he had drunk like a helpless fool. Bjorn remembered everything. The moment he had seen someone decapitated, the madness he had witnessed since entering this world. All he had done was try to survive, but now he was determined. He didn't want to live his life like this anymore. He asked Einar if she was willing to do whatever it took to become stronger, even if it was dangerous. Without hesitation, she agreed. She knew that if they didn't grow stronger, they would die. Bjorn then began explaining his plan to his companion. They would enter the rift and search for the case. But first, they defeated different monsters on the 1st floor, eventually reaching a dark area. After some time, they arrived at a stone monument. Bjorn explained that it was a memorial for those who had discovered the labyrinth. A quote was engraved on it, one that he had seen in the game. This meant that the hidden condition should be the same as well. The rift would be opened, but it was a secret. Einar promised not to tell anyone, but she was curious what exactly was the rift. Bjorn explained that it was another labyrinth within the labyrinth. To open the rift on the first floor, they needed magic crystals from the 4 types of monsters. From the second floor, they required an 8th rank magic crystal. The rift itself would open an instance dungeon with a 5-person capacity, and its difficulty depended on the number of participants. In the game, the rift had only opened 3 months in a Rift City's timeline, and people had eventually found ways to force it open. Bjorn activated it, and the 2 of them stepped inside. Narration went on to describe ruptures as something like a labyrinth hidden inside another labyrinth. In the game, they were referred to as instance dungeons, special zones that appeared randomly on each floor. However, these ruptures didn't just open freely, they operated on cooldown cycles. On the first floor, a natural reopening would take at least 3 months in city time. Since waiting around that long was clearly inefficient, explorers had come up with ways to force them open, such as the ritual Bjorn had just carried out. It was then explained that 4 different ruptures existed on the first floor, and the focus shifted to the one they had just entered. The moment they arrived, they found themselves standing beneath a sky soaked in apocalyptic red, while flocks of crows circled ominously above a massive dark fortress known as the Blood-Tinted Castle. Bjorn wasn't surprised by the sight, having anticipated this outcome after using a Death Fiend crystal. Einar, on the other hand, couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the structure. Still, he steadied himself, reminding himself that all first-floor ruptures were ultimately manageable, no matter how terrifying they looked at first glance. Bjorn's attention then moved to a more practical concern, figuring out which companions the dungeon system would assign to join their raid. Right at that moment, Einar sensed something and warned that someone else was arriving. Almost immediately, a new figure stepped out through the blood-like rift and onto the castle grounds. Both Bjorn and Einar tensed up, their minds racing as they tried to figure out who this unexpected newcomer might be. At the same time, elsewhere on the first floor of the labyrinth, Erwin was being scolded for relying on her spirit powers yet again. She tried to defend herself, explaining that fighting with just a dagger was too difficult, but her sister wasn't having it. She firmly told Erwin that she needed to be able to fight without depending on either her bow or her spirit abilities. Erwin pushed back, saying that Bjorn had advised her to focus on her strengths and trust her teammates, sticking to the role she was meant to play within the group. Teresia dismissed that idea almost immediately, saying that while it sounded nice in theory, reality didn't work that way. She grabbed Erwin by the shoulder and warned her that teammates were just that, teammates, and shouldn't be placed on too high a pedestal. Erwin gave in reluctantly, though deep down she continued to believe that Bjorn wasn't a bad person. Shifting the topic, Teresia proposed that they should head up to the second floor, guessing that Bjorn was probably already earning solid money there. She explained that simply hunting monsters on the second floor wouldn't be enough for rapid growth, which was why they should aim to enter a rupture as well. When Erwin mentioned that she had always thought ruptures depended purely on luck, Teresia pointed out that many explorers went their entire careers without ever encountering one, despite their experience. She added that a rupture on their current floor had last appeared 8 months ago, meaning it should be close to opening again. In her mind, Teresia concluded that Bjorn, being inexperienced, likely had no knowledge of this and was progressing in a highly inefficient way. A subtle smirk crossed her face as she began forming plans around that very ignorance. She then urged Erwin to trust her, confidently, assuring her that within a year, she would surpass that barbarian in strength. Teresia suddenly caught a familiar sound, and her entire body snapped into alert. Both of them looked up just as a red rupture violently tore open above them. Without wasting a second, she shouted at Erwin to run, and the two immediately sprinted toward the forming rift. They didn't hesitate for even a moment, charging straight into the unstable opening. Teresia reached out and physically grabbed onto the rupture itself, forcing their way inside as red energy coiled tightly around them and dragged them through. A moment later, everything disappeared. The rupture closed as abruptly as it had appeared, leaving them standing once again in the empty cave. Clicking her tongue in frustration, Teresia wondered if they had arrived too late to be selected. Back at the blood-tinted castle, Bjorn and Einar lifted their heads as their first new party member began to materialize. A loud and energetic dwarf warrior appeared, proudly exclaiming that he had finally made it inside. Bjorn immediately recognized him as a dwarf, while the dwarf himself seemed delighted, casually remarking that having 2 barbarians in the party was a great thing. Another flash of light followed, signaling the arrival of a second recruit. A brightly dressed woman in pink stepped out, instantly recognizing the place as the blood-tinted castle. Bjorn was genuinely shocked to realize that this newcomer was a mage. He couldn't help but marvel at the fact that there were still mages operating on the first floor. As the mage approached, with the quiet man accompanying her, Bjorn assessed the situation and felt that their party composition was shaping up to be quite strong. Even the dwarf seemed surprised to see a mage here. The woman adjusted her hat with confidence, smiling as if she already belonged in control of the situation. Bjorn felt a surge of excitement, while Einar, curious, questioned whether mages were truly that impressive. Bjorn recalled that the city librarian was also a mage, and explained that the librarian was a powerful 9th rank mage. People like that were considered far too valuable to the city, and were only allowed into the labyrinth after strict verification. Hearing this, the mage laughed lightly and stated that by those standards, her mere presence here should already prove her worth. She introduced herself as Alua Raven, a 6th rank mage. Bjorn, observing her closely, felt that she carried a slightly condescending air, though she was still kinder than the mages he remembered from the game. Alua then gestured toward the quiet man beside her, introducing him as a professional carrier she had hired. The man calmly introduced himself as Tarjan. The dwarf followed with his own introduction, cheerfully stating that his name was Hikarod Murad, and that he had been an explorer for 3 years. Bjorn took note of the high-quality equipment the dwarf carried. Bjorn and Einar then introduced themselves in return, shaking hands with their new companions as the party for the blood-tinted castle raid officially came together. Even so, Bjorn quietly observed everyone, keeping his thoughts to himself. Soon, he voiced his suspicion, questioning why such a strong group was still on the first floor, and demanding to know how they had managed to get here. Both the dwarf and the mage avoided giving a clear answer, only stating that they had come because a rupture was expected to open. Bjorn immediately realized they were deliberately hiding the method, effectively shutting out newcomers like him. The mage then declared that all loot would be shared among the group, excluding Tarjan, but only if everyone agreed to follow her commands. The others accepted this condition as standard practice within the labyrinth. Bjorn reflected on the situation, understanding that with a mage present, he had little choice but to follow her lead. He remembered how even royalty relied on mages to deal with dangerous threats. At that moment, Einar suddenly spoke up, strongly objecting and catching Bjorn completely off guard. She loudly insisted that Bjorn should lead, claiming that he was an unusually wise barbarian. As Bjorn hurriedly tried to quiet her down, she continued praising him, pointing out that he even spent hours reading something unheard of for a barbarian. This only made the mage more curious. Einar didn't stop there. She passionately emphasized that Bjorn wasn't just different, but genuinely exceptional, boldly declaring him to be a great warrior. The atmosphere instantly turned awkward. Both the dwarf and the mage were left stunned by her outburst, while Bjorn covered his face in pure embarrassment, internally begging her to stop. The dwarf, amused, joked that Bjorn was lucky to have a wife who respected him so much, which immediately flustered Einar as she denied being married. The mage simply laughed it off and told everyone to calm down so they could move forward. Bjorn felt relieved that the focus had shifted away from him and noticed that Raven seemed more interested in gathering information than scrutinizing him. He silently hoped she would never direct her full attention toward him during the expedition. The dwarf then expressed concern that they barely knew each other's abilities, but Raven dismissed the need for deeper introductions. She explained that the monsters in this area were ranked 7 or lower, and that she and Tarjan alone were more than capable of handling them. This statement made Bjorn and his companions tense up slightly. Raven then added that she would personally claim all loot from the Guardian for research purposes. The dwarf repeated her statement in disbelief, clearly upset that she intended to take everything from the Guardian. Conflicts like this over loot distribution were common in dungeons. The dwarf grew angry, questioning whether she thought he was a fool. The tension escalated rapidly, and as sparks began to fly, it became clear that the argument was on the verge of turning violent. Bjorn recalled that the Guardian dropped the highly valuable rupture flower. While mages prioritized research materials, explorers like them were mainly driven by money. Sensing the rising tension, Raven quickly offered to let the others take all the magic crystals instead. Bjorn immediately recognized this as a problem she herself had created. The dwarf rejected her offer, arguing that it left them with scraps, while Raven insisted her proposal was fair given the uncertainty of the drops. Bjorn noticed that Raven seemed genuinely surprised by the resistance, making him wonder if she was simply naive. Eventually, the two reached a compromise. Raven would take the Guardian's essence, while the dwarf would claim the numbered item. Bjorn quietly observed that both he and Einar had been completely ignored during this negotiation. At that point, Bjorn stepped forward, refusing to be left out. He made it clear that he wouldn't continue without securing a share for himself. He conceded the essence and the numbered item, but demanded the rupture stone for himself and Einar. Both Raven and the dwarf immediately called him greedy. They argued that having 2 barbarians in the party was already unnecessary, and that asking for the rupture stone was excessive. Bjorn quickly realized that his initial demand had failed. Adjusting his approach, he backed down from the rupture stone and instead negotiated for 2 non-guardian essences. Raven and the dwarf fell silent for a moment, reconsidering his revised proposal. After a brief pause, Raven smiled and agreed to the new terms. Bjorn accepted that this was likely the best outcome they could get. He also noticed how quickly the atmosphere shifted back to friendliness, as if the intense conflict had never happened. The mage cheerfully suggested that they get moving, while Bjorn muttered to himself about how frighteningly ruthless explorers could be. Watching Raven demonstrate her authority once again, he strengthened his resolve to grow stronger. As the tension finally eased, Bjorn let out a quiet breath of relief. Despite dealing with experienced explorers who tried to suppress others from rising, he swore to himself that he would climb the ranks no matter what. A system message rang out, announcing that they had entered the blood-tinted castle. The narration followed by explaining that the castle was divided into 4 distinct chapters. The first chapter was the entrance drawbridge. The second was the outer castle wall district, shaped by urban-style combat. The third was the underground prison hidden within the inner walls. And the fourth and final chapter was the demon worship room, located inside the castle lord's Lord's chambers. As the party moved forward, they approached a massive doorway guarded by towering statues on both sides. Raven immediately identified them as gargoyles. The narration described these creatures as 8th-rank monsters that usually remained completely still, like statues, only coming to life the moment they detected intruders. True to that, the gargoyles suddenly activated and launched a high-speed attack without warning. Bjorn tensed up instantly, knowing their signature ability was petrification. The usual method to deal with them involved sacrificing one person to the petrification effect while the others fought back. As Einar panicked and shouted Bjorn's name, fearing he would be the one sacrificed, Raven simply tipped her hat with quiet confidence, already prepared to handle the situation. The narration pointed out that everything changed when a mage was present. Raven cast her spell, invoking Artena Bjar, directly countering the curse. Bjorn immediately recognized it as a curse-canceling spell, and the petrification effect on him was completely nullified. With their most dangerous ability gone, the gargoyles were reduced to nothing more than melee opponents. Bjorn and Einar rushed in together, striking hard and cutting one down with ease. At the same time, the dwarf let out a loud battle cry as he charged the second gargoyle, smashing it with a crushing hammer blow. The creature staggered, barely able to stand, before the dwarf lifted it overhead with raw strength. Its eye shattered moments later, marking its defeat. A system message confirmed both gargoyles had been slain and granted the party experience. As Raven's spell energy faded, the group took a moment to recover. The dwarf laughed loudly, praising everyone's performance, while Bjorn acknowledged that even the dwarf had fought impressively, especially noting his powerful upward hammer strikes. Soon after, a red magic crystal appeared among the remains, but Tarjin nervously pointed out that it was floating away on its own. Raven explained that it was being collected through a spell designed to gather magic crystals automatically, offering to hold onto them and distribute them later, which the dwarf gladly agreed to. The next obstacle was blown apart by a sudden explosion, clearing the path forward. The team advanced through the opening and entered the dim interior of the castle. The dwarf commented on the darkness, saying they needed light, prompting Raven to cast a light spell that illuminated the area. As the glow spread, it revealed a group of grotesque, shambling figures ahead. The narration identified them as dead men, low-value monsters that granted no experience or crystals and left behind lingering corpses unless they rarely dropped an essence. Deciding it would be a waste of mana to use magic on them, the group chose to fight physically instead. The dead men began slithering forward in a disturbing mass, releasing horrifying screams as they charged. Einar immediately rushed in, declaring they would finish them quickly, cutting through them in wide, blood-soaked arcs. The dwarf followed up by smashing another with his hammer, while Bjorn raised his weapon and joined in, noting that the fight was already nearing its end. Together, they tore through the dead men in a brutal and relentless assault. Bjorn couldn't help but watch in amazement at the sheer intensity of the carnage unfolding before him. Once the fight ended, a new item appeared identified as the Deadman Commander's blowhorn. Einar excitedly picked it up, examining its massive size and asking how it was supposed to be used, while the dwarf hinted that she would figure it out soon enough. Eventually, the group reached a reinforced steel door. The dwarf admitted his hammer wouldn't be useful against something like that, so Raven stepped forward, offering to take care of it. She began chanting a powerful incantation, Agen Daruth, before unleashing it directly at the door. The spell exploded with immense force, sending a shockwave through the area and forcing the others to recoil as Bjorn raised his guard to shield himself. When the dust settled, Bjorn peeked out, completely stunned and speechless at the sheer destructive power of the spell. The steel door had been completely obliterated. Raven, unfazed, calmly gestured for them to proceed through the smoking entrance. With a soft smile, she told the group to keep moving, while Bjorn, still processing what he had just witnessed, couldn't help but think about just how overwhelmingly powerful mages truly were. The narration marked the beginning of the first chapter, the drawbridge at the castle entrance. As the party reached the edge, Raven observed that, just as expected, the drawbridge was currently raised. She immediately instructed Einar to use the horn. Without hesitation, Einar blew into it, activating the artifact. A deep, echoing rumble spread throughout the castle as the group waited below. A system message appeared, announcing that a long-dormant magical seal had been awakened. Still holding the horn, Einar grew uneasy, clearly caught off guard by the sudden reaction. The massive drawbridge began descending slowly toward them. As the situation escalated, someone pointed out that the moat's blood-like water was rapidly rising. Einar looked closer and noticed shapes forming within the crimson liquid. The narration explained that the castle's name came from these eerie red waters and skies. Raven calmly reassured her that the figures were nothing more than dead men. Even as Einar denied being afraid, a bloody hand suddenly slapped onto the edge of the bridge, making the objective of this chapter clear. The system ordered them to endure until the drawbridge fully lowered, meaning they had to survive continuous waves of dead men. The narrator remarked that such a task would be difficult for an ordinary party, but Raven simply smirked, already prepared. She called everyone to gather around her, her, explaining that with a wide area mage present, this stage was trivial. Then she unleashed another large-scale spell, Utherna Daruth, flooding the surroundings with overwhelming magical force. The party stood within the spell's protective and destructive range as it tore through the incoming deadmen. By the time the light faded, piles of disintegrating bodies surrounded them, while the group itself remained completely unharmed. The dwarf stared in amazement at the devastation, but Raven brushed it off as nothing more than dealing with weak enemies. Bjorn, however, couldn't hide his shock. He had known she was strong, but witnessing this made him realize just how massive the gap in power truly was. Raven casually stated that all that remained was to wait for the drawbridge to finish lowering, which surprised Bjorn, as the stage had ended far faster than expected. Soon after, the bridge slammed into place. Raven announced that they should proceed, and the narration confirmed the completion of the first chapter of the blood-tinted castle. With his helmet lowered, Bjorn quietly reflected on how effortlessly everything had gone, feeling that the entire stage had ended almost disappointingly easily. A map-like narration followed, as the party crossed into the outer castle. Normally, this area would be filled with enemies, but Raven once again used her wide-range magic to clear the battlefield. Her spell wiped out skeletons and other undead in a sweeping blast. Bjorn observed that while she couldn't eliminate everything at once this time, her magic was still overwhelmingly powerful, as a single cast had nearly wiped out all opposition. Only the massive Death Fiend demons remained, towering over the group. Raven instructed the fighters to handle the rest, and Einar eagerly charged forward alongside Bjorn. They clashed directly with a Death Fiend, coordinating their movements seamlessly. Together, they executed a double barbarian tackle, slamming the creature into the ground with brutal force. The dwarf watched in disbelief, questioning whether this was truly how they usually fought. Raven followed up by casting another spell, surrounding the fiends in crackling purple energy that worsened their wounds and suppressed their regeneration ability, known as body preservation. With their healing disabled, the barbarians tore into the death fiends relentlessly, until nothing remained but shredded flesh. As the enemies fell, glowing essences drifted into Tarjan's bag. Einar quietly admitted to Bjorn that she now understood why mages were so highly valued. The dwarf cheerfully agreed, saying that having a mage in the party opened up countless possibilities. Raven responded proudly, stating that such results came from both intense training and natural talent. Bjorn, watching her, concluded that she clearly enjoyed showing off and was deeply obsessed with her magical research, even if she tried to appear modest. Since they now had some spare time, Raven asked the group to help gather research materials, and everyone, including Bjorn, agreed. After quickly collecting specimens and loot, she thanked them and suggested they move forward. As they continued, Einar casually wondered how many cream pies she could buy with the money they would earn. Meanwhile, Bjorn silently followed, but something caught his attention. Raven had carefully searched the area, yet she had ignored a particular object. This made him suspicious. He wondered if she simply didn't know about the hidden treasure that could be revealed by breaking a nearby statue. He recalled how, in the game, players would often interact with anything unusual to uncover secrets. A familiar memory surfaced of characters discovering hidden items by pressing interaction points in odd places. Bjorn himself had shared that habit during his 9 years of playing, allowing him to uncover countless secrets. Even so, in the present moment, he chose not to reveal this knowledge. Drawing attention to it might hurt Raven's pride, or make her suspicious. Keeping quiet, he moved along with the group as they advanced deeper into the ruined, red-lit castle. Soon, they confirmed they had reached the inner castle beyond the outer walls. Raven noted that the area seemed strangely empty, with no monsters or valuable resources in sight. She suggested they move on quickly, and the group readily agreed. With Raven visibly energized, they continued forward, descending deeper with torches lighting their way into the underground section of the castle. A system message appeared, stating that they had entered the first floor of the underground prison. The dwarf asked what kind of monsters they could expect here, and Raven listed them: skull rats, banshees, death fiends, chimera wolves, ghoul lords, and corpse golems. The dwarf mentioned that he had fought all of them except corpse golems, which were unique to this castle. Raven warned them that corpse golems were dangerous, capable of causing flesh explosions with acidic fluids that could be deadly at close range. The dwarf laughed it off, boasting that there was nothing to fear as long as they had a mage. Raven responded with a flattering remark toward the brave warrior, while Bjorn quietly noted how easily everyone had moved past their earlier argument over loot, as if it had never even happened. As they moved forward, Einar suddenly noticed a group of skeletal rats and asked if those were monsters. The mage quickly identified them as the skull rats she had mentioned earlier. Just as Bjorn was about to explain further, the mage cut in, stating that skull rats were weak, rankless creatures that could be crushed underfoot without effort. That interruption immediately irritated Einar, who snapped back that she hadn't asked her. The mage's expression tightened, clearly annoyed at being spoken to like that. Before the tension could settle, Einar suddenly froze as a horrifying sound echoed through the area. Panic took over instantly as she clung tightly to Bjorn, shouting that a banshee was coming. Moments later, the grotesque figures appeared, shrieking as they rushed straight toward the group. The mage had already warned earlier that encountering a banshee would be bad, explaining that while they weren't necessarily the most dangerous enemies, facing them was an extremely terrifying experience. That explanation only made Einar more frightened. Bjorn, watching this unfold, couldn't help but feel that the mage was acting somewhat childish. Einar, still shaken, urged the mage to explain more, but the mage admitted she wasn't entirely sure. Bjorn then stepped in, mentioning that he had heard mages possessed methods to deal with banshees. The mage looked surprised at his knowledge and remarked that he was unexpectedly well informed. Dropping the casual tone, she declared that she would handle the situation herself. Without hesitation, she cast a powerful spell, unleashing a torrent of red magic toward the banshees. One of them was immediately engulfed, letting out a piercing scream. The rest swarmed toward her, their shrieks growing louder, but she responded by casting an even stronger fire spell. Flames erupted, swallowing the banshees completely as they burned and crumbled into nothing within the inferno. When the flames finally died down, she stepped out calmly and told the party to continue forward. The others could only stand there for a moment, stunned by the overwhelming display of power. Soon after, a system message appeared, announcing that they had entered the second floor of the underground prison. New enemies were introduced, a fearsome chimera wolf and a ghoul lord. The narration described the underground prison as resembling a mad scientist's laboratory, filled with grotesque creatures and disturbing objects. Bjorn observed the surroundings and felt that this was where things would finally become interesting. The dwarf praised Raven's strength and asked if she truly felt no fear in such a horrific place. Raven casually replied that she actually enjoyed areas like this, as environments like these didn't bother her at all. While speaking, she examined a section of the wall and revealed that, according to a map she had memorized, there was a hidden door there. She added that a corpse golem was waiting just beyond it. Bjorn quietly noted that she had even skipped the usual process of acquiring such a map. The group decided to leave behind their heavier gear before proceeding. Raven then asked Bjorn to light his torch so they could see clearly. Once ready, she announced that she was opening the hidden door. As the door creaked open, it revealed a chamber packed with countless corpses. The party stood at the entrance, greeted by an overwhelming stench and a seemingly endless mountain of bodies stretching deep into the darkness. As they stepped inside, Bjorn reflected on how, in the past, a sight like this would have made him faint instantly. Now, however, his barbarian body dulled the physical impact of the scene, leaving him largely unaffected. The first to react was Tarjan, the carrier, who immediately began retching from the unbearable smell. Raven followed soon after, struggling to suppress her own nausea. Bjorn realized that while she might be accustomed to gruesome sights from dissections, she clearly wasn't prepared for the stench as she began coughing and gagging. The dwarf, noticing this, felt relieved that at least the two barbarians remained unaffected and urged them to keep moving forward. They continue through the corpse-filled area, noticing another immense pile ahead. The party stops again before another towering heap of corpses. The corpse mound suddenly speaks to them, shocking the group. Many voices in the corpses cry out for help and to be saved, horrifying the party. Bjorn focuses on a glowing red point within the mass. A system message declares that the first boss, the corpse golem, has appeared while the writhing flesh screams in pain, and Bjorn recalls that it was silent in the game. Hearing their pleas, he realizes they must act immediately. He shouts for everyone to pull themselves together. He curses that the dwarf has frozen up in terror. The corpse golem's agonized voices continue to echo, amplifying the oppressive atmosphere. Raven and the dwarf are reduced to trembling wrecks, and the Bjorn thinks bitterly that they are not living up to their reputations. He concludes that, at this rate, the strong allies will be useless, and that he will have to carry the fight. The corpse golem looms before the two barbarians as they ready themselves to battle it. Dungeon and Stone is a niche game that has managed to reach its peak because of how many features it offered to different types of players. What stood out the most in his memory were its incredibly lifelike illustrations, especially the ones depicting creatures like the corpse golem. Those visuals had been so vivid that they spread across the internet as memes, even reaching people who had never played the game. Because of that, many could recognize monsters like the corpse golem without knowing anything about where they came from. But now, standing face to face with the real thing, Bjorn realized just how different reality was. No matter how detailed the game's artwork had been, it couldn't come close to the sheer horror of seeing the creature in person. The living corpse golem was far more terrifying than any drawing could ever capture. The mage, who had earlier claimed to be skilled in dissections, was now bent over, barely holding back vomit. Even the experienced dwarf looked shaken to his core, and the supposedly tough carrier was visibly trembling, drool slipping from his mouth in fear. Bjorn noticed the irony in all of this. Despite being treated like inexperienced newcomers, only he and Einar were mentally holding it together. The two barbarians were the only ones still ready to fight. As the corpse golem suddenly attacked, Einar snapped out of her shock and shouted at everyone, demanding to know what they were doing. She immediately urged them to move. Bjorn didn't hesitate, charging forward and striking one of the incoming corpse bombs mid-air. Another exploded near the dwarf, spraying acidic gore in all directions. The corrosive green fluid splashed across the dwarf's face, and he screamed in agony, shouting that his eyes were burning. Bjorn quickly realized the dwarf had been taken out almost instantly, which made him glance toward the mage. She was still too busy vomiting to even react. Understanding the situation, Bjorn gave a sharp order. Einar was to drag the blinded dwarf to safety and guard the mage while he handled the boss. He knew that if he didn't act smartly, all of them would die. Without waiting, Bjorn rushed forward alone, deliberately drawing the corpse golem's attention. He relied on his knowledge of its attack patterns. At a distance, the creature threw explosive corpses, while at close range, it hurled chunks of flesh directly at its target. If anyone got too close, it would try to pull them in and devour them. Bjorn understood that under no circumstances could the mage get near it. If the golem shifted its focus toward her while she was still panicking, it would be disastrous. So he kept his distance, using his shield and precise movements to bait every attack toward himself, buying time until she could recover. Eventually, the mage steadied herself. She forced herself upright, gripping her staff as her breathing slowed and her focus returned. Then, without hesitation, she unleashed her most powerful fire magic. Flames erupted across the battlefield, engulfing everything in a blazing inferno. Bjorn and Einar watched in awe as the overwhelming power of the spell burned away the corpse golem's outer body in a single strike, something that would normally take countless torches and a long time to achieve. As the flames died down, the monster's inner skeletal core was revealed. Einar immediately recognized it as the second phase, where the creature transformed into a skeleton golem. Bjorn quickly reminded her that the fight wasn't over and called her to move. Both of them leaped forward at the same time, targeting the exposed core. While the corpse golem in its full form was ranked 7, once its outer layer was gone, it became manageable for 2 barbarians. Taking advantage of that, they pressed forward aggressively. Together, they smashed the skeleton core apart, and a system message confirmed the defeat of the corpse golem, awarding them experience. Catching her breath, Einar suddenly noticed something forming where the boss had fallen. A swirling light appeared, and she called out, asking if it was what she thought it was. Bjorn confirmed it. It was the essence of the corpse golem. They both understood the significance. Ruptures acted like treasure chests, and elite monsters like this, which didn't appear in normal areas, were extremely valuable sources of experience. While guardian loot was already highly sought after, rupture rewards were even more appealing due to their increased chances of dropping essences. Bjorn found it almost strange that this was their first essence so far. Standing before it, Bjorn considered their position. He and Einar had done most of the fighting, and according to their agreement, they had the strongest claim. Deep down, he had hoped for 2 essences, ideally from a death fiend for regeneration and a chimera wolf for strength. Still, obtaining a rare rank 7 elite essence like this, which could only be found in the blood-tinted castle, was an incredible opportunity. He evaluated its effects carefully. The corpse golem essence boosted pain tolerance, poison tolerance, perception, weight, bone density, strength, and appetite. While it reduced perception slightly, the increase in bone density and weight significantly improved both defense and attack power. The added strength and resistance to pain and poison were also valuable. However, the drawbacks were just as serious. One of its abilities, Flesh Explosion, dealt damage at the cost of the user's own health. Another passive effect made the user's bodily fluids acidic, which would gradually damage their equipment whenever they were injured. Bjorn quickly concluded that while the essence was powerful, maintaining it would require heavy spending on potions and gear repairs. Because of that, he decided to leave it for the moment and focus on treating the injured dwarf, knowing the essence wouldn't disappear immediately. The dwarf, clearly ashamed, admitted his failure and thanked the 2 barbarians, acknowledging that things would have gone horribly wrong without them. Einar bluntly added that he would have died if not for her. The dwarf laughed awkwardly, admitting that despite all his experience, he had never encountered something like this before. Bjorn reflected on how close they had come to dying, not because they lacked strength, but because they lost their composure. It was a harsh reminder that this wasn't a game anymore, but reality. Raven then quietly apologized, her tone subdued, and Bjorn found himself wondering if she had finally returned to her normal self. Bjorn finally spoke up, declaring that it was time to discuss the distribution since they had defeated the corpse golem. Raven agreed, remarking that she was glad she had forced herself to cast that crucial spell. Hearing that, Bjorn couldn't help but grumble internally, thinking about how selfish explorers could be, noticing how she focused on her own contribution instead of thanking them. Realizing that if he stayed silent, they would walk away with nothing, he stepped forward and firmly stated that he and Einar had saved everyone and had done more than their share. Raven acknowledged his point and asked what he was proposing. Bjorn steadied himself and made his demand, stating that he and Einar would take the rupture stone. The group fell silent as they processed his words. After a moment, the dwarf cleared his throat and spoke in support, admitting that he would have died without Einar's help. Raven hesitated, clearly conflicted, saying she wasn't fully in favor of the arrangement. Bjorn countered by promising that if they encountered another rupture stone later, he would give them a fair chance at it, presenting it as a reasonable compromise. Then, preparing to push further, Bjorn revealed that the corpse golem had dropped an essence and asked for their thoughts. Raven's reaction was immediate. She was astonished, explaining that such an essence was even rarer than a guardian's, and so uncommon that even the Explorers Guild didn't fully understand it. As she excitedly imagined researching it, Bjorn realized his prediction about her reaction had been correct, and prepared to negotiate seriously. He offered her a deal. He would give her the corpse golem's essence. In return, if they later obtained a guardian's essence, it would belong to him. He laid out the proposal clearly and waited for her decision. Raven repeated the terms, confirming that he wanted to trade the corpse golem essence for a potential guardian's essence. Bjorn reminded her that there was no guarantee a guardian would drop one, but she still chose to take the risk. Delighted, she accepted the deal, stating that she was far more interested in the corpse golem than the guardian. With the negotiation settled, the dwarf asked whether the mage intended to give the essence to one of the barbarians, since mages couldn't absorb essences themselves. Raven clarified that she only wanted it for research and produced a special test tube to store it. She explained that such tubes were extremely expensive and only worth using for essences above the 6th rank. The dwarf was impressed that she owned such a costly item, and she admitted she only had one. Bjorn realized that using her only tube on this essence meant she valued the corpse golem highly, reinforcing his belief that trading it had been a worthwhile gamble. After carefully sealing the essence inside the tube, Raven announced she was ready to move on. The dwarf happily declared it was time to leave the dreadful area, and the group quickly agreed as they began to depart. They walked through a hall filled with demonic statues and piles of skulls. The dwarf questioned whether the statues might be gargoyles, but Raven examined one and concluded it was just a lifeless sculpture with no mana. Looking around, she remarked that the castle lord's residence must have been located above them, and expressed regret that they couldn't explore it. As she reached out and touched the face of one statue, something inside shifted with a mechanical sound. A hidden mechanism activated, and suddenly, a sinister book dropped from above into the statue's hands, startling everyone. Raven quickly grabbed the grotesque tome, proudly asking if anyone had known about it, while declaring that books were valuable sources of knowledge. The narration identified the book as the Necronomicon, a highly valuable dark magic tome that Bjorn had originally planned to retrieve later. Seeing this, he realized that Raven was more knowledgeable than he had expected. Internally, he couldn't help but feel frustrated as he watched her claim such valuable loot for herself. She confidently stated that since she had found the book, she would keep it, and the others accepted this, believing it couldn't be taken out of the dungeon anyway. However, noticing her slightly awkward laugh, Bjorn realized that she also knew the truth that the book could, in fact, be taken outside. He understood that the Necronomicon counted as an item, meaning it didn't require spellbinding to leave the dungeon. His attention then shifted to another statue nearby, and he found himself wondering why someone as knowledgeable as Raven seemed unaware of the hidden secret tied to the fountain outside. As he continued staring at her suspiciously, she grew slightly uneasy and quickly suggested that they move on. The group proceeded through the Devil Worship Hall, continuing their hunt. Along the way, they fought gargoyle statues once again, followed by battles against ferocious chimera wolves. Eventually, they reached their next major encounter, the second mini-boss, a skeletal knight mounted on a horse, known as the Bone Knight. Raven commented that they had been quite lucky so far, having already obtained the corpse golem essence and now encountering a desire type of Bone Knight. Bjorn silently agreed, recognizing that their luck had indeed been unusually good. The Bone Knight stood before them as a 7th rank monster, one that could possess 3 different attributes: hatred, sadness, or desire. The sadness type used madness-inducing fog, making it especially troublesome, while the hatred type wielded a level-draining ability called soul slaying, making it the most dangerous of the 3. The one they were facing, however, was confirmed to be the desire type. This variant possessed a regeneration ability known as life power absorption. Raven immediately stated that she could counter that regeneration using her injury worsening spell, and told everyone not to worry as she began casting. Her magic burst forth, binding both the Bone Knight and its mount. Since desire types were considered the easiest to deal with, the fight quickly tilted in their favor. As the creature struggled under the effects of her spell, Bjorn couldn't help but think that with such an advantage, something even better might happen. Moments later, the Bone Knight fell, and just as he had hoped, it dropped its essence. Bjorn was genuinely surprised. They had already obtained the corpse golem essence earlier, and now they had another one. He began to wonder if his luck had finally turned around. The dwarf congratulated him, assuming that the frontline fighters would naturally take the essence. Instead, Bjorn surprised everyone by offering it to Einar. Even she was caught off guard. Deep down, he did want the essence, but recalling his knowledge from the game and how he used to analyze things like a player reading a wiki, he concluded that it would be more efficient for Einar to take it. Life power absorption worked best with sword users, making it a perfect match for her. He remembered how reliable she had been ever since they entered the labyrinth together and decided that she was someone he could trust. Einar gratefully promised to repay him, and Bjorn felt that her loyal nature would make her a strong, long-term ally. Rather than rushing rushing for immediate gains, he chose to invest in her strength, believing that a stronger Einar would help him obtain an even better essence later. As Einar absorbed the essence, Bjorn suddenly realized that there was one important side effect he had forgotten to mention. The transformation completed, and Einar staggered slightly before asking if it was over. At first, she didn't feel much different, but as she looked around, something seemed off. Her eyes widened in shock as she noticed Bjorn appearing larger than before. Panic set in as she realized everyone around her looked bigger. She demanded to know what had happened. The dwarf bluntly explained that it wasn't them who had changed, she had shrunk. He even estimated her new height. Raven calmly added that the Bone Knight essence traded bone length for density, making her bones stronger and more durable while reducing her height. A status window outlined the changes improved agility, endurance, and bone density, along with reduced height and enhanced defensive abilities. Raven tried to reassure her that only her height had changed, but Einar was already breaking down. She cried out in despair, convinced that no one would see her as a warrior anymore, especially since she had already been looked down on for being a woman. Raven attempted to comfort her in her own way, saying that Einar now looked very pretty and that her softer features might even appeal to nobles. Instead of helping, that only made things worse, as Einar took it as confirmation that she no longer looked like a warrior. Bjorn quickly stepped in, firmly stating that everyone knew she was a capable warrior. At the same time, he privately admitted to himself that without her tattoos, she might indeed look like an ordinary woman, but he chose to focus on encouraging her instead. Meanwhile, the others seemed more interested in discussing the essence itself, with Raven even expressing curiosity about examining Einar later. Einar, however, felt completely hopeless, convinced that everything was ruined. Bjorn gently told her not to dwell on it so much. Just then, a massive three-eyed demon, the Death Fiend, appeared. Bjorn immediately told Einar to use this opportunity to test her new power. Even though she was still shaken by her transformation, she resolved to fulfill her role as a warrior. The Death Fiend charged forward, towering over her, but Einar didn't hesitate. She leaped forward and struck with a single, powerful swing, slicing the monster apart instantly. Both the mage and the dwarf were left stunned, unable to believe that the creature had been defeated in just one attack. Bjorn, on the other hand, was thrilled. He pointed out to Einar that she had become significantly stronger. Hearing that, Einar lit up and asked if that meant she was still a warrior. Bjorn corrected her, telling her that she wasn't just a warrior, she was now an even stronger one. The bond between the two of them stood out clearly, leaving the rest of the party impressed. As they moved ahead, the group arrived before a massive, ornate door, the entrance to the Guardian's chamber. The dwarf remarked that their journey together had been enjoyable, and admitted he finally understood why people chose to become explorers. Bjorn, reflecting on everything so far, realized just how fortunate they had been. He even found himself hoping that the Guardian might drop its essence as well. Thinking back, he counted their gains. Einar had already obtained an essence, and they had secured extra loot from the corpse golem, but that very streak of luck made him uneasy. Memories of his past life surfaced, especially moments in the hospital where hope had often been crushed. It made him question whether things had ever gone this smoothly for him before. Now, standing here in his new barbarian life, he instinctively asked himself what the worst possible outcome could be. The dwarf, still in high spirits, stepped forward and decided to open the door. As the handle turned, Bjorn's eyes narrowed. Something about it felt off. The color of the handle was different from what it should have been, and a sudden sense of danger hit him. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, shouting for the door to be shut immediately. The dwarf, confused, began to question him, but it was already too late. A system message appeared, announcing that the master of the blood-tinted castle was awakening. Bjorn cursed under his breath, realizing they had missed their chance to avoid it. An overwhelming presence flooded the corridor. The mage froze in horror, staring ahead as she struggled to process what she was seeing. Slowly, a grotesque figure emerged, a vampire seated like a king upon his throne, casually licking his lips as if savoring the moment. He spoke, remarking that it had been a long time since he had seen living beings. The mage quickly identified the creature, clarifying that it wasn't just any monster, it was a vampire, an advanced variant that normally appeared only on much higher floors. Worse, it was an intelligent, named entity. The monsters were divided into 4 categories. The first were mutants, where basic monsters gained specialized roles, like goblins becoming archers or swordsmen. The second were advanced variants, which exceeded the normal rank of their floor. The third were rare monsters, found only in special ruptures, such as the corpse golem, or even elusive mimics. The final and most dangerous category were advanced mutants named monsters that retained memories and identities, like the one before them. This creature is Vampire Duke Cambermere. The moment the realization hit, the group turned and fled. The dwarf and the mage shouted in panic, overwhelmed by the unexpected encounter, while Bjorn snapped at them to stop complaining and run. In his mind, he immediately recognized the threat. Cambermere was a 5th-rank boss, skilled in both combat and dark magic, and capable of acting independently. The mage cried out that the Guardian had never been an advanced mutant before, but Bjorn, recalling other rupture anomalies, knew that such irregularities could happen. Even after thousands of hours of gameplay, he had never personally encountered this boss, which showed just how rare it was. He had only ever seen it once before through an online gameplay stream in his previous life. As they ran, the mage demanded to know how Bjorn had sensed the danger before the door even opened. Annoyed by her timing, he told her to focus on escaping. Out loud, he simply claimed he had a bad feeling, but internally, he knew the truth. He had noticed the subtle difference in the door handle's color. He remembered how he had once tried to replicate another player's method for summoning this boss, eventually realizing that the handle color was the key indicator. He couldn't help but wonder if their recent good luck had distracted him enough that he almost missed it. The mage then argued that they wouldn't be able to escape without defeating the vampire, and suggested turning back to fight. Bjorn firmly rejected that idea, insisting they needed to reach an area exposed to sunlight first. Behind them, the vampire's voice echoed, mocking them for trying to flee. Shadows spread through the corridor as it cast a spell, Spiritification. Bjorn mentally cursed the overwhelming power of magical enemies. Recognizing the attack, the mage urgently ordered everyone to close their eyes. She immediately cast a powerful holy light spell, clashing against the vampire's spirit form and forcing out a piercing scream. Bjorn squinted against the blinding light, gripping his torch tightly. When the brightness faded, the vampire was gone. Einar confirmed in shock that it had vanished. Bjorn quickly analyzed the situation. Spiritification allowed the vampire to move rapidly in spirit form, but its real body remained fixed unless it followed up with a relocation technique. Since the mage had interrupted that process, they now had a limited window, about 3 minutes. Just as he concluded that the vampire would likely reawaken in its chamber, chaos struck again. The carrier suddenly shouted that the mage had collapsed. He lifted her, calling out in alarm as she struggled to breathe, blood leaking from her mouth. Bjorn immediately realized something was wrong. This wasn't a normal side effect of vampire abilities. A strange, ominous sensation stirred within him, making him suspect that another unknown essence might be involved. He recalled the gameplay video where the player had died before revealing what essence the vampire possessed. With too many unknown variables, he decided that survival was the only priority. When the dwarf worried about navigating without the mage, Bjorn stepped forward confidently, stating that he knew the way. He admitted that he had memorized the route and took the lead, deciding that staying alive mattered more than hiding his unusual knowledge. Drawing on his countless hours of gameplay, Bjorn guided the group through the corridors with precision. He was certain of the castle's layout, and there was no hesitation in his movements. Eventually, they reached the exit, leaving the dwarf in awe at how Bjorn had remembered everything after just one real run. But just as they thought they were safe, Bjorn felt something, and his eyes widened. The vampire's spirit was pursuing them once again. He immediately shouted for everyone to hurry. The group burst out into the sunlight at the dungeon's entrance. As the vampire's shadowy form followed, it began to weaken under the light. They sprinted forward, putting distance between themselves and the dungeon as the creature's presence recoiled from the brightness. Inside the sunlight, Einar and the carrier watched in shock as the remaining shadows tried to push forward, only to be forced back. The vampire's spirit gradually dissipated, retreating into the darkness as it failed to withstand the light. Exhausted, the group finally stopped outside. Bjorn pointed out that spiritification was especially vulnerable to sunlight, silently grateful that it was still daytime. The dwarf, catching his breath, stared at him in amazement, remarking that Bjorn had truly memorized the entire route after seeing it just once. He even asked if it was true that Bjorn had completed his coming-of-age ceremony only a month ago. Einar confidently responded, praising Bjorn as a great warrior and stating that it was only natural for him to accomplish something like that. She added that she could already see him becoming someone truly exceptional in the future. As the sun began to set, Einar grew uneasy and wondered what they should do next. Bjorn immediately urged the group to move quickly, stressing that they didn't have time to waste, especially while carrying the unconscious mage. The carrier insisted that they should head toward the outer castle walls for cover, believing that Miss Raven needed proper rest. Bjorn, however, snapped back sharply, warning that if they didn't get up and move immediately, they would all die. He ordered the man to protect the mage no matter the cost, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. Though shaken, the carrier gathered his resolve and agreed. As Bjorn glanced at the setting sun, he realized this was his only opportunity, no matter how much he thought about it. He told the group he would scout the area until the mage woke up, but in reality, he had a different plan in mind to retrieve something they had passed earlier. He approached a statue and smashed its head apart, revealing a hidden object inside. The moment he saw it, he confirmed that his suspicion had been right. The system explained that the item, known as Goddess Tears, was a single-use relic capable of healing allies while also damaging evil monsters. Later, Bjorn returned and greeted the mage, who had regained consciousness. He confirmed that they had managed to escape the vampire for now, but warned that it would return once the sun fully set, something she acknowledged. He then asked about her earlier condition. She explained that it was most likely caused by a skill called pain sharing. Bjorn internally noted that it was fortunate the vampire had only possessed an 8th rank essence. He then asked how long she would need to recover. She estimated around 20 minutes, after which she would be able to cast a 7th rank spell about 5 times. Bjorn found that number far from reassuring. Without hesitation, he asked if she knew any sun-based magic. The question immediately irritated her, as she pointed out that asking a mage to reveal their spell list was considered extremely rude. Bjorn acknowledged that he knew about such etiquette from his knowledge of the game, but dismissed it, deciding that it didn't matter. He reminded himself that, as a barbarian, he wasn't expected to follow such refined rules anyway, except perhaps in front of royalty. The mage was left speechless, clearly exasperated by his blunt attitude, but eventually gave in. She revealed that she could cast a sun attribute spell called Sunspot Sphere, a 6th rank spell similar in nature to a flame sphere. Bjorn immediately followed up by asking whether she could enhance it using attribute reinforcement. She confirmed that she could, but it would require an additional 10 minutes of preparation. After thinking it through, Bjorn decided that he would hold the line alone for 30 minutes. He instructed her to conserve her mana and not interfere during that time. She began to question his authority, asking why he was suddenly taking the lead, but Bjorn dismissed the concern, stating that no one else was more suitable, and that it didn't really matter anyway. The dwarf burst out laughing at that, openly declaring that he trusted Bjorn's judgment completely. He even boasted that he was good at reading people. Bjorn simply gave a cold acknowledgement in response. Time moved forward, and night finally took over completely as the vampire duke awakened, his voice carrying an ominous tone as he remarked that something felt strange, then slowly approached the group while saying that just seeing them was enough to make his bloodlust uncontrollable, even going as far as to taunt them by asking if they could guess the reason behind it. Bjorn and the others stood firm in formation, fully aware that their only objective now was to survive for 30 minutes until the mage's spell was ready, because anything less than that meant certain death. Without warning, the vampire attacked, slashing forward with his long claws and drawing blood before releasing a feral scream as his power erupted violently, forcing Bjorn to immediately take control of the situation, as he ordered Tarjan to retreat with Raven while he and the others held the line against the charging monster. To Bjorn, the situation felt exactly like the game, where even intelligent monsters rarely wasted time talking before diving straight into battle, and just as expected, the vampire lunged at them with terrifying speed, prompting a shout of warning as it closed the distance and unleashed another lethal strike. The dwarf stepped forward and intercepted the blow with his hammer, the impact sending blood flying everywhere as he strained under the pressure but still managed to grin, even joking about how heavy the vampire felt, which made Bjorn instantly recognize that the dwarf was using his first essence, the 7th rank monster Aontro's ability called Weight Balance, a skill that enhanced stability, granted strong resistance to knockback while grounded, and absorbed shock, making it an ideal ability for a frontline tank. Bjorn didn't waste time and coordinated with Einar, telling her he would attack from the left while she struck from another angle, and as she moved first, her sudden attack forced the vampire into a defensive position, her sword flashing repeatedly as she pressured him back, creating the opening Bjorn needed to lunge forward and land a heavy midair strike that should have made an impact, yet the vampire recovered instantly and darted away with a shriek, completely unfazed. At that moment, a sharp pain surged through Bjorn's hand, making him realize that the vampire's pain-sharing ability was transferring the damage back onto him, meaning every strike came with a cost, and before he could adjust further, the vampire's body dissolved into a swarm of ominous crows that rushed toward them all at once, forcing Bjorn to shout for everyone to stop them, as the dwarf stepped forward again to hold the line. The dwarf's second essence activated at that moment, living armor's emergency restoration reinforcing him further. Yet even with that, the battlefield turned chaotic as exploding blood lances rained down from all directions, tearing through the group and scattering gore everywhere, while Bjorn tried to block as much as possible, but still saw the infectious blood spreading across the ground, turning the entire area into a lethal hazard. Einar suddenly noticed a strange mark forming on the dwarf's forehead and panicked, asking what was happening, but Bjorn quickly realized that all of them had been affected and identified it as the activation of the vampire's sacrificial seal, which a system message confirmed as it declared that they had been selected as sacrificial offerings, temporarily boosting Vampire Duke Cambermere's physical power depending on how many marked targets were nearby. Bjorn immediately analyzed the situation, understanding that sacrificial seal worked alongside the vampire's passive immortality, massively increasing its regeneration as its health dropped, while another passive ability called Owner of Blood allowed it to absorb certain skills or traits from opponents whose blood it consumed, making it clear that this monster possessed 3 extremely dangerous abilities that worked together in a devastating combination. What made it worse was that this particular vampire could utilize all of them seamlessly, shifting into smoke to evade attacks, transforming into explosive or swarming crows, and using blood to summon threats, which made it overwhelmingly powerful even among high-rank bosses. And despite their efforts, the dwarf was eventually overpowered and thrown back, vomiting blood as he collapsed. Einar shouted in panic that Hikarad had gone down, but Bjorn immediately snapped at her not to lose focus, cursing the situation as he realized this level of difficulty was exactly why most players never made it past the 6th floor, then demanded to know how much longer Raven needed, only to hear that she still required 5 more minutes, which felt impossibly long given their condition. With their main tank down and both he and Einar already exhausted, Bjorn quickly concluded that continuing like this would only lead to their deaths, so he immediately changed tactics and ordered Einar to retreat while carrying the dwarf, promising that he would hold the vampire alone and urging them to move quickly. And although reluctant, Einar obeyed while Tarjan moved to support, leaving Bjorn standing alone at the front. He steadied himself and realized that what he was about to do wasn't normal combat, raising his shield as he prepared to endure rather than fight, just as the vampire slammed into him with claws and fangs bared, tearing into his body while briefly showing surprise at something unusual about him. And in response, Bjorn began drinking healing potions continuously, mentally provoking the vampire to keep attacking him without stopping. The assault became relentless, as Raven and Tarjan watched in shock, seeing a blazing aura begin to form around Bjorn while he endured hit after hit, his body being torn apart as he staggered and bled, making Raven demand to know what he was doing, as it looked like he was trying to survive purely by consuming potions while taking damage non-stop. Bjorn himself understood how insane this strategy was, because healing potions caused extreme pain, and the worse the injuries became, the more unbearable the agony would be. Yet empty vials kept falling to the ground as he continued drinking them one after another, smoke rising from his battered body as he forced himself to stay standing. Raven realized that at this rate he might die from sheer shock, but even then, Bjorn managed to block another violent attack, leaving even the vampire stunned that he could still move in such a state, and up close, his condition was horrifying as his body was being mutilated because he couldn't stop every strike, yet he still focused entirely on protecting his vital areas, intercepting every attack that could have killed him. Blades tore into his torso again and again, blood bursting out as he blocked another fatal strike, and despite everything, he remained standing purely through willpower, which made Tarjan recall something he had once read about barbarians, that their true strength didn't lie in raw stats, but in an unyielding mentality, and seeing Bjorn now, he finally understood that truth. Tarjan urged Raven to run, but she refused immediately, saying there was nowhere to escape and that the only way out of a rupture was to defeat its guardian. And as she watched Bjorn continue fighting for them, she began questioning herself, realizing that even he, someone newly initiated, was making the best possible decisions under pressure while she hesitated. Understanding that Bjorn's death would mean all of them would die, she resolved to act and ordered Tarjan to assist the dwarf so Einar could return to the front line, reminding herself that a mage's role was not just to attack from the rear, but to analyze situations and guide the team. And once she accepted that, she took out the essence vial containing the corpse golem essence. She decided that using it on Bjorn was the best possible choice and activated her targeting magic to enhance her accuracy before calling out to him and throwing the vial toward him with magic. And as Bjorn turned in surprise, the vial struck him and shattered instantly, releasing a surge of energy that entered his body. A system message appeared immediately, stating that the corpse golem's essence was being absorbed into his soul, followed by multiple notifications showing massive increases in his pain tolerance, strength, bone density, poison resistance, appetite, and more, as overwhelming power surged through him while steam and aura erupted from his body. Behind him, the massive spectral form of a corpse golem manifested, towering over the battlefield as his transformation completed and his status updated in real time, showing Bjorn Jandel's level and combat index rising dramatically, while confirming that the 7th rank corpse golem essence had now become part of his power. Bjorn felt his mind slipping into a fog as his vision blurred, the world around him distorting while he barely made out the vampire looming in front of him, its presence pressing down like a nightmare made real. And before he could fully stabilize himself, the vampire lunged again with claws aimed to finish him, forcing Bjorn to grit his teeth and remind himself that he had to stay standing no matter what. He reacted instantly, launching a blazing counterattack upward as the vampire moved through the air, fully aware that he could no longer block every strike, and making a brutal decision to sacrifice his arms and legs if necessary, while protecting only his vital points. Their clash erupted in a violent burst of energy, blue light flashing as they exchanged heavy blows. And at that moment another system message echoed, repeating that the corpse golem essence was still being absorbed into his soul while shattered vials lay scattered across the ground nearby, remnants of what had been used on him. As the fight continued, Bjorn suddenly realized something had changed. The vampire's claws were no longer piercing through him the way they had before, his hardened bones now resisting the damage. The vampire itself seemed momentarily stunned, held in place as Bjorn pieced together what had happened, and concluded that Raven must have forced the corpse golem essence into him. He felt irritation rise at the thought, knowing this unexpected development would completely disrupt the progression path he had planned for himself, yet at the same time, he couldn't ignore the immediate advantage it gave him, because in the short term their chances of survival had increased drastically. The biggest difference wasn't just durability, but the fact that he could now move more aggressively instead of standing there and enduring hits. And even though that might seem like a small change, it was enough to shift the flow of the battle. Bjorn refused to remain on the defensive any longer and pushed forward, shouting through blood and pain as he drove himself into another exchange. The mage's advanced healing began taking effect, rapidly restoring his damaged body, and as Raven steadied herself in the back, she wondered if she had finally managed to act properly in this fight, while Bjorn realized that with this level of regeneration, he could continuously recover even in the middle of combat. That realization sharpened his focus as he rushed the vampire again, forming a reckless but desperate plan in his mind, deciding that survival was now possible if he fully committed. Throwing himself back into close combat, he embraced the madness of his strategy and mentally labeled it as an immortal barbarian mode, tearing into the vampire without hesitation, while completely abandoning any concern for his own injuries. Because even as his flesh was ripped apart, he understood that the damage no longer mattered the same way it used to. Instead of avoiding hits, he leaned into them, deliberately letting more blood spill as he realized that his now acidic blood would burn the vampire from within. He grabbed another potion, preparing to stack even more regeneration on top of his current state, and allowed the vampire to continue tearing into him while coating it in corrosive blood, convinced that anything the creature did to him would be healed within seconds, thanks to the combined effects of the essence and potions. Slowly, the vampire's expression began to change, as it started feeling the accumulated damage and strain from the exchange. Bjorn took another heavy slash that sent blood spraying, and his companions shouted his name in alarm, but he refused to back down as Einar charged forward to support him, declaring that she would not leave him fighting alone. She swung her sword with full force, landing a massive strike that knocked the vampire backward and forced it onto the defensive for the first time. Bjorn immediately followed up, driving another crushing blow into the enemy, but the vampire retaliated just as fiercely, raking deep wounds across Bjorn's back. Bjorn coughed up blood, but still refused to fall, enduring everything as Einar continued her assault, while inside his mind he cursed the situation and wondered how much longer they had to hold on before the mage's prepared spell was ready. Just as he took another hit, Raven finally announced that her attack magic, Sunspot Sphere, was complete, and Bjorn instantly recognized that the decisive moment had arrived. Something struck nearby, signaling the start of their final move as the vampire grabbed hold of Bjorn, confused by the sudden shift in momentum, while Bjorn groaned through the pain and prepared himself for what came next. With a shout, he launched himself upward while dragging the vampire along, forcing both of them into the air toward the incoming attack, and while holding onto the creature, he yelled for the dwarf to act immediately. The dwarf responded without hesitation, lightning gathering around him as he activated his skill, Expulsion, releasing a massive surge of energy that shot toward the vampire, and in the next moment, a gigantic mass of lightning crashed down, engulfing the stunned creature and electrocuting it where it stood. A system message appeared, declaring that Vampire Count Cambermere had been rendered unconscious. Seeing the opportunity, Bjorn realized it was finally time to use the item he had been saving. He pulled out the vial he had obtained earlier, recalling the statue he had destroyed to retrieve it, and identified it as Goddess Tears. Without hesitation, he pinned the vampire down and declared that he would feed it this so-called treasure, forcing the vial into its mouth before slamming a punch into it and shouting for it to take it and die. The blessing activated instantly, designating the target area for destruction as a burst of holy light erupted around both Bjorn and the vampire, and the system confirmed that the blessing temporarily sealed all of the vampire's resistances, leaving it crippled and unable to move freely. Another update followed, stating that its condition had worsened from unconsciousness to full paralysis due to the overwhelming shock. Raven shouted desperately for Bjorn to escape the blast zone, but at that exact moment, she released the fully prepared 6th rank spell, Sunspot Sphere, warning that anything caught within its range would be incinerated. The blazing sphere descended rapidly, heading straight toward Bjorn and the immobilized vampire, and as Bjorn saw it coming, he cursed inwardly, realizing too late that he should have retreated when he had the chance. The spell detonated in a massive explosion, engulfing everything in a sea of flames, and a system message followed, stating that Bjorn had been caught in the blast and rendered unconscious, while the vampire triggered its pain-sharing ability at the same moment, causing the mage, the dwarf, Einar, and Tarjan to all collapse unconscious as well. Bjorn's consciousness flickered weakly as he woke up in overwhelming agony, his body barely responding while he lay in a pool of blood, struggling to even process whether they had actually won, and as silence filled the area, he began to question if the vampire was truly dead, or if something had gone horribly wrong. Forcing himself up, despite the pain, he looked around and saw all of his allies collapsed, which made him realize he had to assess the situation alone. But the moment his eyes landed on the vampire, his expression froze in shock. The creature was still standing. Its body was horribly burned and mutilated, yet it was alive, and that realization sent a wave of panic through him as system panels appeared explaining its abilities, showing that Immortal's skill drastically boosted its regeneration when near death, while Source of Darkness allowed it to survive as long as its heart remained intact. Bjorn watched in frustration as the vampire's shredded flesh began knitting back together at an unnatural speed, immediately understanding that if he didn't act now, it would fully recover and all of their efforts would be meaningless. With everyone else unconscious, he accepted that he was the only one left to finish this fight. Barefoot, bleeding, and barely able to stand, he dragged himself forward step by step, leaving bloody footprints behind as he forced his body to move, knowing he had to kill the vampire before it regained full strength. Reaching it, he collapsed onto its body, breathing heavily as he pinned it down, noticing that everything except the heart had been completely destroyed, which made it clear to him that the heart was the true weak point. Gathering what little strength he had left, Bjorn raised his arms and realized that the vampire had instinctively protected its heart during the sunspot sphere by shielding it with its arm, and with that realization, his anger surged as he began slamming his fists into its chest repeatedly, shouting for it to finally die while recalling the last skill he could still use. Pressing his hands over the vampire's heart, he activated Flesh Explosion, and the moment it triggered, everything around the heart erupted into a gruesome crater of blood and destruction. The backlash hit him instantly, pain surging through his own body as he cursed through clenched teeth, but he understood that stopping now meant death, so he forced himself to keep going, triggering Flesh Explosion again and again, tearing apart the regenerating flesh while his own body suffered equally from the damage. Each explosion pushed him closer to his limit, his vision blurring further as the battlefield turned into a chaotic blur of gore, yet he refused to stop. Even as a warning appeared, showing that his HP had dropped below 1%. He realized that if he continued, he would die alongside the vampire, but he accepted that outcome without hesitation and unleashed another explosion directly at the heart, pushing his HP to 0 as a system message announced the start of a death countdown. Even then, he didn't stop. Despite his HP reached 0, he continued activating Flesh Explosion, driven purely by willpower, knowing that stopping now would make everything meaningless. System messages began showing his mentality points draining continuously as he pushed beyond his limits, blood covering his body as he repeated the skill again and again, telling himself that if he was going to die anyway, there was no reason to hold anything back. His mentality kept dropping with every activation, yet he remained seated over the vampire, surrounded by smoke and destruction, breathing heavily as ash drifted from his ruined arms. When he finally glanced down, he realized both of his hands had been completely destroyed. Even so, he didn't hesitate. If his hands were gone, then he would use his entire body instead. With that resolve, he triggered one final Flesh Explosion, using himself as the catalyst, and the resulting blast consumed everything in a blinding eruption. A system message confirmed that Vampire Count Cambermere had finally been defeated, granting him experience, and Bjorn recognized that the monster had truly been killed only because he had pushed himself to the very end. Additional system notifications followed, awarding bonus experience for defeating a high-ranking mutant guardian and announcing that he had leveled up, though he immediately noted that leveling up did not restore HP in this world. Then new prompts appeared, showing his spirit power increasing along with his maximum essence capacity, and to his surprise, the rare Guardian Essence, something that only had a 1/3 drop chance, had actually appeared, and before he could react, the vampire's Guardian Essence was absorbed into his soul in a burst of light. Another system window explained that due to the passive ability Source of Darkness, he could no longer die unless his heart was destroyed, while additional notifications showed that the immortal effect had rapidly restored his HP, pushing it back above 1% and canceling the death countdown entirely. An achievement message followed, rewarding him with a permanent increase in mentality for surviving even after the countdown had begun, and his updated status window displayed Bjorn Jandal at level 3, with significantly improved stats and the newly acquired Guardian Vampire Essence. Sometime later, Bjorn suddenly jolted awake, gasping for air, as he realized with shock that he was still alive, and as his vision cleared, he saw that his head was resting in Einar's lap, who greeted him happily as he tried to process what had happened. He immediately asked where the others were, and she explained that they had left 3 days ago, worried about his condition, which shocked him further as he learned he had been unconscious for 3 full days. The realization hit him hard as he exclaimed that if 3 days had passed, then it must already be the crucial 7th day, and as he tested his fingers, he was stunned to find his hands fully restored, with no visible injuries remaining on his body. Then suddenly, something else hit him, and he demanded to know where his pants had gone. Einar casually admitted that she had removed them because they were completely destroyed and getting in the way, then cheerfully told him not to feel embarrassed while praising him as a great warrior, which only made him desperately ask her to stop talking. After that, she began explaining what had happened while he was unconscious, saying that the dwarf had taken the numbered item while the mage had taken the rupture stones. Bjorn quickly pieced things together, realizing that since he was alive, he must have successfully absorbed the vampire's Guardian Essence, and from that, he inferred that the Guardian had dropped all 3 rare items, remembering their earlier agreement to decide ownership of the stones by rolling dice. Einar then recalled how the mage had refused to follow that agreement, insisting that she needed the stones to recover her losses and taking them for herself, while the dwarf had remained indifferent, saying he would accept whatever decision was made since he hadn't contributed much. However, Einar herself had protested, only for the mage to argue that Bjorn had already received the best reward possible, meaning he had no right to complain about her taking the stones. Hearing that, Bjorn realized that only the mage knew he had absorbed the vampire's essence, and he also remembered that she had given him the corpse golem essence, along with all of her remaining potions, meaning she had technically gained nothing and only suffered losses during the entire rupture. Even so, Einar remained angry, insisting that the mage had acted selfishly by taking everything and leaving without waiting for him to wake up, and Bjorn decided that it was safer to agree with her perspective. Einar immediately brightened and thanked him enthusiastically for supporting her, and he simply replied that it was obvious, since they were comrades. When Einar asked if they should leave the labyrinth now, Bjorn shook his head and said there was still one thing he needed to retrieve, thinking that even if most of the loot had been taken, that particular item should still be there. Then, remembering his current state, he awkwardly asked Einar if she had anything he could wear. Later, a system message appeared announcing that Bjorn had entered the first floor's crystal cave, followed immediately by another message stating that the labyrinth itself had now been shut down and that he was being transported back to the city of Rafdonia. When he arrived, still shirtless and marked with scars, Bjorn expected that everything they had endured would at least translate into a decent profit. At the exchange, a clerk carefully counted the earnings and reported that they had made 231,520 stone. Bjorn felt that the amount seemed underwhelming compared to the hardships they had gone through, but he accepted it since he had gained 2 powerful essences, reaching out to take the heavy pouch with quiet satisfaction. Before he could even secure it, the bag was suddenly yanked from his hand, catching him completely off guard. The clerk's tone shifted as she suspiciously pointed out that such an amount was unusually high for a 9th rank explorer and demanded to know what he was carrying in his backpack. Bjorn, confused and uneasy, questioned why she was asking, noting that no one had ever treated him like this before. Just then, a firm voice ordered him not to move, and when he turned, he found himself surrounded by armed guards with spears aimed directly at him. Shocked and cursing internally, he was informed that the discussion would continue in an interrogation room. At the same time, elsewhere in the city plaza, a group of returning explorers gathered. Among them stood a visibly exhausted Erwin, who wiped the sweat from her brow while reflecting on how unexpectedly difficult the 3rd floor had been. She recalled facing the overwhelming power of 7th rank monsters, far beyond anything she had encountered before, remembering in particular a massive armored boar-like creature that had left a strong impression. Thinking back on the expedition, she also remembered how Teresia had fought a 6th rank monster they encountered by chance, making the entire experience feel like a true adventure rather than a desperate struggle for survival, and the thought of it made her excited to share everything with Bjorn. Later, when she returned to the Stone Exchange Center with her party, she realized that Bjorn wasn't there. Assuming she had simply misjudged the timing, she cheerfully imagined showing him the new essence she had obtained during the raid, wondering if he would test it the same way he had before. The memory of that moment, when his testing had painfully twisted her shoulder, still made her blush, yet despite that, she found herself wanting to see him even more. She approached the guild counter alone to exchange her loot, and the staff expressed surprise when they saw that she had earned 184,100 stone, despite being only a 9th rank explorer. She explained that she had been part of a group led by her sister, and when asked for confirmation, she provided Teresia's name. The clerk checked the records, verified that her sister was indeed a certified explorer, and approved the transaction, allowing Erwin to leave with her reward. Returning to their lodging in the quiet town, Erwin felt at ease and began humming softly as she took a bath after the exhausting trip. While getting dressed, she wondered whether Bjorn had already returned, and as she put on a simple white dress, she decided that she would treat him to a nice dinner using her earnings. Smiling to herself, she felt a growing sense of anticipation, eager to hear about his experiences and see him again. However, when she arrived at Bjorn's lodging and asked about him, she was told that the occupant of room 302 had still not returned. The answer caught her off guard, and a sense of unease crept in. For a moment, her thoughts drifted toward something darker, but she quickly pushed it away, convincing herself that he would return soon. Days passed, then an entire week, and there was still no sign of him. One day, she noticed an employee clearing out his room, and rushed over in alarm, demanding to know why they were taking his belongings. The staff member, already irritated, replied that they had waited long enough out of consideration for her, and pointed out that the labyrinth had closed some time ago, meaning the situation should already be clear. Erwin's hands trembled as she clutched her skirt, struggling to accept what that implied, but the answer came anyway. If Bjorn had not returned by now, it could only mean that he had died inside the labyrinth. Later, under heavy rain outside the guild, Erwin sat collapsed on the ground, completely devastated as people passed by and glanced at her. A figure approached and knelt in front of her, Teresia, calling out to her. Through tear-filled eyes, Erwin slowly looked up from her despair. Teresia told her she had heard the news and urged her to stand, asking how long she intended to remain like this. Erwin's eyes burned with grief and anger as she looked at her sister and declared that she wanted to become stronger, resolving that she would gain enough power to protect the people she cared about. Meanwhile, Bjorn had been locked up in jail, and a full week had already passed since he was imprisoned under accusations of being a plunderer. During his first interrogation, the officer questioned him about the crossbow he carried, openly mocking the idea of a barbarian using such a weapon, while Bjorn calmly explained that it was loot taken from attackers who had tried to kill him. The interrogator responded coldly that they would determine who had attacked first, which immediately made Bjorn protest that imprisoning him over this was unreasonable, especially when something about the situation felt clearly off. He reflected on how guild customs usually avoided questioning explorers without solid evidence, but the interrogator countered by saying that the rules had recently changed, allowing for stricter investigations of 9th rank explorers in order to reduce plundering incidents. That explanation made everything click for Bjorn, as he realized that someone like him, a low-ranked outsider carrying significant loot and lacking any powerful connections, was the easiest kind of target for such enforcement. The interrogator pressed him again about the crossbow, and Bjorn repeated his story about being ambushed and taking it from the attackers, deliberately leaving out any mention of the red-haired woman involved. Remembering the promise he had made, he chose to protect her identity, knowing that revealing her existence might lead others to suspect something unnatural about him. However, the questioning took a sharper turn when the interrogator asked how Bjorn had survived a stab to the neck without even leaving a scar. That question caught him off guard, making him realize that his scars had indeed disappeared, which led him to suspect that the vampire essence he had absorbed had healed even those old wounds. Despite initially wanting to stay cautious, he ended up revealing information about the rupture itself. The interrogator immediately dismissed his claims, laughing at the idea of a vampire appearing in a third-floor rupture and mocking him as a barbarian who couldn't even lie properly. Frustration boiled over as Bjorn demanded that they bring in a mage capable of verifying his memories through magic. The interrogator rejected the request outright, explaining that such procedures were reserved only for higher-ranked explorers, even if Bjorn was willing to pay for it. He added bluntly that if Bjorn were to die, they would simply take his money anyway, so there was no reason to waste resources on him. After a moment of consideration, he begrudgingly admitted that he might consider it if the mage in question was affiliated with the guild. That first day of interrogation ended in the worst possible way for Bjorn. 2 days later, they attempted to break him using mentality-based magic, but his high mentality stat allowed him to resist it completely. A guild mage failed to penetrate his mental defenses and suggested that they might need someone from the magic tower instead, while Bjorn silently cursed the entire situation. Even so, the interrogator refused to involve more important mages over what he considered a trivial matter, completely ignoring Bjorn's mentions of Raven and the dwarf. Instead, he repeatedly pressured Bjorn to give up and confess, making it increasingly clear that they were trying to force a false admission of guilt out of him. By the 7th interrogation, the situation escalated further when the interrogator burst in, claiming they now had conclusive evidence. Bjorn immediately recognized what they were referring to: the message stone he had taken during his fight with the Crystal Union. The interrogator accused him of plundering, explaining that the stone belonged to a deceased explorer, and that they had already received statements from the Crystal Union supporting the accusation. The verdict came swiftly. Bjorn would be executed in 3 hours. At that moment, Bjorn understood that the situation could no longer be resolved through words alone, yet he also knew that escaping would permanently brand him as a fleeing criminal. Even so, he realized there was no other way to survive unless he acted immediately and found a way to prove his innocence later. Gripping the bars of his cell, he made his decision. Activating his ability, Flesh Explosion, he channeled destructive energy into his own body, and in the next instant, a massive blast tore through the jail, destroying part of the structure in a violent eruption of blood and fire. When the smoke cleared, Bjorn stepped out from the wreckage, barefoot, burned, and steaming, yet still alive. He moved forward toward a terrified guard, his presence radiating pure killing intent as he advanced through the shattered remains of the cell. The guard panicked, unable to comprehend how Bjorn had survived such an explosion, and before he could even finish shouting about an escaping prisoner, Bjorn crushed him underfoot. Looking down at the lifeless body, Bjorn hardened his resolve, deciding that what he had done was necessary. With his damaged hand dripping blood and energy swirling around him, he committed fully to escaping this place. Standing over the fallen jailer, his body still steaming from the strain, he took the key ring from the guard's belt and began moving through the corridor. As he passed by the other cells, prisoners called out to him, begging him to free them as well. Bjorn briefly considered that some of them might actually be criminals, but as someone who had been falsely accused and thrown into this situation, he decided that their guilt or innocence was no longer his concern. Without hesitation, he began unlocking the cells. The prisoners erupted in cheers, celebrating both their freedom and the barbarian who had released them, as they rushed out into the chaos. On the first floor of the guild lobby, everything seemed normal as unrelated explorers went about their business, completely unaware of the chaos that was about to erupt, until the guards stationed at the main entrance suddenly heard a disturbance and reacted in confusion, only for the doors to violently burst open as bodies slammed into them from the outside. A wave of armed escapees poured into the lobby, creating instant panic as a guild official shouted in alarm that prisoners had broken loose, while staff members quickly called out that any explorers who helped subdue them would be rewarded, prompting several guild fighters to step forward and clash head-on with the rampaging prisoners in a violent melee. Bjorn observed the situation calmly and immediately understood that since the escapees lacked proper weapons, the armed explorers would eventually overpower them, so he used the chaos as cover to slip away and head upstairs, moving quickly through the stairway while hoping the disorder below would buy him at least 5 minutes, because time was something he could not afford to waste. As he ran, he made it clear to himself that his goal was not simply to escape, because what he truly wanted went far beyond running away from this place. When he reached the upper level, he saw guards scrambling to block access to the branch manager's office, and without hesitation, he activated Flesh Explosion in his hand, unleashing another devastating blast that tore through the guards and filled the area with gore, shocking those below who witnessed the explosion, while even some prisoners caught in the aftermath screamed as the acidic blood burned them, revealing the dangerous nature of his body. Immediately after, Bjorn activated Sacrificial Seal, converting the deaths around him into raw physical power as the skill amplified his strength based on the number of sacrifices within range, and as a red aura engulfed him, his presence became overwhelming, his body surging with unnatural power as he smirked and declared that his doping is complete before launching himself forward with explosive speed. He crashed into the remaining guards like a force of nature, his sheer ferocity terrifying them as he slammed one armored opponent into the ground with such force that the man coughed up blood instantly, completely crushed by the impact, while another guard charged him in anger, only to be met with a brutal counterattack that dropped him just as quickly, and one after another, the defenders fell as Bjorn tore through them effortlessly in the chaos of the lobby. Those watching were left stunned, as they saw his wounds healing almost instantly, unable to comprehend how such regeneration was possible. But before they could react, Bjorn continued his assault, smashing another guard who questioned his abilities, while inside, he felt the combined effects of his skills surging and boiling within him, granting him overwhelming strength as he knocked down multiple opponents at once when they rushed him together. Even he found himself marveling at how powerful this state felt, recognizing the immense doping effect of his abilities, while the remaining guards began to hesitate, unable to understand how a mere 9th-rank barbarian could reach such a level of strength, and Bjorn realized that since this branch typically dealt only with low-rank explorers, no one had ever expected someone like him to become this dangerous. He continued forward without slowing down, his attacks ripping through the remaining defenders in a relentless storm until the path ahead was completely cleared, allowing him to approach the large doors leading to the branch manager's office, which he kicked open without hesitation, only to immediately realize he had walked into an ambush as a man inside attacked him the moment he entered. The guard lunged forward and slashed at Bjorn's leg, drawing blood and confidently believing he had landed a decisive blow. But that confidence vanished instantly when Bjorn's blood splashed onto his face and the man screamed in agony as the acidic blood burned into his skin, realizing too late the true danger of his opponent. Hearing the scream, a young woman rushed into the room and called out in alarm, only to freeze in shock when she saw the situation, recognizing the intruder and understanding what was happening, while the injured man desperately warned her not to come closer, revealing that she was the district manager's daughter. Bjorn immediately recognized the opportunity, realizing that her presence could completely shift the situation in his favor, while the injured man threatened him, warning that harming her would lead to severe consequences. But Bjorn ignored the warning, knocking the man unconscious and deciding to adapt his plan around this unexpected advantage. Although he had not originally intended to go this far, he quickly concluded that taking the district manager's daughter hostage would dramatically change the balance of power, and as she reacted angrily to his calm demeanor, calling him terrible, Bjorn snapped back at her, accusing her of acting as if everything revolved around her and bluntly telling her to stay quiet, while internally questioning what was wrong with her attitude. Holding her firmly, he issued his demands to the guards, ordering them to bring the original interrogator along with a mage from the magic tower, making it clear that if they failed to comply, the woman's life would be forfeit, and without giving them time to argue, he dragged her out onto the balcony, preparing for his next move. Taking a deep breath, Bjorn raised his voice and shouted loudly enough to draw the attention of everyone outside, standing in full view with the hostage as he made his declaration, announcing that it was time for his retaliation. And as the crowd gathered and recognized him as the escaped prisoner, he introduced himself clearly as Bjorn Jandal. He declared that he was a 9th-rank explorer who had been falsely accused and targeted by the guild, stating publicly that they had tried to frame and execute him despite his innocence, and he repeated his claim with conviction, making sure that everyone heard him, knowing that by turning the situation into a public spectacle, the guild would no longer be able to quietly cover up what they had done. Far away at the magic tower, a reporter report reached the high-ranking mages that the Explorer Guild was requesting immediate assistance, and an elderly mage calmly explained that a branch manager had described the situation as a lunatic causing chaos inside the guild. Hearing that, a younger blonde mage, who was none other than Raven, frowned at the description and questioned what kind of person they were calling a psycho, prompting the elder to elaborate that the man had freed prisoners, taken the district manager's daughter hostage, and was demanding the presence of a mage, which made Raven scoff and call him both stupid and insane. Even so, since she already had someone she wanted to check on, she accepted the request and decided to go, curious about this troublemaker. Back at the guild, the tension remained thick as Bjorn held the frightened girl firmly while the situation stalled. In front of him, Raven stood flying, immediately recognizing him and reacting with anger as she demanded to know what he thought he was doing, scolding him for recklessly risking his life again. Yet despite her frustration, she understood the urgency, and Bjorn quickly asked her to use memory verification magic to prove his innocence. Seeing the time pressure, Raven became serious and agreed, but only on the condition that he would owe her a favor in the future, which he accepted without hesitation, as long as it was within his ability. Satisfied, she stepped forward and placed her glowing hand on his forehead, casting a memory spell. But to her surprise, it failed to penetrate his mind due to his strong mental resistance, making her ask if he possessed any anti-psychological equipment, while Bjorn insisted he had nothing and urged her to try another method, leaving the hostage confused as she watched the exchange. At the same time, behind him, the staff checked on the injured branch manager, who was already shaken by the chaos spreading across the first floor, and demanded to know what had happened, while the inspector began explaining the situation, but suddenly froze when he noticed Raven. Recognizing her instantly, he immediately pointed at Bjorn and declared him responsible for everything, but the branch manager calmly stated that he was already aware and reminded the inspector that he had personally handled the case, then leaned forward and asked what actual evidence existed to prove Bjorn was a plunderer. The inspector insisted that framing was impossible, and argued that Bjorn had turned in an unusually large number of magic crystals for a mere 9th-rank explorer, adding that his backpack had been filled with what appeared to be stolen equipment, and further claimed that a message stone traced back to a Crystal Union member who had testified that Bjorn had murdered innocents and looted them. The branch manager countered that this was nothing more than an unverified statement and questioned why no magic had been used to confirm it, but the inspector shouted that magic had not been used because Bjorn had told absurd lies about surviving a fatal neck wound thanks to a vampire essence, emphasizing how ridiculous it sounded to claim that a vampire had appeared on the first floor of a rupture, and he justified his decision by saying he could not call in high-ranking mages over such an unbelievable story. At that moment, Raven calmly interrupted and stated that Bjorn had indeed consumed a vampire essence on the first floor, immediately shocking both the inspector and the branch manager, who demanded clarification, and she responded by saying she had personally witnessed it, even adding with a teasing tone that they wouldn't be able to verify her claim with magic either. The inspector tried to protest, arguing that even if she knew Bjorn, she shouldn't lie to protect him, but Raven's expression turned cold as she asked if he was accusing her of lying, which made him immediately panic and backtrack, and as she pressed him further, she accused him of looking down on mages, causing him to collapse to his knees and apologize repeatedly. The influence of the magic tower was overwhelming, with its mages holding status comparable to aristocrats, and the branch manager quickly realized that offending someone like Raven was a serious mistake, so he attempted to calm the situation and explain that without proper context, Bjorn's story had simply sounded impossible, while Raven acknowledged that a vampire appearing on the first floor had never happened before, but firmly stated that such an event was not impossible, sharply criticizing the manager for dismissing it outright and reminding him that the labyrinth still held countless unknowns. As she pressed him with that reasoning, the manager was left speechless, forced to reconsider his stance, while Bjorn watched the exchange and noted how ruthless Raven could be even towards someone of authority, proving exactly what kind of mage she was. At that moment, a new figure entered the scene, addressing Bjorn as the barbarian everyone had been talking about, and when Bjorn asked who he was, the man introduced himself as Niall Urbans, arriving alongside armored guards, calmly remarking that Bjorn had caused quite a mess, while the hostage girl cried out to him, revealing that he was her father, and Bjorn immediately understood that this man was the district manager overseeing multiple guild branches. The narration briefly explained the structure of the guild, describing how it managed clans, provided support through magic, and controlled information, with multiple branches led by branch managers, all overseen by 13 district managers who ranked just below the guild master, making Niall one of the most powerful figures present, though even he had limits on what he could do. Suddenly, another man was dragged into the room and thrown to the ground, and Niall calmly stated that he had heard they were looking for this individual, causing the inspector to react in terror as he recognized him, while Bjorn stepped forward and confirmed that the man was Hartz from the Crystal Union, then directly accused him of giving false testimony regarding the message stone. As Hartz tried to deny it, Raven immediately cast a spell that revealed the truth, declaring that he was lying, which stunned everyone present, and Bjorn realized that with a magic tower mage exposing him, Hartz had no way out. Niall confirmed Bjorn's identity, and then publicly declared that Bjorn Jandal was innocent. Bjorn immediately asked what would happen to Hartz, and Niall responded that since the situation had been caused by false testimony, a full investigation would follow before determining punishment, while Bjorn added that he wanted the entire Crystal Union clan investigated as well, which Niall agreed to, noting that the group had already been problematic for some time. Niall then turned his attention to the inspector and informed him that he would be dismissed for mishandling the case, ignoring his desperate protests, and coldly stated that all of his past cases would be reviewed, warning that any misconduct uncovered would be punished accordingly, leaving the inspector trembling as he realized the severity of his situation. After that, Niall shifted his focus back to Bjorn and stated that it was time to discuss compensation, offering to promote him directly to a 7th rank explorer and provide new equipment, but Bjorn immediately dismissed the offer internally, realizing that a rank increase was meaningless to him since he could achieve that through essences. And when Niall mentioned his lack of experience, Bjorn openly challenged him to bring in any 7th rank explorer to prove his strength, releasing his battle aura and daring anyone to face him, while Raven quickly urged him to calm down. Raven then intervened, stating that Bjorn deserved far better compensation, directly addressing Niall and pointing out that no other explorer had survived a 5th rank vampire guardian and absorbed its essence, criticizing him for treating basic restitution as proper compensation, which left Niall with no choice but to ask what Bjorn actually wanted. Bjorn smirked slightly and declared that he wanted money, deciding to demand at least 5 million stones, even admitting to himself that the amount was outrageous but justifying it with the thought that he could play the role of a foolish barbarian. And to everyone's surprise, Niall agreed immediately to pay the full amount on the spot. Raven, taken aback by how easily he accepted, and quickly added that her own fee of 1 million stones for her assistance was separate, and Niall, clearly resigned, agreed again while asking her to pass along his gratitude to her master, a mage of even higher standing. Bjorn reflected quietly on just how immense the influence of the magic tower truly was in this world. The scene shifted to the Magic Tower, specifically to Alua Raven's personal laboratory at the Altemian school, and later, inside that cluttered and chaotic space, Bjorn found himself looking around in confusion, wondering why everything was such a mess, while Raven quietly giggled to herself as if completely unbothered by the disorder. She casually handed him a beaker filled with blue liquid and told him to drink it, which immediately made him wary as he asked what exactly it was, then cautiously took a sip and guessed that it was probably just water, while Raven, almost teasingly, offered to give him something more interesting if he preferred. Deciding that water was the safest option, Bjorn drank it anyway, all while thinking that the container had probably held some kind of strange monster fluid before. After that, he asked her directly why she had brought him to her lab in the first place, and with a small smile, Raven reminded him that he had promised to do her a favor, which made Bjorn recall that he had only agreed under pressure at the time, though he also reasoned that maintaining a good relationship with a mage was not a bad idea, so he clarified that he would help only if her request was reasonable, prompting her to finally explain her intention. With dramatic flair, Raven declared that she wanted to study the vampire essence he had absorbed, insisting that the research would benefit him as well, since no one had ever consumed such an essence before, and there could be unknown side effects that only proper study could uncover. The narration emphasized just how rare this situation was, noting that even corpse golems were already considered rare research subjects, yet a vampire guardian appearing in a rupture had never been recorded, making Bjorn's case completely unprecedented. Watching her excitement, Bjorn couldn't help but think that mages resembled obsessive graduate students, completely absorbed in their work, but at the same time, he admitted that her reasoning sounded fair, until he suddenly connected something and realized that her earlier behavior during the settlement negotiation had been linked to this very goal. A memory surfaced of Raven ensuring that the guild did not officially record his consumption of the vampire essence, something he had appreciated at the time, but now he understood that she had done it primarily to secure exclusive research access to him. Raven awkwardly admitted that he wasn't wrong, clearly embarrassed at being seen through so easily, and quickly tried to salvage the situation by proposing that he assist her in the lab only once a week for 3 hours over a period of 6 months. But Bjorn immediately rejected the duration as excessive and negotiated it down to 3 months instead, also demanding that he be allowed to see the research results. Raven protested, reminding him that he owed her for saving his life and helping him secure 5 million stones, But Bjorn remained firm, thinking that if he didn't set boundaries now, this relationship would become one-sided, and countered by saying that she should actually be the one paying him. That statement completely shocked Raven, who demanded to know why she would ever need to pay, but Bjorn reflected that anyone who failed to stand up for themselves was a fool, and stepped closer, looming over her in a way that made her visibly uneasy as he accused her of forcing the corpse golem essence on him without his consent. Raven immediately pushed back, arguing that she had given him a valuable essence for free, and even shoved him in frustration. But Bjorn didn't back down, stating that she had done it to save herself, not him, which still made it a problem, and he firmly insisted that he had never wanted that essence in the first place, then demanded 10 million stones as compensation, estimating that as the cost required to remove it at a temple. Raven reacted explosively, calling him insane for even considering removing such a rare power, but Bjorn calmly explained that the essence had interfered with his long-term plans, and that from his perspective, it had caused harm, so compensation was justified, adding that mages who couldn't absorb essences themselves tended to overvalue them without understanding their strategic impact, and suggested that she consult an actual explorer if she doubted him. Determined to prove him wrong, Raven stormed off and activated her communication crystal ball, connecting to a distant contact, and when a voice answered, she introduced herself to an explorer named Patsran, referencing his previous dealings with her mentor, before presenting him with a hypothetical scenario about someone being forced to take an unwanted essence. Bjorn watched closely as Raven listened to the response, and after thinking it through, Patsran gave an honest answer, stating that he would be very angry in that situation, which immediately satisfied Bjorn as it aligned perfectly with his own stance. Still unwilling to concede, Raven pushed further, asking whether that anger would remain even if the essence in question was an extremely rare 7th rank one. But Patsran responded that rarity didn't matter, because taking an essence that wasn't part of one's plan would only hinder progress, reinforcing Bjorn's belief that explorers understood the importance of balancing their abilities far better than mages did. As Raven absorbed this, she began to realize that forcing an essence onto someone could completely disrupt their growth path, and with growing unease, she asked what kind of compensation would be appropriate if such a mistake occurred, to which Patsran replied that he would demand money, suggesting 15 million stones as a reasonable amount. The sheer number left Raven horrified, making her comment that temples seem to value money more than gods themselves, and in desperation, she asked what someone should do if they couldn't pay, only for Patsran to answer bluntly that in such a case, he might simply break the offender's neck if they were standing in front of him. Hearing that, Raven panicked internally, while Bjorn calmly observed that people in this world often lacked imagination when it came to consequences, and concluded that Patsran was clearly a highly experienced explorer who understood essence balance deeply, noting that if she had asked a struggling low-rank explorer instead, they might have simply accepted any essence without question. Satisfied, Bjorn mentally declared that the difference in perspective had decided the argument and pressed Raven to admit that she had been wrong. A booming laugh suddenly echoed through the room, interrupting the tense atmosphere as an elderly mage stepped in, clearly amused that a barbarian had just out-argued one of his own kind. The old man introduced himself as Dayan Tevelian, Raven's mentor and the master of the Eltemian school, and while Raven immediately protested that she hadn't been crying, Bjorn quickly realized the weight behind that name, understanding that this was the powerful figure who controlled multiple floors of the magic tower, and whose authority could rival, or even surpass, that of a district manager. Dayan cheerfully admitted that he had been eavesdropping on their entire discussion and found it thoroughly entertaining, his overwhelming presence making it obvious that Raven's soundproofing had been completely useless against him, which only embarrassed her further as he casually pointed out that both her spellwork and her reasoning still had clear flaws. He then explained that his curiosity had brought him here, as it was rare for him to see a living barbarian up close, since most of them usually arrived as corpses or scattered remains, and with a disturbingly amused grin, he elaborated that many of those specimens were reduced to nothing more than hearts by the time they reached him, which immediately made Bjorn fall silent, growing wary of the eccentric archmage standing before him. Dayan let out an ominous chuckle before suddenly bursting into loud laughter, telling Bjorn to relax because it had only been a joke, though the unsettling tone left Bjorn questioning whether that was truly meant as humor, and deciding to respond in kind, he made his own crude remark about cracking open the old man's skull, which instantly startled Dayan. Bjorn quickly clarified that he was joking as well, and even urged the old mage to loosen up and laugh, going so far as to casually pat his head, while Raven watched in disbelief, wondering if Bjorn had completely lost his mind. For a brief moment, Bjorn himself wondered if he had crossed a dangerous line, but to his surprise, Dayan suddenly broke into delighted laughter, praising Bjorn's boldness and claiming that he was not easily offended by jokes, even though it was obvious from his expression that some part of him was still irritated. Bjorn brushed it off by leaning into his barbarian persona, while Diane shifted the conversation and offered an alternative to the 10 million stones Bjorn had demanded earlier. Instead of money, Diane presented a rare artifact known as the Frost Spirit Ring, casually mentioning that it was a numbered item despite its high serial number, which immediately caught Bjorn's attention, as numbered items were extremely rare pieces of equipment that could only be obtained from Rupture Guardians, each possessing unique and powerful abilities. Bjorn was genuinely surprised that such an item was being handed over so casually, and asked what made the ring valuable, to which Dian explained that it could seal one ability from an essence Bjorn had already consumed, specifically suggesting that it could suppress the inconvenient acidic blood trait from the corpse golem essence. However, as Bjorn listened, he realized something important. Despite being such a renowned mage, Dayan himself did not fully understand the ring's true hidden potential. Recognizing this, Bjorn accepted the ring as payment without hesitation. As he prepared to leave, Raven reminded him of his promise to assist with her research on the corpse golem essence twice a week, and he agreed, while she worried whether he would actually remember their arrangement. After he left, Raven apologized to her mentor for making him give away such a valuable item, but Dayan dismissed it with a smug expression, claiming that the ring was practically unsellable and only worth around 1.5 million stones on the market, secretly thinking that the barbarian would be furious once he eventually discovered its real value. Bjorn stepped out of the grand doors of the magic tower into the bright daylight, reflecting on how mages were supposed to be the smartest individuals in the world, yet Raven herself had not even known how to obtain something as simple as goddess tears, and that realization led him to a firm conclusion that compared to his accumulated knowledge from the game, even powerful mages were like inexperienced beginners, completely unaware of the true value of certain items like the Frost Spirit Ring. As night fell, Bjorn returned to the inn where he had previously stayed, only to find the innkeeper shocked to see him alive, having already assumed he was dead, and the man awkwardly admitted that he had cleared out Bjorn's room in his absence. Bjorn immediately demanded to know what had happened to his belongings, only to be told that they had been thrown away, which caused his anger to flare as he stepped closer and reminded the man that he had already paid for extra time. The terrified innkeeper quickly tried to calm him down, promising compensation, but Bjorn found himself pausing mid-anger as a strange thought crossed his mind. He began to question when violence had started feeling so natural to him, recalling how he had witnessed brutal killings without hesitation, how his own first kill had come far too easily, and how even escaping from prison had not shaken him the way it should have. Images of his blood-covered self in battle flashed through his mind as he realized that even the way he had spoken to Dayan earlier was something his former self, a 29-year-old office worker, would have never dared to do, and while he had initially blamed his surroundings, he now understood that something deeper was changing within him. He concluded that his new body, along with its battle instincts, was gradually reshaping his personality, making him more aggressive, more direct, and far more comfortable with violence, and as he thought about it, he couldn't help but wonder if he was slowly becoming a true barbarian himself. In the end, he accepted this change, recognizing that such a mindset was better suited for survival in this harsh world. Letting go of his earlier anger, Bjorn decided to settle the matter if the innkeeper paid him 30,000 stones, though the man protested at the amount and accidentally revealed that he had actually sold some of Bjorn's belongings instead of discarding them, which only made Bjorn narrow his eyes and point out the contradiction, reminding him of his earlier claim. After receiving compensation, Bjorn moved into a much better and more expensive inn, enjoying the upgrade as he took in the comfort of a proper room, appreciating the presence of windows and even a private bathtub, and as he lay back on the bed, he noted that the location was closer to the city square, already planning to meet Einar the next day to divide their earnings. The next day, Einar came running toward Bjorn while calling his name, tears in her eyes, and the moment she reached him, she was overwhelmed with relief that he was alive, immediately scolding him for disappearing for so long, while insisting that she always knew he would survive anything, while Bjorn awkwardly tried to respond, saying that a lot had happened. She then asked if he had heard the major news spreading across the city, and before he could answer properly, another barbarian jumped in excitedly and began talking about a so-called hero known as the Barbarian of Freedom, who was causing a massive uproar. Hearing that, Bjorn quickly realized they were talking about him, but he forced himself to act clueless, and casually asked what that barbarian's name was, and when the man replied that no one actually knew the hero's identity, Bjorn felt a wave of relief, concluding that the guild had intentionally kept his name hidden. The surrounding barbarians cheered proudly, celebrating the mysterious figure as one of their own, while recounting how he had single-handedly fought off countless enemies, cleared his false accusations, and led prisoners to freedom, praising him as the greatest barbarian and warrior, which only made Bjorn internally uneasy as he considered the possible consequences of such fame. Soon after, Bjorn and Einar made their way into the bustling middle-class district of Kommelby, which Einar visited for the first time with visible excitement, as the narration described the area as districts 2 to 5 surrounding the capital's first district, known as the center of the free market, where the middle class resided. After selling the loot taken from plunderers along with his old equipment for a total of 800,000 stones, Bjorn met Einar outside a shop and handed her share over, while mentally calculating that he had already earned an additional 500,000 stones before exiting the rupture. He gave Einar 300,000 stones, insisting it was a fair division, which left her completely stunned by the amount before she happily thanked him. But her attention was soon drawn elsewhere when she noticed people eating cotton candy, describing it in wonder as clouds on a stick, while Bjorn immediately recognized it and found her reaction amusing. Einar stared at the treat with sparkling eyes, clearly tempted as she clutched her pouch of money, and later, at a restaurant, she eagerly devoured cotton candy with amazement at human creativity, even joking that she could buy countless portions with her earnings, while Bjorn internally noted that she was starting to treat it like currency and reminded her to focus on actual food first. In a quieter moment, Einar softly thanked Bjorn for continuing to treat her the same way as before her transformation, catching him off guard, and she explained that ever since her appearance had changed, other barbarians no longer saw her as a warrior and had begun avoiding her, while humans now constantly approached her with unwanted attention, something she had never experienced before, leaving her flustered as she called his name again. Suddenly, she slammed the table and anxiously asked if she had become ugly, completely confusing Bjorn, and before he could even respond, she made a firm decision and declared that she would no longer enter the labyrinth with him. Although her altered appearance seemed like the reason, the truth was different, as an elder from a shrine renowned for swordsmanship had taken interest in her, and she had decided to undergo training under that master. Bjorn had asked if she could still spare even a single day for dungeon runs, but she explained that the training would confine her to the shrine for 6 months, which made him realize she was referring to a harsh training method he remembered from the game, and while he understood that this was an incredible opportunity for her, she made it clear that she would not ask him to wait or take her back later, promising instead to return one day as a warrior strong enough not to burden him. Now left alone, Bjorn sat drinking, processing her departure and acknowledging that he had no right to stop her from pursuing her own path, while memories surfaced of her struggles, including how she had once been forced to submit to a plunderer and had been left beaten and humiliated, and even during their recent battle, she had been unable to contribute as much as she wanted, making him realize that all those frustrations had likely driven her decision. Determined to move forward, Bjorn resolved to find a new party member, though he also considered continuing alone for the time being, reminding himself that he was far stronger now than he had been just 2 months ago, especially after absorbing both the corpse golem essence and the guardian vampire essence, which had drastically increased his stats and regeneration, making it unlikely that any enemy on the second floor could match him. Even so, he understood that higher floors required teamwork, as the system of the labyrinth was designed around party-based combat, and lacking certain roles could become fatal as difficulty increased. With that in mind, he decided it would be best to recruit companions of a similar level, and headed toward the magic tower to meet Raven, thinking that having a 6th-rank mage like her on his side would significantly accelerate his progress. Though as he entered her lab and saw the strange, torture-like chair, he couldn't help but feel that surviving her experiments might be his first challenge. When he proposed forming a party, Raven immediately rejected the idea, bluntly stating that a mage like her would never join a small barbarian team, and insisting that any group she joined must be high-ranked and include a priest. Conditions that Bjorn silently accepted as unrealistic for now, while she added that it would take him at least 3 years to meet those standards, confirming his expectation that she would refuse. Shifting the conversation, Raven presented him with a report analyzing the vampire essence, and while Bjorn found the analysis somewhat crude, he didn't care much, since he already knew his exact stats, though he still acknowledged how impressive the listed bonuses were, recognizing that guardian essences not only granted high stat boosts, but also came with powerful abilities. The first passive skill, Source of Darkness, allowed him to resist death as long as his heart remained intact, while another active skill, Sacrificial Seal, increased his physical power based on how many living beings were affected by his blood. A third skill, Owner of Blood, enabled him to temporarily copy an enemy's ability by absorbing their blood, and the final skill, Immortal, dramatically boosted his regeneration as his health decreased. Reflecting on this combination, Bjorn realized that he had effectively stacked multiple regeneration-based abilities, making his growth rate far faster than anything he had experienced in his 10 years of playing the game, and with that in mind, he decided it was time to head out again. However, just as he turned to leave, Raven stopped him abruptly and asked what he had shoved into the vampire's mouth during the battle, explaining that she had sensed a divine power at that moment. Bjorn immediately understood she was referring to the goddess Tears, but instead of answering honestly, he casually dismissed it, pretending she must have imagined it in the chaos, while even picking his nose to act indifferent. When Raven insisted that she had clearly seen it, Bjorn quickly excused himself, claiming he was hungry and needed to leave, then rushed out before she could press further, leaving her shouting after him in frustration as he switched straight into full barbarian sprint mode. Fuming, Raven became convinced that he was hiding something important and swore to uncover the truth, and later, inside the Magic Tower's library, she retrieved a large ancient tome using magic, recalling that she had once discovered valuable information about ruptures within it. As she searched through the book, she found the section describing the blood-tinted castle, though part of the text had been obscured by a stain, covering details about the golden mask and the location of the goddess Tears. Yet she remained certain that she had read about it before, and continued flipping through the pages until she located the relevant passage. The text described Goddess Tears as a consumable relic of unknown origin that released a powerful blessing when broken, and it further recorded that 150 years ago, a cardinal had used the last 3 known pieces during a dimensional crisis to save the Pope, making Raven realize with shock that the item was a genuine holy relic. As she compared the description to what she had witnessed Bjorn do, she began to question whether it could really be a coincidence, wondering how such a young barbarian could possibly know both the hidden location and the method of using such an item. And as her thoughts deepened, she found herself asking a single question: who exactly was Bjorn Jandal? The golden mask was an item obtained only by meeting special conditions after defeating the boss of the blood-tinted castle, and as Bjorn reviewed its properties, he recalled that it allowed the wearer to change their face for an entire month and could be used a total of 5 times. Back when he treated everything like a game, he had once sold the item for 500,000 stones without a second thought, since appearance meant nothing to him. But now, living in this world as reality, and remembering how easily he had been falsely imprisoned, he began to see its true value as a tool for survival, especially if he ever needed to escape the city unnoticed. With that in mind, he decided to keep the golden mask instead of selling it. Later, inside a lively tavern, ordinary patrons chatted among themselves, and one of them brought up recent news, asking if the others had heard what had happened, which quickly led to the revelation that the explorer clan Crystal Union had completely disbanded, a statement that immediately caught the attention of a white-haired elf woman nearby. She reacted with bitterness, commenting on how shocking it was for such a powerful clan to disappear overnight, while the narration explained that Crystal Union had rapidly grown by establishing a messaging network using magic stones, providing useful services for explorers on the first floor. However, others in the tavern dismissed the clan harshly, saying they had always disliked how Crystal Union pretended to act like proper explorers, while the elf woman reflected on how the group had originally supported commoners struggling with taxes, but had gradually become corrupt, eventually exploiting outsiders and committing repeated crimes against beginners. She remembered what they had done to her own sister as one of their many atrocities, and admitted that without Bjorn's intervention, something terrible would have happened during that incident. She had once considered taking action against the clan herself, but now she was hearing that someone else had already destroyed them, which made her listen more carefully as the story unfolded, and when she heard that their downfall was caused by a barbarian, her interest sharpened immediately. The gossipers went on to describe how this barbarian had escaped imprisonment, cleared his name, and even taken the district manager's daughter hostage during the incident, which ultimately led to the reconsideration of the anti-plunderer law. And the most shocking detail of all was that this so-called barbarian of freedom was only a 9th-rank explorer who had just completed his coming-of-age ceremony. Hearing all of this, Teresia began to suspect that the rumored barbarian might somehow be connected to her, but she initially dismissed the idea as too unlikely, only for doubt to creep back in as she questioned whether that barbarian was truly dead. And when she thought it through again, she realized that if the barbarian of freedom really was that same person, it would explain his week-long disappearance. As she reached for a door, she hesitated, uncertain whether what she was about to do was the right choice, but eventually entered Erwin's room, where she found her sitting on the bed surrounded by flickering elemental flames, tense and guarded, silently watching her approach. Teresia gathered her resolve, troubled by how she would break the news to her. Meanwhile, at the guild hall counter, a receptionist asked Bjorn what he needed, and he stated that he wanted to recruit a party of at least 4 explorers capable of tackling the 3rd floor or higher, prompting the clerk to request his identification and details, which he provided without hesitation. As she reviewed his information, she noted that Bjorn Jandal was ranked 7th, but then suddenly paused in shock, As she noticed something unusual, he had been assigned a rare 5-star rating. Confused by her reaction, Bjorn asked what that meant, but the flustered clerk quickly brushed it aside and handed him a list of suitable teams instead, making him suspect that the 5-star designation was some kind of special guild classification, though he decided not to dwell on it as long as it worked in his favor. Just then, he sensed someone approaching, and a familiar dwarf enthusiastically called out to him, recognizing him immediately despite his updated rank, confirming that it really was him. Sitting together at a tavern, Bjorn greeted Hikarad, who explained that they were waiting for one more person to join them, mentioning that the final recruit was apparently a mage, which in his mind already secured the strength of their party. Bjorn was surprised by the idea that such a rare role would join them, and as Hikarad waved toward the newcomer, Bjorn found himself wondering who it could be, still finding the situation hard to believe. Soon, a cheerful man in robes approached them with a spellbook in hand, greeting both Bjorn and Hikarad enthusiastically, and introducing himself as Lior Dwalki, stating that he had come specifically to join their party. Hikarad welcomed him warmly and asked if he was the mage assigned by the guild, while Bjorn, still skeptical, concluded that Dwalki must indeed be the one they were expecting. Hikarad introduced himself as a 6th rank explorer, and Dwalki proudly revealed that he was an 8th rank royal mage, which shocked Hikarad as it meant he served the royal family of Rafdonia rather than being affiliated with the Magic Tower or the guild. Bjorn quickly understood that Dwalki operated independently and wondered why Hikarad seemed unaware of such distinctions, while Dwalki, impressed by Bjorn's composure, asked for his name, leading Bjorn to introduce himself and immediately take control of the conversation, bluntly questioning why an 8th rank mage would choose to explore the labyrinth when most in his position preferred the safety and stability of city life. Internally, Bjorn suspected that Dwalki lacked the ability to progress on higher floors and was seeking opportunity through exploration instead, while Dwalki confidently explained that his goal was to become a renowned explorer and bring honor to Baron Martoin's family, which made Hikarad realize that he had some distant noble connection, though Bjorn quickly concluded that the relationship was too weak to hold real significance. Dwalki assured them that he had no intention of treating anyone as inferior, but Bjorn remained doubtful, privately considering him inexperienced, overly ambitious, and possibly unreliable, yet he ultimately decided to accept him anyway, reasoning that simply having a mage in the party would attract stronger recruits. As expected, more capable applicants began to show interest, and over the next several days, Bjorn and Hikarad reviewed candidates together, with Bjorn doing most of the evaluation work while Hikarad occasionally approved selections, until they finally confirmed their team lineup. With the party now complete, they also upgraded their equipment, and Bjorn proudly showcased his new armor and shield, later visiting the library where the blue-haired receptionist silently stared at his flashy gear and asked what he was wearing, prompting him to eagerly explain that it was Latinium armor along with a matching shield, even demonstrating his new expandable backpack and boasting about the increase in his carrying capacity. The receptionist, unimpressed, simply stated that there had been complaints and ordered him to remove his armor inside the library, leaving Bjorn to conclude that she clearly had no appreciation for his enthusiasm or jokes. Later, Bjorn walked through the city streets in simple, casual clothes, blending in far more easily than before, when something unusual caught his attention, prompting him to turn into a narrow alley where he spotted a pitiful sight: a barbarian slumped against the wall, looking weak and completely unarmed. That alone was enough to alarm Bjorn, because among barbarians, even the poorest always carried a weapon, and seeing one without it was practically unheard of. He approached carefully and addressed the man, whose fearful eyes immediately locked onto Bjorn's armored figure, clearly intimidated, but Bjorn calmly reassured him that he meant no harm, and asked why he had no weapon and what he was doing there. The man stammered nervously, explaining that he had sold his weapon because he had no money left, and as Bjorn listened, he couldn't help but notice how strangely polite the man sounded for a barbarian. Connecting all the clues, Bjorn quickly reached a conclusion: this wasn't a normal barbarian, but another player like himself. He introduced himself as Jandel's son Bjorn, and the man replied hesitantly that he was Leon's son, Tarakan, which only confirmed Bjorn's suspicion further, leading him to internally label Tarakan as an evil spirit, inhabiting a barbarian's body. Later, at a tavern, Tarakan devoured the food Bjorn had bought him with desperate hunger, tears forming in his eyes as he repeatedly vowed never to forget this kindness, while Bjorn observed that Tarakan had reached adulthood only a month before him, making their circumstances oddly similar. As Tarakan explained his situation, Bjorn pieced everything together, realizing that despite entering this world, Tarakan had never even stepped into the labyrinth, instead getting lost and avoiding it entirely. Bjorn immediately assumed the truth that Tarakan had fled out of fear of monsters, reasoning that slipping away from the crowd of excited barbarians on the first day would have been easy, and from there, Tarakan had likely tried to survive in the city, but failed to find work due to discrimination against barbarians. This led Bjorn to question whether players were truly the ones capable of opening the Abyss boss room, because someone strong enough to achieve that should have understood these hardships and still chosen to face the labyrinth. Pressing him further, Bjorn asked what Tarakan had done afterward, only to learn that he had continued avoiding the labyrinth entirely, which shocked him, leading him to scold Tarakan for skipping it again. While Tarakan argued that he couldn't fight monsters without a weapon, Bjorn snapped back, pointing out that he should have entered when he still had resources, wondering whether he had even played the game at all, and eventually learning that Tarakan had been kicked out after running out of money. Everything after that matched Bjorn's expectations. Months of suffering through cold, hunger, and illness, all while being rejected even by other barbarians, and as he listened, Bjorn couldn't help but wonder how someone so helpless had even survived for 3 months, realizing that if he himself had run away in fear on the first day, he might have ended up exactly like Tarakan. After finishing his story, Tarakan anxiously asked if Bjorn felt enough pity to help him, insisting that he still had knowledge of the labyrinth and could be useful as a guide, but Bjorn flatly rejected the idea of entering the labyrinth with him, and when Tarakan began to panic, Bjorn clarified that he would help in a different way. He handed Tarakan 150,000 stones and told him to buy a weapon and enter the labyrinth on his own, and although Tarakan was deeply moved and promised to repay him someday, Bjorn cut him off coldly, telling him to leave because he was tired. As Tarakan cheerfully agreed and tried to say he would visit again, Bjorn stopped him firmly, calling him by his full name and warning him that no matter what happened with the money, whether he wasted it or became rich, he was never to seek him out again. He made Tarakan confirm that he understood, and later, alone in his room, Bjorn reflected on the encounter, admitting to himself that his behavior had been harsh, and as memories of his past surfaced, he began to question whether they had influenced his decision. He considered that a purely logical person would call his actions foolish, while an emotional person might say he hadn't done enough, and in the end, he accepted that both perspectives were valid, even acknowledging that his actions might have been hypocritical, yet still believing that it was the best choice he could make. Time passed, and eventually the day came for entering the labyrinth once again. As the party stepped into the first-floor crystal cave, where Dwalki looked around in amazement and asked what they should do next, while Bjorn internally referred to him as an inexperienced 25-year-old 8th-rank mage, silently judging his excitement. Braun Rottmiller, a 34-year-old 7th-rank human explorer with 8 years of experience, suggested that they pause and assess their surroundings first, which Bjorn agreed with internally, considering Rottmiller the most balanced and sensible member of the group. Hikarod, the 6th-rank dwarf explorer, stood as the team's leader, while Bjorn himself took on the role of the 7th-rank barbarian tank. The final member, Misha Karlstein, a 25-year-old 7th-rank beast human explorer with 5 years of experience, spoke in a peculiar way, ending nearly every sentence with Nia, claiming it was simply part of her nature, making her unlike anyone Bjorn had ever met. Hikarod jokingly referred to her as a princess, which she immediately rejected while threatening him in annoyance, and as Bjorn watched the interaction, he vaguely recalled that she might actually be the 13th princess of some tribe, though he couldn't remember the details clearly. Rottmiller soon signaled that it was time to move, instructing everyone to stay close together as they advanced through the cave, his focus fixed on the guiding instrument in his hand as he carefully led the way. Thanks to Rottmiller's navigation skills, they managed to reach the portal to the 2nd floor in just 10 hours, which was an impressive pace, but upon arrival, Rottmiller noticed that another party had already reached it before them, leaving him slightly frustrated despite knowing they had moved efficiently. Bjorn, on the other hand, considered their time more than acceptable and silently appreciated Rottmiller's guide-type ability that allowed him to sense the direction of portals, finding himself pleasantly surprised by the ranger's competence before giving the order for the team to proceed through the portal. Even so, he couldn't help but feel a slight regret at missing the experience reward for being the one to open it, recalling how he could have exploited a known trick he once used with Einar to gain extra experience, but deciding against using it now since he didn't fully trust his current teammates yet, resolving to save that method for a time when he could rely on his party completely. As they stepped through, a system message announced their arrival in the beast lair on the 2nd floor, and the group entered a foul-smelling valley filled with decay, where Bjorn immediately recognized that this region connected to the eastern side of the 1st floor and was dominated by beast-type monsters. The stench hit them instantly, and Hikarod checked on Dwalki, who was already struggling, gagging and begging him not to talk while he tried to hold himself together, while Misha loudly complained about how filthy everything was. Bjorn himself noted how overwhelmingly disgusting the environment was, the smell alone making it difficult to endure, and he briefly checked on Rottmiller, wondering if his smell-based essence made things worse, but Rottmiller calmly replied that he was used to it, and warned everyone to stay close, due to the many hidden waste puddles scattered throughout the terrain. As they moved forward, Their boots squelched through the muck, the party navigating the maze-like valley where there were no traps, but where a skilled pathfinder like Rottmiller was essential. And although the monsters here were relatively weak compared to their combined strength, the team easily cut through them, slaughtering packs of great razor-mane wolves and steadily gaining small amounts of experience. They continued their advance, taking down various beasts, such as werewolves, saber-toothed tigers, and wall moles, accumulating more experience with each encounter, and by nightfall, they established a routine thanks to Dwalki's alarm spell, which allowed them to rotate 4 guards while he himself enjoyed a full 6 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Even so, Dwalki questioned why such precautions were necessary when his alarm magic was already active, but Hikarad explained that the spell only detected monsters, not other dangers, emphasizing that in the labyrinth, other explorers were often far more dangerous than any creature they might face. Hearing that, Dwalki grew uneasy and asked if it was really true, but Hikarad simply told him to rest, assuring him that he didn't need to take a watch. While nearby, Bjorn silently observed the exchange, forming a quiet conclusion in his mind that this expedition might very well be their last one with Dwalki. On the second day, shortly after midday, Rottmiller pointed ahead and informed the group that the portal to the 3rd floor was just up ahead, where they planned to begin hunting 7th to 8th rank monsters. Bjorn reflected on what awaited them, recalling that the 3rd floor, Pilgrim's Passage, was a massive shared map that connected multiple second-floor routes into one central area, and he knew that their starting position would depend entirely on where they entered from, silently hoping they would land in a favorable location. Misha, curious, asked Bjorn if he had ever been to the 3rd floor before, and he confirmed that he had, which prompted her to mention that it had taken her an entire year to reach that level, leading Bjorn to ask how long it had taken her to reach the 4th floor. She estimated around 2 years. And Hikarad casually remarked that his own progression had been similar, which annoyed Misha, who pointed out that Bjorn had already reached a high level much faster despite having less experience, while Hikarad jokingly attributed it to her background. Before the exchange could escalate, Rottmiller sharply told them to stop arguing, and both Misha and Hikarad quickly apologized, though Bjorn could sense that Rottmiller was more irritated than usual, understanding that as the only pathfinder in the group, he was carrying a heavy responsibility and had little patience for distractions. A system message soon announced that they had entered the 3rd floor, Pilgrim's Passage, and as they emerged from the portal into a region known as Steelstone Valley, Rottmiller suddenly sensed danger and raised an alarm. Bjorn reacted instantly, shouting for Rottmiller to retreat, while rushing forward himself with his shield raised, just as a massive horned beast charged straight toward them. Bjorn braced himself and intercepted the monster's attack, his shield absorbing the crushing force as he struggled to hold his ground, shocked to realize that multiple monsters had gathered right in front of the portal, an extremely dangerous situation. The impact nearly overwhelmed him, and he understood just how close he had come to being crushed, especially when he noticed a nearby dwarf who had failed to withstand a similar blow, his shield shattered under the force, though Hikarad immediately activated his emergency recovery skill to stabilize himself. Recognizing the enemy, Hikarad identified the creatures as 7th rank monsters called Iantro, and ordered Bjorn to hold the line so they wouldn't be pushed back toward the portal, and as Bjorn steadied himself, he watched Hikarad recover and internally reassured himself that he wasn't envious of the dwarf's resilience. He recalled that the Iantro possessed an ability called weight balance, which gave them strong resistance to knockback, and as Hikarad planted his foot firmly into the ground, a system message confirmed that he had activated the same skill, anchoring himself against the charging beast. At the same time, another message appeared announcing that Dwalki had cast an 8th rank curse spell, Corruption, which immediately took effect, causing the affected Iantro to howl in confusion as dark energy wrapped around it. Dwalki, surrounded by swirling cursed power, focused intensely on maintaining the spell, earning praise from Hikarad, who seized the opportunity and charged forward, declaring that he would finish the monster. With Dwalki preparing additional support, the battered creature was overwhelmed and blasted away by their combined assault. Meanwhile, Misha suddenly warned that one of the monsters was still alive. She leapt into action, launching herself from above while calling upon her essence, diving toward the remaining Iantro and delivering a powerful slash across its flank. The beast let out a final scream before collapsing under the attack, and a system message confirmed its defeat, along with the experience gained. As the fight ended, Bjorn began to question why such monsters had been waiting right at the portal, and he immediately asked Rottmiller if he could detect any other people nearby, prompting the ranger to activate his body warmth detection skill. A system notice confirmed the search, and the thermal scan revealed no one in the immediate vicinity, leading Rottmiller to report that the area was currently clear. However, he added that faint traces of human presence remained, indicating that others had been there just moments earlier and had likely retreated after observing the battle from a distance, which led Hikarad to worry that they had been deliberately set up, though Rottmiller clarified that the trap was probably not aimed specifically at them. He explained that plunderers often use this tactic, luring monsters toward portals, so that newly arrived explorers would be attacked immediately upon entry, leaving them weakened and easy targets for ambush. Misha, hearing this, suggested that they should hunt down those plunderers for profit, since eliminating them would also bring rewards. But Rottmiller cautioned that without clear evidence, pursuing them could backfire and result in their own party being accused instead. Misha countered bluntly that dead plunderers couldn't testify, while Hikarad nervously suggested that it would be safer to simply leave a warning at the portal and move on, choosing not to take unnecessary risks. And meanwhile, Dwalki listened to the conversation with unease, clearly shaken by the reality of how dangerous other explorers could be. As they continued walking, Misha casually praised Rottmiller's knowledge, admitting she had never even heard of such a tactic before, and mentioning that encounters with plunderers were actually quite rare, which immediately caught Bjorn off guard because it completely contradicted his own experience. Curious, he asked her how often she had encountered plunderers, and she calmly replied that it had only happened around 8 times over the past 5 years, which made Bjorn blurt out in disbelief that the number was ridiculously low, revealing that he himself had already run into plunderers 5 times in just the last 3 months, including the incident from earlier that day. The group reacted with amusement, joking that Bjorn's luck must be absolutely terrible, even comparing his situation to the chaotic and dangerous era from centuries ago, when plunderers were far more common. And although such incidents had declined significantly in recent times, they teased that Bjorn's misfortune alone might have attracted the plunderers they had just encountered, leaving him internally sinking into frustration over how absurd his situation felt. Seeing this, Rottmiller scolded the others for making fun of him, pointing out that Misha herself was unusually lucky, and then sharing his own experience of encountering plunderers only once every 3 months or so, which Bjorn noted was still far less frequent than his own encounters, making the gap feel even more ridiculous. When the others noticed his gloomy reaction, Bjorn simply brushed it off and told them to keep moving, unwilling to dwell on it further. As they advanced, they encountered and defeated various monsters along the way, including wormstones, iron falcons, and Steel Valley Guardians, steadily progressing through the area until Rottmiller eventually decided that they would set up camp near the edge of the region for the night and continue to the next area the following day. Bjorn quickly realized that the seemingly awkward campsite had been deliberately chosen because it had a relatively low concentration of monsters, reinforcing his impression of Rottmiller's reliability. Around the campfire, Hikarad checked on Dwalki, noting that he had seemed unwell for some time, and while Dwalki remained silent at first, Bjorn observed that the usually talkative mage now looked completely drained and dejected. Sitting quietly by the fire, Dwalki finally spoke, admitting that his romanticized vision of exploration had been completely shattered, and he worried that the others now saw him as naive, acknowledging that his thoughts might sound childish. He reflected on everything he had witnessed, especially the existence of plunderers, and how the reality of explorers killing one another had shaken him deeply, realizing that some people in this world murdered without hesitation, while others spoke casually about profiting from such acts. Dwalki admitted that the world he had stepped into was nothing like the heroic fantasy he had once imagined, and he confessed that if he continued down this path, there might come a day when he himself would have to kill another person. He revealed that throughout the journey, he had been mentally preparing himself for that possibility, and when Bjorn asked if he truly felt ready, Dwalki's eyes hardened with determination as he listened, eventually answering that he was prepared, yet still admitting that he wasn't sure whether he could actually go through with it when the moment came. Bjorn noted that his resolve was clearly mixed with fear and uncertainty, while Hikarad felt a quiet sympathy for him. Even so, Bjorn thought that Dwalki was still better than the kind of people who boasted loudly only to collapse when faced with real danger, and Rottmiller added that it was actually a good sign that Dwalki wasn't arrogant, explaining that such honesty made him more reliable than someone who was blindly overconfident. After a moment, Rottmiller asked the group to give him some time, saying there was something he wanted to show them, and as they followed him to a higher vantage point, they were left speechless by the sight that unfolded before them. A breathtaking night landscape stretched out in the distance, filled with floating lights and a glowing tower far away, creating a surreal and mesmerizing view that captivated everyone present. Rottmiller explained that this phenomenon could only be seen at this specific time, and Misha openly admired its beauty, while he added that no one truly understood why it occurred only on the 3rd floor, a mystery that made it even more fascinating. Hikarad agreed that the view was incredible, and Dwalki, blushing slightly, admitted that understanding the reason didn't matter when the sight itself was so breathtaking. Rottmiller then asked Dwalki if witnessing something like this gave him the courage to continue exploring, and as Dwalki gazed out at the glowing scenery, he quietly contemplated his answer, lost in thought, until the lights eventually faded away, and the labyrinth returned to its usual darkness. That night, as the others rested around the campfire, Bjorn remained on watch duty, observing the group in silence, and while doing so, he noticed something subtle. Dwalki stayed awake longer than the others, clearly troubled by his thoughts, before eventually his breathing steadied, signaling that he had finally fallen asleep. The next day, As they continued traveling deeper into the third floor, Bjorn quietly calculated his progress and realized he had earned just over 50 experience points so far, noting that he needed a total of 150 experience to reach level 4, and since he was currently level 3, he could absorb up to 3 essences. Having already absorbed 2, he recognized that he still had 1 slot available, which led him to decide that there was no need to rush leveling up, instead resolving to reserve that final slot for a truly valuable essence rather than wasting it on something mediocre. Their movement came to a halt when Rottmiller suddenly raised his hand and announced that they had reached their destination, pointing ahead to a fortified palisade and explaining that everything beyond it was classified as the orc habitat. This region contained the highest density of monsters on the 3rd floor, and that only creatures of 8th rank or higher appeared within it, making it one of the most dangerous yet rewarding hunting grounds available before attempting the 4th floor. Accepting the risk, the party moved forward, understanding that although the area ranked 2nd in difficulty, it offered the best opportunity for efficient hunting, and Hikarad suggested that they work together here first and adjust their long-term plans based on how well they perform. Not long after entering, Rottmiller spotted a group of incoming orcs and immediately alerted the team, and as the lead orc growled in response, the entire group of enemies charged toward them with weapons raised. Hikarad quickly rallied everyone, ordering them to follow their practiced formation, and the orc warriors advanced aggressively, wielding axes, bows, and even preparing spells. Dwalki responded by casting an 8th rank offensive spell, Ice Spear, causing massive spears of ice to form and launch forward, impaling the charging orcs from a distance while Rottmiller supported him with ranged attacks, and at the same time, Bjorn and Hikarad held the front line as tanks, bracing themselves against the incoming assault. The two of them clashed head-on with the orc warriors, blocking heavy strikes with their shields while absorbing the pressure of the assault, and according to their strategy, Misha moved swiftly through the battlefield, targeting enemies that slipped too close and cutting them down with her twin blades in rapid succession. However, the situation suddenly escalated when an orc witch doctor appeared and unleashed a swirling red aura, casting a berserk enhancement on its allies, instantly tripling the physical resilience of the affected warriors for 10 seconds and making them far more dangerous. The empowered orc's eyes glowed red as it locked onto the party and charged forward with overwhelming force, and despite Bjorn and Hikarad striking it repeatedly, the monster pushed through their defenses. Recognizing the danger, Bjorn immediately shouted that one had broken through, and Rottmiller reacted at once, ordering Dwalki to stay behind him as he stepped forward to intercept the charging orc, raising his shield to block the massive blow while protecting the mage from harm. The berserk warrior snarled in frustration as its momentum was halted, and Misha seized the moment, precisely timing the end of the 10-second buff before rushing in to finish the weakened enemy. System messages confirmed the defeat of the orc archer and the berserk warrior, granting the party experience, and as the final enemy dissipated into smoke under Misha's strike, the remaining orc witch doctor attempted to retaliate, only for Bjorn to close the distance instantly and decapitate it in a violent spray of blood. Another message confirmed its defeat along with the experience gained, bringing the battle to an end. Afterward, the group relaxed slightly, commenting on how intense the fight had been and how their hearts were still racing, while Bjorn analyzed the encounter and estimated that it had taken around 8 minutes to complete. He concluded that although their formation provided strong defense and stability, their overall damage output was somewhat lacking. Yet despite that, he felt satisfied with the team's composition and found himself growing comfortable fighting alongside them. As they continued deeper into the labyrinth, they steadily battled through multiple groups of orcs, with Hikarad leading the charge at the front, while Rottmiller provided precise crossbow support from behind, and as the groups of enemies grew larger, their coordination continued to hold. At one point, they even faced a 7th rank Great Orc Warrior, a significantly stronger variant, but even that opponent was defeated without much difficulty due to their teamwork. Even so, as everything seemed to be progressing smoothly, Bjorn couldn't shake a familiar thought, realizing from experience that misfortune had a habit of appearing precisely when things started going too well. Suddenly, an unfamiliar older mage appeared and began chanting a strange incantation, and before anyone could react, a massive explosion erupted nearby, blasting the area with fire and debris as the shockwave tore through the surroundings. Bjorn instinctively raised his shield in panic, realizing that if that attack had landed directly on them, their entire party would have been wiped out instantly. As the smoke slowly cleared, a lone figure stood calmly before them, and the old mage declared that the orc habitat belonged to the Jarwi clan, ordering them to leave immediately. Bjorn immediately recalled from his knowledge of Dungeon and Stone that while it was originally a single-player game, clans in this world could claim regions of the labyrinth and restrict access to hunting grounds, though such territorial control required significant power and effort and was usually reserved for boss zones or areas with rare monsters. Because of that, He couldn't understand why a powerful clan would bother claiming a relatively ordinary third-floor field. Hikarad, clearly surprised, pointed out that the Jarwi clan was known to operate on the 6th floor and demanded to know why they were here, but the elder coldly replied that he had no obligation to explain anything. Hikarad muttered that while strong clans could legally control parts of the labyrinth, he had never heard of this particular habitat being officially assigned to them, and then bluntly questioned whether they were even who they claimed to be. The elder's expression hardened at the accusation, calling it an interesting claim as both sides tensed, the atmosphere turning hostile as they prepared for possible conflict. Bjorn thought Hikarad was being a bit too aggressive, but he understood that it came from his responsibility as the team's leader, and before things could escalate further, Misha suddenly moved behind Bjorn, clutching him tightly as she trembled, clearly trying to avoid someone. Bjorn immediately noticed her fear and wondered what had triggered such a reaction, and at that moment, the elder called out, asking if the halfling among them was someone he recognized. Misha froze, her eyes widening with fear, and quietly revealed to Bjorn that the red-haired scout standing among the opposing group was her brother, Talon. The moment she acknowledged him, Talon snapped at her angrily, telling her not to call him her brother in public, forcing her to hurriedly apologize. The elder then turned to Talon and asked if she was indeed his sister, which he confirmed without hesitation, but he immediately cut off any attempt at leniency, stating that the matter was purely familial and that their father wouldn't care what happened to her. Accepting that stance, the elder finally explained their situation, stating that the clan urgently needed the essence of the great orc warrior for their own purposes, and asking Bjorn's group to leave the area for the time being. Bjorn found this reasoning suspicious, silently questioning why a powerful 6th floor clan would go to such lengths for an essence that wasn't even considered rare, suspecting that there was likely another hidden motive behind their actions. The elder added that since they were already actively hunting in the area, there would be no monsters left for Bjorn's party anyway, making it clear that even if they stayed, their efforts would be sabotaged, and Bjorn quickly understood that this was less of a request and more of a warning. He knew that within the labyrinth, strength dictated everything, and pushing back against a clan of that level would be suicidal, even as both he and Hikarad internally cursed their helplessness. Bjorn sympathized with Hikarad's frustration, but also recognized the importance of knowing when to retreat, realizing that survival mattered more than pride, and just as Hikarad seemed ready to back down, the situation took an unexpected turn when Dwalki suddenly stepped forward. Bjorn was caught off guard as Dwalki moved ahead, clearly intending to intervene and resolve the situation himself, and the mage cheerfully introduced himself as an 8th rank mage devoted to magic, addressing the elder respectfully as a senior. However, instead of acknowledging him, the old mage immediately dismissed him harshly, calling him garbage and shocking everyone present. The elder's tone turned openly hostile as he rejected being called a senior, ridiculing Dwalki for only knowing basic spells and relying on cheap tricks, going as far as to say that his shamelessness was disgusting and that he had no right to call himself a mage. The brutal insults left Dwalki stunned and speechless, his confidence collapsing instantly as Bjorn felt a twinge of sympathy for him. Hikarad angrily protested, saying the elder had gone too far, while Bjorn grew visibly nervous, clearly wanting to leave rather than escalate the situation, but the elder remained unmoved, insisting that he had only spoken the truth. Enraged by this, Hikarad activated his lightning ability, his body crackling with energy as he prepared to attack, and before anyone could stop him, he charged forward recklessly toward the members of the 6th floor clan, screaming as he led with his shield. Bjorn's heart dropped at the sight, fully aware that engaging such powerful opponents here would be a death sentence. The elder stood completely calm, his expression sharpening as he prepared to respond, and just as the clash seemed inevitable, Bjorn shouted Hikarad's name and rushed forward, grabbing him mid-charge and slamming him forcefully into the ground to stop him. The sudden intervention stunned everyone, with Dwalki and Misha watching in horror at how close they had come to disaster, while Rotmiller stood tense and sweating, fully aware of how badly things could have gone. Bjorn pinned Hikarad down firmly, ordering him to regain control as the dwarf coughed from the impact, and Bjorn was still shaken by how close they had come to provoking a fatal fight. The elder simply looked on with a mocking expression, remarking that they had nearly died and that they should be grateful to their barbarian teammate for stopping them in time. After being driven away, Hikarad lowered his head and sincerely apologized to the team, admitting that he had lost control of himself and acted impulsively in the heat of the moment. Rotmiller responded firmly, pointing out that Hikarad's reckless action had nearly gotten all of them killed, and Hikarad apologized once again without resistance. Bjorn, watching this, silently approved of Rotmiller's scolding and even wished he would push harder, though Rotmiller ultimately chose to forgive Hikarad since nothing irreversible had happened. He added that while the action had been rash, he still respected the fact that Hikarad had stood up for a teammate, which caught Bjorn off guard, as he privately thought Rotmiller was far too soft to be a proper leader, and that he himself would have torn Hikarad apart verbally for such stupidity. Misha then stepped forward and apologized as well, saying things might have gone more smoothly if she hadn't been there, but Dwalki immediately objected, insisting that the only reason they were let off with a warning was because of her presence. The atmosphere shifted unexpectedly as Misha became emotional, calling out to the mage with gratitude, while the others watched the exchange with mild confusion. Bjorn internally cringed at the sudden emotional tone, wondering if he was the odd one out for finding the entire moment awkward and slightly unbearable. Misha began explaining why she avoided talking about her family, revealing that she alone had failed to form a spirit beast contract, which was a defining trait among therianthropes. It was explained that therianthropes could form contracts with ancient spirit beasts that manifested in various ways, some summoning their beasts to fight alongside them, others becoming possessed to enhance their physical abilities, or receiving blessings that granted unique powers. However, only a select few were chosen, and since Misha belonged to the prestigious Karlstein bloodline, her inability to form such a contract brought shame upon her entire family. She recalled how things had once been different, remembering her childhood when she played happily with her siblings, but everything changed once she reached adulthood, without forming a contract, as her family began to ignore her and treat her as an outcast. Her relatives labeled her a halfling, accusing her of being of mixed blood, and she remembered her brother glaring at her with contempt, while others branded her an illegitimate child. With her mother gone and no way to defend herself against those accusations, she eventually fled her home to escape the discrimination and learned to fight on her own, which ultimately led her to become an explorer. Hikarad listened with sympathy and thanked her for sharing something so personal, while Misha in turn expressed her gratitude for him standing up for the team earlier, acknowledging him as a true comrade. Inspired by the moment, Hikarad decided to share his own story, explaining that his original dream had been to become a blacksmith, but he had lacked the talent to succeed, spending 10 years without even graduating from training. Eventually, needing money to survive, he abandoned that dream after turning 30 and became an explorer instead. Dwalki then joined in, admitting that he might be the least talented among them, revealing that he had only entered the world of magic due to his family's status, but had failed to qualify for the magic tower. He recalled standing before the towering structure, unable to enter, painfully aware of his limitations, and reflected that if he had been a true mage, the earlier confrontation with the elder mage might have turned out differently. He remembered the elder's furious expression as a symbol of his own inadequacy, and believed that he might have earned at least a little respect if he had been more capable. Hikarod immediately rejected that way of thinking, declaring that the elder mage was the real problem and that Dwalki himself was a good mage, which moved Dwalki to tears as he thanked him. Rotmiller then spoke, admitting that despite working with many teams over the years, he had never experienced this kind of emotional bonding before, while Bjorn internally thought the entire situation was making him sick. To his shock, Rotmiller then confessed that he also had something to apologize for, explaining that he had felt irritated earlier when Hikarad and Misha spoke about age and experience, realizing that his frustration stemmed from envy. He admitted that he had resented them for complaining despite being born into non-human races without fully understanding their struggles, and Misha gently responded by pointing out that humans also had their own advantages, noting that talented humans could become extremely powerful. Bjorn silently agreed with that, but kept his thoughts to himself, recognizing that such opportunities were limited to the exceptionally gifted. Hikarad then lightened the mood by joking that their group was basically a team of misfits or halflings in their own way, suggesting that they should look out for one another, and everyone agreed, resolving to support each other as they continued their journey together. Then, as if on cue, all eyes turned toward Bjorn, silently expecting him to share something as well, and he immediately felt cornered, internally panicking as he tried to come up with something to say, completely unaccustomed to this kind of group confession. After a moment of hesitation, he abruptly blurted out that he had no mother, which made everyone pause awkwardly, unsure how to react, while even he wondered if that statement alone was enough. Doubling down, he loudly added that his mother had died right after giving birth to him, and that his father had disappeared in the labyrinth when he was still a child, declaring that even now, as an adult, he would never be able to see his parents again. Breathing heavily, he finished his hastily constructed tragic story and asked himself how that compared to the others, leaving the group visibly affected. Misha tearfully apologized for complaining about her own family without knowing his past. Dwalki reacted with sympathy, believing Bjorn had been quietly carrying this pain all along, and Hikarad reached out to comfort him, but Bjorn immediately rejected their attempts, raising his voice and insisting that he was completely fine. Despite his resistance, the group now saw him as the youngest and most pitiful among them, and resolved to treat him with even greater care, while Bjorn internally brushed it off, knowing that his story had been exaggerated. He reminded himself that regardless of everything, he had become a powerful barbarian who reached 7th rank in just 3 months, even if that journey involved being thrown into a brutal, game-like reality where he had died countless times. Just then, Misha suddenly noticed something off about him and called out, assuming he was still affected by thoughts of his mother, while Bjorn inwardly sighed at how absurd his situation had become. Rotmiller quickly shifted the conversation, asking what their next move should be and suggesting that they head toward the witch's forest. Bjorn immediately reacted internally to that suggestion, while Misha proposed an alternative route, only for Rotmiller to point out that it would take 6 days to reach. Dwalki then suggested that they could simply advance to the 4th floor, though he admitted it might not be ideal for close combat fighters, and Hikarad firmly opposed the idea, insisting that it was too early, and warning that many teams underestimated the fourth floor and ended up dying because of it. Bjorn recalled from his own knowledge that the Witch's Forest was not an efficient hunting ground and was typically visited only when necessary, realizing that Hikarod's true concern was the danger of the fourth floor. The narration elaborated that while the fourth floor mostly contained 7th and 8th rank monsters similar to the third, it also had the potential to spawn extremely dangerous 6th rank creatures, which were rare but almost guaranteed to be encountered eventually if one spent enough time there. Bjorn remembered how often he had died on that floor in the game due to lack of preparation, which made him understand Hikarod's caution. Even so, Bjorn stepped forward and stated firmly that they should challenge the fourth floor, arguing that their current team, with 2 strong tanks, was capable of handling it. He believed that with his newly acquired vampire essence and their overall composition, they could at least survive an encounter with a 6th rank monster, and although he acknowledged that their damage output was not ideal, he trusted that the mage and the experienced members could make up for that weakness. Misha and Dwalki exchanged uncertain looks, clearly nervous about following a barbarian's judgment. But after some discussion, they admitted that his reasoning made sense, which prompted Bjorn to snap that he could hear everything they were saying. Hikarod still looked uneasy, but eventually suggested settling the matter with a group vote, and as the narration skipped ahead, it was revealed that a decision had been reached. In the end, the party agreed to take the risk and move forward together to challenge the fourth floor. On the 3rd day inside the labyrinth, Rottmiller told the group it was time to make camp for the night, but Hikarod suggested pushing forward, since they still had energy left, only for Rottmiller to explain that a better campsite was still hours away, making it more efficient to rest where they were. Bjorn noted the time was exactly 9 p.m., the same as the previous nights, and realized that Rottmiller had been carefully pre-planning each stop by calculating distance and travel speed in advance, which impressed him deeply. Later, when Bjorn asked about the plan for the next day, Rottmiller replied that they should reach the Witch's Forest before noon, and Bjorn mentally compared him to a human GPS, finding his consistency and experience reassuring, as Rottmiller advised everyone to get proper rest before the difficult day ahead. Around the campfire, Misha volunteered to take the first watch and wished everyone good night as the rest of the group settled down. Sometime later, Bjorn was suddenly awakened by Rottmiller calling his name, and still half asleep, he assumed it was his turn for watch. But Rottmiller immediately clarified that wasn't the case, and warned him that trouble was approaching, not just from monsters, but from other people as well. As Bjorn focused, he realized that both monsters and explorers were indeed drawing near, and faint screams for help echoed through the forest as if someone was fleeing from danger. Rottmiller acknowledged that the situation might seem genuine, but reminded Bjorn of the earlier incident near the portal, where monsters had been used as bait, implying this could be another trap, and a quick flashback reinforced the memory of how plunderers had staged such a scenario before. Rottmiller then confirmed that the scents he detected now were identical to those from that previous encounter, concluding that whoever was approaching was deliberately targeting their party and pretending to be victims in order to infiltrate them. As the sounds grew closer, Misha began to panic and asked what they should do, but Bjorn quickly made a decision, seeing this as an opportunity to act on his own plan, and stepped forward alone to intercept the approaching group. Standing firmly in their path, he ordered them to stop and warned that he would crush their skulls if they took another step, completely blocking their advance. The approaching explorers immediately claimed that all their companions had been killed and begged for help, promising rewards as a group of orcs loomed behind them, but Bjorn ignored their pleas entirely, and instead ordered them to drop their weapons, carefully observing their reactions. He noticed that the orcs behind them weren't attacking and were simply watching, likely reassessing the situation now that more people were present, which only made Bjorn more certain of his suspicions and simplified his strategy. He gave the group a final ultimatum: disarm or leave, and after a moment of tense hesitation, the leader panicked and agreed, quickly throwing down his sword and pleading for assistance. Bjorn calmly instructed Rottmiller to collect all their weapons, and Rottmiller complied without hesitation, while one of the orcs clicked its tongue in visible frustration before the entire group of monsters began to withdraw silently into the forest. Shortly after, a blonde, beautiful woman stepped forward and formally thanked them, introducing herself as Elisa and claiming that Bjorn had saved their lives, while the artist highlighted her revealing outfit as Hikarod awkwardly cleared his throat in response. Hikarod introduced himself politely and expressed sympathy for their situation, clearly affected by her presence, while Bjorn internally noted that the dwarf had already fallen for her appearance. The two men accompanying her introduced themselves as Tayson, Irita, and Hans Argot, and upon hearing the name Hans, Bjorn recalled that a plunderer from his very first labyrinth expedition had shared the same name, finding the coincidence unsettling. Hans casually remarked that his name was common, and asked if Bjorn had known someone else with it, and Bjorn simply replied that he had, while thinking to himself that the man he once knew was already dead. Elisa then thanked Bjorn again with emotional sincerity, claiming that they would have died without his help, and attributing their survival to the protection of the god Leetless, which caught Rottmiller's attention as he asked if she was truly a priestess. She proudly confirmed that she served the light goddess, who governed exploration and relationships, speaking confidently about divine guidance. But despite this, Bjorn remained unconvinced and inwardly dismissed her as a plunderer, pretending to be something she wasn't. Hans then politely asked Elisa to examine his injury, and she readily agreed, and as Bjorn watched the scene unfold, he was shocked to realize that she was genuinely using divine healing magic, something that immediately threw the group into confusion. Misha panicked, wondering if they had misjudged her, while Rottmiller insisted that his earlier assessment had been accurate, though even Bjorn acknowledged that in this world, priestesses were regarded as truly sacred figures, making the situation far more complicated than expected. Elisa, smiling confidently, stated that her healing should be proof of her innocence and asked for their confiscated weapons to be returned, but Bjorn bluntly refused, leaving her visibly stunned. He explained that her status as a priestess might matter to humans, but barbarians followed their ancestors and were not bound by the same reverence, making it irrelevant to him. Instead, he demanded that they pay the reward for being saved first, seeing no reason to change his stance, even if she truly possessed divine power. And when Elisa nervously asked how much he expected, Bjorn calmly declared that their lives were worth 2 million stones. When she protested that they didn't have that kind of money, he forced her to promise repayment after leaving the labyrinth, making it clear that he trusted no one outside his own kind. He then added that if they lacked money, they could repay him with valuable items instead, specifically demanding the high-quality armor worn by her male companions, which left them visibly shaken, and after a moment of hesitation, Hans reluctantly agreed, admitting that their armor was worth far less than their lives, and accepting Bjorn's terms. After stripping the defeated enemies of their armor and weapons, Bjorn decided he had taken enough for now, clenching his hand as a reminder to himself that no matter how much he gained, he needed to stay sharp and alert in this world where danger never gave warnings. Nearby, Elisa calmly turned to the others and offered to heal anyone who was injured, her voice steady as if nothing was wrong. But in the very next instant, Bjorn moved. Without hesitation, he swung his mace down from behind in a lethal strike, following the most basic battlefield doctrine: eliminate the healer first. His eyes burned with cold, murderous focus as the blow landed, crushing Elisa's head completely and sending her body flying several meters away, smashing into the ground with such force that it left a crater as blood and debris scattered in all directions. Hikarad gasped in horror at the sight of Bjorn's blood-soaked weapon, while Dwalki and Misha screamed his name in shock, unable to process what had just happened, and Taysen and Hans panicked as well, demanding to know what he was doing. Bjorn, still splattered with Elisa's blood, turned toward them with an unsettling smile and calmly claimed it had been a mistake, saying he acted out of fear that they might be plunderers. His explanation only made things worse, as Taysen and Hans broke down completely, convinced they were about to be killed by lunatics, but Bjorn suddenly noticed something strange. Their fear wasn't directed at him anymore. Their eyes were fixed on something behind him. As he turned, he saw Taysen's face twist unnaturally as blood began to leak from his features, and in the next moment, dark purple energy erupted from his body, causing him to collapse lifelessly to the ground. Hans screamed in terror, while Hikarad immediately demanded to know if Dwalki had cast something, but the mage insisted in panic that he had done nothing at all. Then, from the shattered remains of Elisa's body, something impossible happened. Her corpse, mangled and broken, began to move as dark energy surged through it, and a warped, unnatural voice echoed from her, expressing surprise that Bjorn had recognized her as an enemy. Bjorn stared at the grotesque sight, realizing instantly that something had gone terribly wrong, and as Elisa's broken form rose again, twisted and soaked in blood, she demanded to know how he had discovered her true nature. Her body convulsed with dark power as she shrieked that it was already too late for them, and Bjorn could only grit his teeth in frustration, thinking bitterly that nothing in his life ever went smoothly. Rottmiller and Misha stood frozen in fear at the horrifying scene, but Bjorn quickly snapped at everyone to calm down, declaring that he would handle it, before immediately stepping forward and smashing Elisa's head again with even greater force. Her body collapsed once more, lying motionless as smoke rose from it, but Hikarad shouted in disbelief, accusing Bjorn of desecrating a corpse, unable to understand his brutality. Bjorn, still tense, admitted that he had acted out of fear, and argued that sometimes the best defense was overwhelming offense, knowing that if she came back again, there would be no room for hesitation. At that moment, a narration revealed the truth. Elisa belonged to a hidden class known as Karui's Priest, a rare class that could only be obtained by priests who reached the 5th floor. This class granted access to both divine abilities and cursed magic, but came with severe consequences, as Karui was an evil god, and anyone discovered to be his priest was executed immediately. To maintain such power, the user had to regularly sacrifice living beings, which explained why Elisa had become a plunderer, hunting others within the labyrinth. As if to confirm this, Elisa rose once more, her body now fully enveloped in dark energy, and she retaliated by casting a curse on Hans. Black energy wrapping around him and choking the life out of him as he collapsed dead at her feet. Standing there with a distorted face, partially fused with a skeletal mask of dark power, she lamented the loss of her two trusted subordinates, blaming Bjorn for their deaths. Bjorn responded coldly, mocking her even in that state, saying she was still blaming others for her own actions and concluding that her parents must have raised her poorly, then angrily pointing out that Hans and Taysen had died because of her and that she should have stayed dead the first time he crushed her skull. At the same time, he theatrically declared that he would avenge them as if they were comrades, even while internally feeling a twisted excitement at the thought of looting their gear afterward. Elisa then activated another ability, Death's Calling, causing the corpses of Hans and Taysen to twitch and rise once again, reanimated as undead servants. Hikarod panicked as he watched the transformation unfold, and the narration explained that while this skill usually summoned weak undead, using the bodies of her own subordinates created far stronger minions. With dark energy swirling around her, Elisa gave her command without hesitation, ordering the resurrected corpses to attack Bjorn's party, as the situation spiraled into a far more dangerous battle than before. One of the undead lunged forward, instantly forcing the battle into motion as Misha reacted without hesitation, darting in with glowing daggers, while Bjorn braced behind his shield and felt the sheer weight of the creature crashing into him like a relentless wave, and at the same time another undead slammed into Hikarod from the side, splitting their formation under pressure. Misha activated her poison attribute and carved through one of them with precise, flashing strikes, while Dwalki followed up with Ice Spear, launching sharp spikes that pinned an enemy in place, and for a brief moment, Bjorn noticed how smoothly the team was coordinating without even speaking, everything flowing naturally in the chaos. That brief confidence shattered immediately as Bjorn realized the problem and called it out, understanding that undead were highly resistant to both poison and ice, which meant their main sources of damage were being heavily reduced, and even clean hits were barely making a difference. He shouted to Rottmiller for support, and Rottmiller responded that he was almost ready before suddenly yelling for everyone to get back, then hurled a flaming bottle forward that smashed directly into Taysen's face and ignited him instantly, flames spreading across his undead body. Bjorn recognized at once how effective fire was against undead as the enemy burned, but before they could capitalize, Elisa calmly absorbed all the surrounding flames into herself, dark fire spiraling around her as she activated Fire of the Dead, and Bjorn watched in disbelief as every trace of fire vanished into her spell, instantly realizing their strongest counter had just been neutralized, and worse, divine power wasn't an option either, leaving them in a far more dangerous situation. He immediately switched tactics, ordering everyone to focus attacks on the priestess, while he and Hikarod held off the resurrected subordinates, knowing their earlier move of stripping the enemy's gear was the only reason they could even stall them now. Misha rushed past them toward Elisa, while Bjorn and Hikarod locked down the undead, their bodies straining under the pressure, and Elisa responded by summoning more magic to block Misha, but she kept advancing anyway, refusing to slow down. Then Elisa raised her hand and summoned a Shadow Guardian, causing dark, shifting forms to rise from the ground as Bjorn shouted a warning, his instincts flaring as the shadows began moving like living creatures, and Elisa's twisted voice commanded them to bring her enemies' heads as the mass surged forward. The battlefield turned chaotic as Misha slashed through shadows. Rottmiller fired supporting magic to weaken them, and Dwalki struggled behind an ice barrier trying to hold the line, while Elisa laughed and unleashed even more cursed power, and suddenly, Misha froze for a split second as her expression twisted in shock, realizing she had been cursed, while multiple shadow beasts converged on her at once. Before they could overwhelm her, Hikarod stepped in with lightning bursting from his weapon, cutting through the shadows and saving her, while Bjorn continued holding off both undead almost entirely on his own, pushing his body to its limit as Elisa, now furious, lashed out wildly and screamed the names of Hans and Taysen, blaming them even in death as her rage spiraled further. Bjorn mocked her coldly in the middle of the fight, pinning one undead and choking the other while telling her her subordinates were too busy being restrained by him to help, which only deepened the hatred burning in her eyes. Her expression twisted into something venomous as she swore she would never forget this humiliation, and in the next moment she began casting spiritification, and Bjorn's eyes widened in horror as he realized she was escaping, but it was already too late as she vanished upward in a pillar of dark energy, leaving behind a final curse that they would never leave the labyrinth alive. The battlefield fell into an uneasy silence as Bjorn cursed under his breath, knowing they had been just moments away from finishing her, yet she had escaped while leaving something far worse behind. System messages began flooding in immediately, listing curse after curse affecting his body: energy decrease, decomposition, stamina drain, tracking effects, vengeful spirit walking stacking rapidly until they exceeded 15, and Bjorn's expression darkened as he realized Elisa hadn't just fled, she had crippled him. He turned sharply to Dwalki and demanded the curses be removed, only for the mage to hesitate and admit he could cast curses but not dispel them, and for a moment Bjorn just stared in silence, before rage exploded inside him, as warnings continued flashing that his stats could suffer permanent damage. Without wasting another second, Bjorn began running, forcing his weakened body forward despite the constant drain on his stamina, brushing off Hikarod's concern while privately feeling close to collapse, realizing he had already been running for over 5 hours under these conditions, and that only the vampire essence was keeping him alive through its resistance to dark effects. While the others were only lightly affected, he alone carried the full weight of Elisa's curse, more than 15 stacked effects draining him relentlessly, and he calculated he had maybe 30% stamina left before his body would give out entirely. Rottmiller urged him to hold on, saying they were almost there, and through his blurred vision, Bjorn finally saw their destination ahead, a corrupted region marked by faint purple lights and an eerie atmosphere, with an ominous crow perched nearby as if watching them, and the boundary revealed itself as the Witch's Forest. A memory from earlier resurfaced, back when they sat at the campfire and discussed Elisa, when Bjorn explained that a Kurui's priest possessed power comparable to a fifth-floor explorer, and could have wiped them out if not for their earlier preparation, and he had already concluded then that she would come after them again before they could escape. He had warned them about the danger of being ambushed from behind while fighting monsters, and made his decision without hesitation, and now, with curses eating away at his body, and no time left to hesitate, that decision became reality. They had no choice but to move forward into the Witch's Forest.